Suddenly, the skies became covered with dark clouds, and with a deafening roar, the impregnable tower began to tremble, crack, and crumble, plunging everything around into chaos and panic. The bloody swords of the heroes stuck deep into the ground, as if silent witnesses to their harsh battle. They stood wearily watching as the majestic tower collapsed with a roar, swallowed up by chaos and dust. One of the heroes, without taking his eyes off the collapsing tower, quietly told the other that it was all over. Suddenly, Adam appears from the dust and chaos. Leaning on his staff and without one hand, with unshakable confidence in his voice, he says that this is not the end. A figure in a lion's skin cape emerges from the group of heroes, peering intently at Adam. This is Alec, the hero of Olympus. He told Adam that despite his immortality, such behavior in front of the external gods is unacceptable. A well-aimed throw of the hand sends the blue sphere towards Adam and Alec. Bob stepped out of the shadows, his figure in sharp contrast with the surrounding light. The heroes looked at each other in amazement when they saw Bob emerge from the darkness as a mysterious figure, shrouded in mystery. Bob sank sadly onto the stone, as if the weight of his thoughts had become too great for one person. He, with a heavy sigh, said that only he survived thanks to his unbridled strength and unyielding will, despite all the trials and dangers. These words shocked everyone present, forcing them to fall silent and look closely at Bob. He reiterated that everyone else was dead, while the color of the throne sphere suddenly changed. The heroes turned to the sphere from which strange, mystical sounds were heard, forcing them to tense up and listen carefully. In this sphere, the voice of one of the external gods was heard, to which Adam screamed in horror. Bob silently nodded, confirming his words. Bob stood up and sadly declared that they could not defeat the outer gods. Suddenly, a stranger in a long cloak appeared in front of them, his face hidden in shadow. He motioned for Bob to sit down on the stone, as if his power was bearing down on him like a heavy weight. Bob's face expressed despair and understanding that there was no other choice but to submit to this method. The stranger turned out to be Kronos, the god of time, and invited Bob to go back in time and start over. Kronos took out his mechanism and pointed it towards Bob, mysteriously blinking the glowing time indicators. Bob peered into the mechanism of Kronos, as if plunging into the depths of time under its hypnotic influence. Looking at everyone else, Bob told them that this was their last chance. Bob was not chosen for this mission by chance. His role was predetermined, said Kronos. Adam was annoyed that Bob's choice for this mission was not left random, perhaps because it made him feel unfair or unappreciated. But Bob was the first to quickly adapt to the new reality and conditions of this world. So the choice fell on him. Alec approached the hero and sincerely wished him good luck in his feat. The others also expressed their wishes for good luck to the hero in his mission, filling him with support and inspiration. The Kronos mechanism began to slowly unwind in Bob's hand, emitting strange sounds and creating a feeling of unpredictable temporary force around him. The mechanism began to emit a bright light that filled the surrounding space, as if opening a portal to another dimension of time. The hero looked at his hands, illuminated by a bright light, and felt a feeling of incredible strength and responsibility for the upcoming task awakening inside him. Bob suddenly felt the world around him change. The next moment, he moved out of the light of the Kronos mechanism and acquired a normal human appearance. Suddenly, when Bob already felt like an ordinary person, a strong blow flew into his face, making him flinch. Bob realized that Kronos had channeled the flow of time through him, and the next moment he found himself as a student experiencing his first week at university. Michael stood and smiled, observing what was happening around him with confidence and goodwill. Michael swung at Bob again, preparing for the next blow. But this time, Bob deftly dodged the blow, demonstrating his agility and reaction. Mike, furious, swung at Bob again, aiming his blow with even more force and determination. Bob knocks Michael out with a deft blow, delivering a precise and powerful blow that takes him out of the fight. Bob's eyes filled with determination and confidence, reflecting his readiness for any challenge and trial. Bob took his phone out of his pocket and looked at it. The clock showed late, only 9 hours left. The city at night was beautiful. The lights of the skyscrapers twinkled like stars in the sky. The streets were lively and filled with a mysterious charm that can only be felt in the deep silence of the night. People were sitting in the restaurant, deep in their conversations and smiles, enjoying the atmosphere and delicious food, surrounded by pleasant music and warm lighting. Michael was unhappy that there were so many people in the restaurant, which prevented him from enjoying the atmosphere and communication. But among the many people, he finally saw his friends, and this immediately made his mood better. He walked over to the table where his friends were sitting and grabbed a glass of drink, joining the group with a smile on his face. Michael took a sip of the drink, feeling its warmth and aroma. Then he smiled at his friends and sat down at the table, joining the general conversation and atmosphere of fun. They struck up a friendly conversation full of laughter and fond memories, sharing news and discussing plans for the future, enjoying their time together. Suddenly, Michael remembered how Bob hit him and fell silent for a moment, realizing past events. Michael was curious about how Bob spent his weekend at the university, whether there were activities, studying, or something unexpected happened. He also remembered how he was bleeding, and this memory gave him a slight trembling and an unpleasant sensation that clouded his current thoughts. But remembering that he was among friends, he relaxed, allowing the warmth of their company and friendly conversation to push away the dark memories. They raised their glasses and clinked their glasses amicably, enjoying the moment and strengthening their camaraderie. Afterwards, they went outside, enjoying the cool night air and the sounds of the night city, which was full of life and energy. They stood on the street, thinking about how else to entertain themselves, their thoughts hovering around various ideas, from going to a nightclub to a night walk in the park. Suddenly, they noticed Bob, who was rolling a suitcase on wheels along the sidewalk. Michael was very surprised by Bob's appearance and frowned a little irritably, not expecting to see him here with a suitcase. They decided to catch up with Bob and greet him. Walking quickly along the sidewalk, they caught up with him, and Michael, hiding his irritation, was the first to call out to him. Bob stopped and turned around, seeing familiar faces. His expression did not change. The hero said with a mysterious smile, "Enjoy it while you can. There is very little time left. The apocalypse will begin soon." Bob took off his watch, threw it next to the suitcase which he placed on the ground, and began to open it. Mike was shocked when he saw what was in the suitcase. The suitcase contained many knives and axes of different shapes and sizes. Their blades glinted in the light. Bob took one of the knives in his hand, feeling its weight and sharpness. He took an axe in his other hand, and those around him watched this action in horror. Having hung the axe on his belt and thrown the backpack, which was also in the suitcase, over his shoulder, Bob stood up, holding the knife in his hand. Bob's gaze was indifferent, as if he was already accustomed to the unusual surroundings and was ready for any test since he understood what would begin in the near future. The clock showed just before 12 o'clock, and everything was just beginning. People around began to grab their heads, feeling the approach of something terrible or unexpected. All over the city, luminous points began to blink and appear like stars on the celestial sphere. Everyone around was holding their heads in pain, but Bob was unaffected. Michael, terrified and in pain, could not understand what was happening around him. Zombies began to appear on the streets of the city, and those around them were shocked by this unexpected and terrible event. Screams of horror were heard from different sides, but Bob knew that this was possible and was ready for it. Bob's gaze was decisive and prescient. He realized that something was about to begin that would greatly influence the world around him. Zombies began to wreak havoc around, spreading horror and chaos among those around them. A crowd of zombies was approaching Bob, and he prepared for battle. The hero held the knife tightly in his hands, ready to repel any zombie attack. The rest defended themselves as best they could, with hammers and knives trying to fend off the advancing zombies. The hero took out a small bottle filled with something unknown and opened it. Bob smeared the knife blade with an unknown liquid, preparing to use it in the fight against zombies. A real meat grinder began. Zombies were advancing from all sides, and the main character and the others were fighting for their lives, using all available means. The character fought with zombies, fighting them off with weapons in hand and trying to save survivors in this merciless clash. Zombies fell from the blows of the protagonist. He chopped and shredded them into pieces. It turned out that the world was immersed in the game, and by killing zombies, Bob increased his level. The streets of the city were infested with zombies. There was blood and panic everywhere. People fled in terror, trying to survive in this merciless battle for survival. One of the people was armed with an axe, preparing to fight off the zombies and defend themselves in this fight for survival. He hit the zombie hard with the axe, trying to disable it and protect himself from the attack. But the zombie responded by attacking the character after receiving a blow. The zombie mercilessly grabbed onto the character's neck, trying to eat him. Bob realized that defeating zombies required unusual strength and strategy. Otherwise, he would not be able to resist them. The main character continued to fight off the crowds of zombies, increasing his level. Suddenly, he noticed that the blow to one of the zombies did not cause damage, which meant the end of the effect of the liquid with which he lubricated the weapon. The main character quickly jumped back, avoiding the powerful blow of the zombie, which directed its blow in his direction. Bob reached into his pocket to take out another bottle of liquid. The hero threw the bottle into the air and, waving his knife, cut it in half. The blade was again smeared with liquid. The main character recalled Jack's words. He told him the secret of how to defeat the first-level zombies. To defeat zombies, you need a solution of salt and water. This is the advice he heard from Jack. The mysterious liquid turned out to be saline solution. Bob continued to fight the zombies. Bob received an in-game achievement for quickly killing zombies and could now choose 3 skills. The main character began to carefully study the available skills, assessing their advantages and disadvantages in order to choose the most useful for further battles. But not finding anything useful at the moment, the hero decided to save skill points for the future. The zombies approached Bob, their muffled groans and shuffling steps filling the street. Suddenly, the hero heard a loud sound that echoed down the street, attracting the attention of both him and the zombies. Someone tried to stab the zombie, waving a knife and making loud noises in an attempt to fight it off. It was Michael who was fighting the zombies furiously, waving his weapon and trying to fight off the attacking dead. But Michael didn't do much. His blows did virtually no damage to the zombies. He kicked the zombie desperately, trying to push it away and buy some time. Michael then took off running with his friends, desperate to find safe shelter. Michael's friends were terrified by the number of zombies surrounding them on all sides, and panic gripped them. The zombies were gaining on them, their muffled groans and inexorable advance drawing ever closer. Michael swung his knife, unleashing a decisive blow, hoping to stop at least some of the zombies. But at the most critical moment, Michael's weapon broke. The blade of the knife crumbled in his hands, and the character, desperately looking at the useless fragment, thought that the end had come for him. The zombie approached Michael and extended its decayed hand towards him, slowly and ominously reaching towards his face. When suddenly the zombie was struck by something, he suddenly stopped and with a dull groan began to fall to the ground. All the zombies fell to the ground due to the strange dust flying in the air. White dust rained down from above, slowly settling to the ground as zombies, deprived of their strength, lay on the asphalt. Michael carefully tasted the white dust, feeling its strange, slightly salty texture, and guessed that it was salt. It turned out that it was Bob who scattered salt through the air, creating an effect that paralyzed the zombies and stopped their advance. Bob stopped to estimate how many zombies had died from the spilled salt. It turned out that the salt destroyed all the zombies. The main character threw his backpack over his shoulder and, making sure that everything was safe, got ready to move on. A voice from nowhere congratulated everyone on their survival, its words echoing through the empty streets. People did not understand what was happening. Their faces expressed complete confusion and confusion. The voice continued to talk, explaining the basic mechanics of the game, controlling and using items. The voice also explained how to trade in this game world, how to find merchants, how to exchange resources and items. Bob, having confirmed the words of the voice, got ready to leave, confidently heading deeper into the city. Suddenly, a second wave began in the city, and the roar of footsteps and inhuman groans echoed through the streets again, returning chaos and danger. The ground underfoot began to vibrate, foreshadowing the approach of a new threat. Michael put his hand to his head, feeling the tension and confusion take over him. The character did not understand where Bob had gone. His gaze darted around the surrounding panic and chaos. Michael and his friends tried to find Bob in the crowd, through the panicked screams and bustle, looking for him. Suddenly, they noticed him. Bob was walking through the crowd, confidently and decisively, as if he knew the exact direction and goal. Michael rushed to catch up with the main character, making his way through the crowd. The character grabbed Bob by the shoulder, interrupting his movement, and said that he was going the wrong way. Michael wanted Bob to go with them, insistently saying so. But Bob, with a determined expression on his face, replied that he knew where he needed to go and did not want to join Michael. The hero advised Michael to find a safe area and take refuge there while he continued on his way. Bob added that Michael should not be arrogant and not underestimate the danger. Michael was furious and was about to stab Bob in the back. Clenching his fist and unable to contain his irritation, Michael was ready to strike. But Michael was stopped by strange sounds coming from the darkness. These were rustling sounds and dull groans. The character quickly decided to hide in a safe zone, realizing that a new threat was approaching. From under the ground, something suddenly grabbed one of the people, tearing him out of the crowd with tremendous force. Michael was terrified. His eyes widened in fear when he saw this. A huge worm, bursting out of the ground, swallowed the man whole, leaving behind only dug-up earth and instant silence. Bob, seeing what happened, was not taken aback and struck a powerful blow to the worm, trying to break its jaws and drive the creature away. The main character, gathering all his strength, struck a decisive blow and cut the worm in half, forcing it to spew out green mucus and scraps of flesh. Bob heard cries for help coming from the streets and from somewhere far away. He needed to move on and go down to the subway despite the painful screams and urgent desire to help. He could barely restrain himself and for a moment was ready to go to the rescue, but changed his mind. The hero found himself below, where it was dark all around and oppressive darkness enveloped the entire space. Worms began to emerge from the darkness, their writhing bodies crawling in every direction, and Bob, armed with a knife and an axe, entered the battle. Bob dealt with the worms, methodically and decisively cutting them down until their torn bodies littered the ground around him. The hero's level increased and Bob, despite fatigue and tension, remained calm. Bob continued his descent into the depths of the subway, making his way through the darkness and debris. The hero came to a certain place and prepared himself, carefully examining the surrounding area. The subway was infested with worms. Their writhing bodies filled the tunnels, creating an eerie picture of decay and chaos. The walls were covered in slime, and an unpleasant smell and rustling sounds filled the air. The worms sensed Bob. Their receptors sensed his presence. They began to move and wriggle, rushing towards him. Bob prepared for the upcoming battle. He stood in a fighting stance, holding his weapon tightly. The main character took out a second knife, carefully took it out of its sheath and confidently squeezed the blade in each hand. The worm opened its huge mouth, its teeth like sharp fangs, glistening in the dim light. Bob began the attack, rushing forward with lightning speed. He delivered sharp and precise blows with his knives at the writhing worms, aiming for vulnerable spots. There was a splash of slime as Bob's knives pierced the worm's flesh, tearing it and causing the green mass to fly out. Suddenly, a bead sparkling with a bright light flew out of one of the worms. It hovered in the air, emitting powerful energy waves. Bob was surprised to discover that these beads could be collected right here. The hero quickly picked up the bead, its soft glow illuminating his hand. Bob decided that all the worms needed to be destroyed in order to collect more beads. Meanwhile, chaos was happening in the streets. The worms continued to attack, people screamed and panicked, cars were overturned, and those who were in the safe zone began to study the mechanics of the game. They carefully looked through the instructions. The safe zone began to gradually shrink. Its boundaries gradually narrowed. People began to be randomly expelled from the safe zone. Many people found themselves outside the safe zone, and they soon found themselves engulfed in chaos. They were immediately attacked by worms. These terrible creatures, sensing new prey, quickly wriggled and attacked. The worms ate more and more people, devouring their bodies with terrible greed, their huge mouths filled with sharp teeth, capturing and tearing people apart. People began to panic when, faced with the incessant attacks of the worms, they began to fight among themselves. They tried to run, desperately looking for some kind of shelter or safe place. Michael, overcome with despair, shouted for everyone to shut up. People turned in his direction, interrupting their screams and fights, their faces distorted with fear and fatigue. Michael said with rage in his voice that now they had to choose who would die in his place. So that he could get out of here and survive, his words hung in the air like a threat. Michael grabbed one poor guy by the chest. His eyes were burning with crazy fire. With the words, "I will kill this old man," he held it as if it was the only barrier between him and survival. Meanwhile, Bob continued to fight the worms. There was not a second of peace in his actions. Bob attacked and defended at the same time, his movements flawlessly perfected. The worms kept climbing and climbing. Their number seemed endless. They stretched out from all the cracks and cracks. Their writhing bodies filled the space. Finally, Bob killed all the worms, his weapon still glinting in the dim light, covered in blood and mucus. The hero, wiping sweat and blood from his face, bent over the bodies of the fallen worms and began to collect the scattered beads into a bag. There was a terrible stench emanating from the decaying bodies of worms. Finally, Bob decided to distribute the experience points that he had accumulated during the battle. Bob spent all his experience points on increasing his mana. The hero continued his journey deeper, confident in his new powers. Suddenly, Bob turned around, feeling that someone was watching him. Someone was watching him from a hole in the ceiling. A shadow flickered in the dark opening, revealing a hidden observer. Bob asked into the darkness who you are. His voice was full of wariness, and his gaze was directed straight into the hole. Suddenly, Ava appeared from the hole looking like a small doll. Ava, the skill merchant, noted with a slight laugh that Bob was the first customer, and her eyes sparkled with interest. Bob decided to see what Ava had to offer. The hero began to study with interest her range of skills, which she was ready to sell. The range was huge, and Bob took time to carefully study all the skills on offer. But Bob couldn't find what he really needed and was afraid of attracting attention. But still, the main character decided to buy the skill of monkey eyes and the skill of enveloping a sword in mana. Ava thanked her for the purchase and decided to leave. Bob prepared to move on, leaving behind a mountain of dead worms. their severed bodies lying randomly on the floor of the tunnel. Suddenly, the hero became thoughtful. His gaze became clouded, and he froze for a moment. He remembered the words of Kronos, who told him about the importance of time and that every decision made could change the future. Having considered Kronos' words, Bob took a deep breath, collected his thoughts, and resolutely moved further along the tunnel. More worms awaited Bob ahead, their ominous silhouettes flickering in the dim light. The worms were eating the people caught above, their jaws crunching as they tore through the flesh, creating terrifying sounds. The creatures sensed Bob, their heads turned in his direction, emitting a threatening hiss. Bob readied himself to attack, his hands holding his weapon tightly and his eyes focused. The main character decided to use a new skill by activating monkey eyes and a sword with mana. Suddenly, the main boss, a massive creature with a terrifying appearance, appeared from the pile of worms. The hero deftly repelled the attacks of the worms. His movements were fast and accurate. The boss let out a deafening scream that shook the air and caused Bob's body to tremble. The large worm headed towards Bob, opening its huge mouth, ready to swallow him whole. The main character deftly jumped into the air, avoiding the grip of the giant worm's mouth and flying over his head. Bob was about to attack the worm, his weapon ready to deliver the final blow to the giant enemy's weak spot. The hero was already anticipating victory. His face was tense but determined, and he focused on the last powerful blow. Bob struck, and green goo sprayed out of the worm's wound. The main character took the axe in his second hand, preparing to continue the attack. Bob struck with both weapons simultaneously, his knife and axe quickly meeting the worm's skin. A small smile appeared on Bob's face as he realized that the worm, struck by his blows, began to show signs of weakness. The hero delivers more blows, each of which is accurate and powerful. Splashes of mucus flew everywhere, flooding the surface of the tunnel. Bob's new skill, monkey eyes, kicked in, and his vision became incredibly sharp, allowing him to notice the worm's tiny movements. Bob used the skill on the sword again, its blade sparkling with new, magical energy, sharpening its sharpness and strength. The main character and the worm clash in a decisive confrontation. Bob's eyes glowed with a bright, penetrating light, reflecting his concentration. Meanwhile, the man grabbed his leg. He realized that he was wounded and could not continue to fight. Michael threatened the man, his voice filled with anger and tension as he screamed. The character pointed his knife towards the man, his hand shaking with rage. Michael shouted that a man should die in his place. Michael's face was embittered, his features twisted into an expression of rage and despair as he stared at the man. The safe zone was gradually shrinking, and the man was left outside it, desperately trying to get inside. The people in the safe zone were in complete horror as they watched Michael violently push the man away. Suddenly, a loud countdown sounded, echoing through the safe zone. The last 3 seconds flashed on the timer screen. The timer suddenly froze at the last second, and those around him froze in anticipation. Michael was full of surprise and bewilderment. In the subway, Bob, exhausted after fighting the main worm, sat on the carcass of a huge monster. Ava, watching Bob, circled around him enthusiastically, her eyes widened in surprise. The character offered Bob a special reward for destroying the great worm early. Ava gave Bob the choice of one of 3 rewards, each of which concealed unique abilities and powers. Bob was a little confused by the selection of rewards offered, not knowing which one to choose. The main character thought that a connection with Olympus would not be useful to him at the moment, and decided to postpone this choice. But Ava began to describe in detail all the charms and advantages of choosing a connection with Olympus, trying to convince Bob of its benefits. But Bob resolutely refused, preferring to focus on his current goals and chose simple rewards. Ava tried to convince Bob again, describing how his connection to Olympus could be his key to strength. But Bob didn't want to listen to her and resolutely jumped off the worm's corpse. The hero decided that it was time to call the distributor to a meeting. A huge, powerful man with a massive build and a stern look appeared in front of the hero. His powerful body and confident posture showed him to be more than just a manager. Duke, impressed by Bob's ability to summon him to a meeting, asked with interest how he learned this rare skill. Bob replied that he knew about the first rule Duke made and used it to call him to a meeting. Duke stood silently, carefully watching Bob without saying a word. Duke became very interested. Bob complained to Duke about Ava, explaining that she was offering him a connection to Olympus, which he did not want. This infuriated Duke and he hit Ava with rage. Duke slammed Ava, and shaking off his hand, looked at Bob with a cold gaze. Bob decided to ask for a reward, explaining that he expected to be fairly rewarded for his determination and strength in fighting the worms. Duke said he had an idea, but still he squinted thoughtfully, his gaze becoming suspicious. Duke, curious and suspicious, leaned closer to Bob and asked how one member managed to kill so many worms on his own. Bob coldly replied that it was none of his business. Duke, without looking away, extended his hand to Bob, expecting him to accept his offer. The main character looked carefully at Duke's outstretched hand. Bob extended his hand and accepted Duke's award, feeling his heart beat faster in anticipation. Magic light enveloped him, raising the hero's mana level. Duke nodded to Bob, confirming that the reward had been presented, and with a faint grin, he turned around, the magical light surrounding him, and he disappeared. Bob was left alone among the dead worms, their decomposed bodies a reminder of the battle that had recently taken place. The main character was surprised by the reward. He did not expect to receive such a boost so early. Bob was able to create a sparkling sphere in his hand that emitted a powerful energy flow. The hero tried to use the sphere, but it turned out to be unstable and, emitting a bright burst of energy, shattered into pieces, leaving him surrounded by debris and sparks. However, Bob was happy, realizing that this was just the beginning. A new wave of worms began to approach Bob, their ominous bodies covered in mucus and moving with an eerie hiss. Bob entered the fray again, his determined gaze sweeping over the crawling worms. Meanwhile, a lively argument broke out in the safe zone, and people in this confined space began to quarrel. People in the safe zone continued to panic and feel fear. Their tension and anxiety only increased. Michael again grabbed the other unfortunate man by the chest. The face was distorted with rage and despair. The character, squeezing the poor fellow by the chest, looked at him with an icy expression on his face, full of despair and cruelty. From afar, Bob's figure appeared, illuminated by the dim light of the collapsing city. People who saw Bob in this state thought he might be crazy. Suddenly, a huge worm burst out of the ground and quickly attacked Bob. The worm opened its huge mouth again, targeting Bob, ready to swallow him whole. Bob jumped up and, using his new skill, attacked the worm from above with a running start. Splashes of green mucus accompanied by loud splashes reached people. Michael was surprised as he watched Bob fight the huge worm with determination. Bob's face was stoic, full of determination and concentration. Bob approached Michael, leaving behind the worm's mangled body and the slime-strewn streets. Michael, brushing the remaining dust and mucus from his face, hugged Bob tightly. The rest, sighing with relief, took out knives and food that they were able to save in the safe zone. While the rest of the people were organizing their supplies, Michael and Bob found a corner where they could talk without interruption. The main character accused Michael of taking advantage of others while Bob was risking his life and fighting the worms. Bob said it was very strange that Michael ignored real threats and relied on others for help. Michael became furious at Bob's accusations and began to threaten him. The character, enraged, briefly explained to Bob that the people were bringing him food because he had become their only leader and savior in this chaos. Bob was not interested in listening to Michael's excuses and started to leave, ignoring his attempts to explain the situation. Michael threatened Bob that if he didn't stay, he would definitely regret it. But Bob, not paying attention to Michael's threats, continued on his way, deciding not to waste time on useless conflicts. Suddenly, strange creatures began to crawl from the dark corners of the city. Their writhing bodies and creepy faces covered the walls of the buildings. A new wave began. Spiders and zombies filled the streets of the city. Their clusters covered the ground. The streets were infested with zombies and spiders that crawled from every nook and cranny, filling the city in endless streams, searching for any living creatures. The people, having gathered their last strength, armed themselves with everything they could find, knives and axes. Michael noticed a narrow passage between the ruins, which could be his only chance of salvation. Bob suddenly began shaking beads out of his bag, causing bewilderment and wariness among everyone around him. The creatures were crawling out of the subway and rapidly approaching. The zombies made terrible moans, their voices echoed through the streets. Concentrating, Bob used his new skill, creating a sparkling sphere in his hand. The entire subway lit up with a bright blue light that emanated from the sphere in Bob's hand, scaring the creatures and zombies. The hero prepared to strike, concentrating all his power into a sparkling blue sphere. The hero struck with the sphere, and a powerful wave of energy blew the creatures and zombies to pieces, filling the subway with thick clouds of blue light. Bob was surprised by the power of the skill when the blue sphere tore apart a whole wave of creatures and zombies in front of him. After sitting down for a moment, the main character decided to rest. After a while, he began to collect the beads that fell from the destroyed monsters, carefully collecting each one. The surviving rats trembled in fear, hiding and watching. Around the hero lay pieces of monsters, torn and covered with mucus. Bob pulled out his knife, preparing for the next confrontation, waiting tensely. Meanwhile, a group of 3 people carefully moved along the subway. Ethan and John were deciding where to go next, discussing possible routes. Suddenly, Claire noticed something. It made her wary and take a closer look. She drew the attention of the others. Claire pointed to a convenience store at the end of the tunnel and said that there might be shelter or food there. John was delighted and hurried to the store, believing that it could be a safe place where they could find supplies and take a break from danger. Suddenly, a huge spider loomed over John, and he froze, preparing to attack. The spider bit Jack on the head with a terrible sound, and bloody splashes scattered in different directions. Ethan and Claire watched in horror as a huge spider tore off John's head. His body no longer moved, and blood continued to ooze from the wound. The spider was eating his head, and creatures crawled out from different sides. The heroes, with shaking hands, took out their weapons, their faces pale with fear. A huge rat, as if from the depths of a nightmare, emerged from the darkness and was rapidly approaching Claire. Claire quickly came to her senses and, grabbing the weapon, struck a decisive blow. One of the rats, large and vicious, grabbed Claire's hand with its sharp teeth. At this time, Ethan was completely focused on fighting the zombies that began to surround him and Claire. The zombie suddenly grabbed onto Ethan's hand, its sharp claws and teeth digging into the skin. Claire had difficulty fighting off the rats, who were not far behind her, trying to devour her. A huge spider was approaching them. The rat jumped towards Claire, trying to eat her. Suddenly, something cut the rat in half, scattering blood and meat on both sides. Claire, covered in blood, stood there, not understanding what had happened. Bob, with an annoyed expression on his face, told Claire and Ethan that they had woken him up while he was enjoying himself with a can of soda. The main character, in front of Claire, annoyedly threw a can of soda at the monsters, and the zombie, having been hit by the can, instantly lost its head, which flew to the side. Bob took out his knife and prepared for the next attack. The hero, using a knife with skill, began to chop up the monsters one after another, their bodies flying into pieces. The last thing Bob finished off was a giant spider, which, despite its menacing form, fell to the powerful blows. All the monsters were destroyed, and silence once again enveloped the abandoned subway tunnels. Bob looked at Claire and Ethan, their faces covered in blood and fear. Claire and Ethan thanked Bob for saving them, wiping the blood from their faces and trying to catch their breath. Ethan, seriously wounded, fell to his knee, holding back a groan of pain. The main character threw the ointment to them and told Ethan to treat the wound. Claire caught the ointment and thanked Bob again. Bob added that the ointment had to be applied as quickly as possible, otherwise Ethan would not be able to use his arm. The hero thought to himself that he only slept for 6 hours, but he wants more. He had been fighting for a long time and felt very tired. Therefore, I decided to rest and did not think that anyone would disturb him. Claire asked if Bob hunted here all the time and if they could join him. The main character looked at Claire and Ethan, who were sitting on the floor trying to cope with shock and injuries. Bob invited Claire and Ethan to go hunting with him. After some time, they arrived at a place that was more like a cave, where stone walls were hidden in the depths. Bob told them to get ready because there was a monster ahead of them. There was a deafening roar that made the cave walls shake and echoed off the stone walls. Ethan and Claire were frightened, their faces pale with fear. Bob stopped and, looking at Ethan and Claire, asked with caution, "Where are the guarantees that I won't kill you?" The heroes were a little confused, not knowing how to answer Bob's unexpected question. The main character continued, saying that maybe he wanted to take their essences. Bob continued, "Even if I don't kill you, you'll still die here." Claire thought it was strange. Why did Bob invite them with him if he had such intentions? And then Claire asked what Bob wanted from them. The hero said that he needed their help, and if they succeeded, he would share the entities with them in half. Suddenly, a huge snake appeared and opened its mouth, preparing to attack. Ethan began to scream and run to distract the attention of the huge snake. The character recalled Bob's words before the battle. When he spoke about the importance of tactics and teamwork, Ethan continued to run, maneuvering and luring the snake behind him to divert its attention. The snake was about to swallow Ethan when Bob suddenly appeared. The hero plunged the knife straight into the snake's mouth, and blood gushed out. Next, Bob headed towards the lizard, trying not to miss the moment and not give it the opportunity to attack. Bob dealt a decisive blow to the lizard. The hero continued to mercilessly chop the lizard, tearing it into pieces. Ethan watched in amazement as Bob destroyed the lizard with incredible speed and skill. Pieces of the monsters flew in all directions as Bob fought, and soon the entire floor was littered with scraps of meat and blood. Beads began to emerge from the torn bodies and fell to the ground. Ethan, still impressed by Bob's skill, quickly began collecting beads so as not to miss a single one. The main character, after making sure that the monsters were destroyed, approached Ethan and began collecting the beads with him. Bob, covered in blood and with a burnt-out look and a tired look. Ethan looked at Bob, once again convinced that his strength and skill were amazing. The main character asked how many entities fell out. Ethan answered Bob that 6 essences fell out, then Bob allowed Ethan to leave 1. Ethan asked Bob what level he was. Bob replied that his level was no longer increasing, and Ethan was amazed by this. The main character advised Ethan not to ask about levels and skills, as this is personal information. Ethan remembered that Bob asked him about endurance, to which Bob replied that it was different. Bob also gave advice that you need to not only collect essences, but also level up to become stronger. Suddenly Claire appeared, and a pack of monsters was chasing her. Ethan tensed a little, but Bob was pleased, preparing for a new battle. At the same time, Bob walked towards Claire, preparing to help her. Ethan also joined the battle and began fighting with a hammer, hoping to increase his level. During the battle, Claire and Ethan's levels increased. Bob asked if they were done fighting. The main character reached for the entity that was lying on the ground. Taking the essence, Bob gave it to Claire, saying that this was her reward for her help. Bob also thanked them for their help, noting that now the hunt will be twice as productive thanks to their efforts. The hero headed towards the exit, saying that they needed to rise to the surface. Ethan and Claire were glad that they could go to the surface and find out what was happening there. The portal on the city street turned scarlet, which meant its imminent opening. 2 people standing in the shadows exchanged quick phrases, their eyes sparkling with cunning and confusion. Their interest in Michael was clearly wary and calculating. With a decisive step, Michael, noticing their attention, headed towards them. Both looked at Michael curiously. Their faces remained wary. They were clearly preparing for a conversation. Michael's voice was indifferent. He asked where they were because he had not seen them for a long time. The hero noticed that the faces of the people in front of him tensed. They were clearly not happy about his appearance. Michael, looking at both of them, said, with the opening of the gates, "Blood will spill. I know how to solve the situation," Michael said confidently, and suggested a survival plan. The price was too high. The character in the gray jacket thought to himself, they wouldn't have that many entities. He clenched his fist in anger and the absurdity of the demand. Michael offered to give him 400, and then he would think about solving the problem. Then he thought to himself that if these 2 refused, a massacre would begin. Everyone around froze, feeling the growing tension. Everyone was waiting for an answer, as if this moment could decide the fate of everyone present. Suddenly, Claire and Ethan stood out from the crowd. The character in the gray jacket was surprised to see Bob walking behind Claire and Ethan. Bob was carrying a box in his hands, attracting everyone's attention. Michael asked where he was. Bob replied that he was doing business and put the box on the ground. Bob's gaze was firm and serious as he looked around at everyone gathered. Bob opened a box full of glowing entities and showed them to everyone present. People gasped when they saw how many entities were in the box. Michael, stunned, asked exactly how many entities there were, to which Bob calmly replied, more than 1,000. How did this son of a bitch collect so much? Michael thought to himself. Michael figured out how many people were behind him, and that together they could take everything from Bob. Bob began to say, "Don't think that you will be able to take these entities from me. Any attempt will cost you your life." Michael thought about it, taking a closer look at what Bob showed. "You need these essences, and I have them in abundance," Bob continued. People began to scream and ask for the essences to be given to them, their voices overlapping each other in a chaotic chorus of outrage. He drew a circle around himself, confidently sitting inside it, and announced, "I have an offer for you. I am ready to exchange each essence for 100 skill points. This is my price." Everyone started counting their points to find out how profitable it would be for them to exchange essences for skill points. Michael took out a knife and pointed it towards Bob. He held it confidently in his hand. His voice became cold and hard when he asked what if there was nothing to pay, to which the main character replied that he did not force them to buy them. "Listen here, you son of a bitch. If you think you can manipulate us that easily, then I'm here to remind you who really has the power here," Michael said. Ethan and Claire immediately reacted to Michael's threat. They reminded him who killed their friend and why they ran away from Michael in the subway. Both heroes stood next to Bob, demonstrating their willingness to protect him at all costs, despite the danger. Michael, holding back his rage, laughed and said that there are only 3 of you. "What can you do against all this crowd and my people?" The character, feeling the growing tension and seeing that his authority was beginning to waver, shouted, "Kill them all. No compromises." A couple of people who were trying to surround Bob were rapidly approaching. The hero pulled out a knife. His movements were lightning fast. He cut off the heads of 2 attackers with one precise blow. Michael, seeing how Bob dealt with 2 attackers with ease and determination, was horrified. The others, seeing this, did not dare to approach him. With confused faces and whispers, they began to retreat. Michael remembered Bob's words when he offered to exchange essences for skill points. Bob reiterated that purchasing the entities was their choice, but if anyone crossed the line with another target, he would not hesitate to kill them. Bob's gaze was hard and there was unshakable determination in his eyes. Michael again ordered Bob to be killed, and the crowd moved towards Bob again. The main character was left with no other choice. He had to fight. He decisively swung his knife, cut off heads, and repelled attacks. A mountain of bodies formed around Bob, splashes of blood flying wildly. Full of rage, Michael, deciding that he himself would become an example for others, grabbed a knife. Eager to end this battle once and for all, Michael charged at Bob, fury in his eyes. Bob prepared to attack, his hands ready for a decisive counterattack. Bob's eyes sparkled with determination as he watched Michael rush towards him. Michael thought for a moment, realizing that his determination could cost him his life. But it was too late. The main character cut off his head with one decisive blow. Dead bodies lay all around Bob, and blood formed puddles on the ground. Bob took the box of entities that was lying on the ground. The character in the gray jacket stood in shock. He thought to himself how Bob was able to defeat so many people. He shouted that he was ready to buy the essences. The character decided to sell his sword for skill points, and then use those points to buy essence. He thought again and headed towards Bob. Bob was about to enter the portal, but he put the box on the ground. The main character turned to the approaching man, ready to listen to his proposal. The man in the jacket, with an urgent expression on his face, extended his hand to Bob to begin bargaining. He asked Bob for 7 entities. Bob, shaking hands with the man in the jacket, agreed to a deal, exchanging 7 entities. The crowd watched the deal carefully, wondering how many skill points everyone had and whether they would have enough for essence. The man in the jacket quickly entered the portal, leaving the others to collect their skill points. Some of the crowd moved toward Bob, extending their arms and loudly shouting their suggestions. The rest began to call on the sixes to hastily sell their weapons. There was a buzz around. People crowded around, noisily discussing deals and trying to be the first to receive a valuable reward. Bob continued to sell essences, slickly making deals and quickly exchanging essences for skill points. Some tried to offer Bob unprofitable deals, but he agreed because he understood that the skill points would be useful to him in the future. The main character thought about it and realized that everything was going well for him anyway. After counting his skill points, Bob realized he had enough. "Where should Bob go next?" Claire asked him. The main character looked at Claire and Ethan, wondering why they had not left this place yet, given that the box was already empty and he was about to enter the portal. Claire and Ethan told Bob that they planned to go with him. The main character replied that he was not going to go into the portal. His plans had changed. He picked up his pouch from the ground, preparing for his next move. There are no more entities and he needs to get some for himself. Claire and Ethan were surprised at this. The hero shook the pouch, making sure that there were no more entities left inside. He threw the empty pouch, which fell to the ground with a thud. The heroes looked at Bob and didn't understand why he didn't leave some essences for himself. Ethan decided to ask why Bob didn't keep some for himself, but sold everything. Bob explained that even though he had no intention of going into the portal, Ethan and Claire should take the opportunity to go there, as it could greatly increase their chances of survival. Ethan and Claire thanked Bob for his help and support. Afterwards, they said goodbye to him and headed towards the portal to take advantage of the opportunity. Bob thought about his next steps and planned how he could use his resources and skills. The main character turned around and saw a man running up to him in an exhausted state. The stranger asked if he was still selling entities, but Bob replied that the trade was completed. The stranger screamed. The stranger fell to his knee, his eyes full of despair. There was a loud roar. The remaining people grabbed their heads. The hero hurried along the alley, trying to stay away from the crowded square and its remaining people. Bob decided to summon the 6 and purchase items that might be needed for the upcoming trials. The main character was surprised when the manager himself came to his call. The hero asked why he came himself, because he needed a simple store. The manager explained that there were now problems with the 6s and decided to personally come to Bob. The work of the 6s was also suspended due to Bob's actions, the manager added. When everyone in this place began to call the 6s and sell them their weapons, the situation became very tense, the manager continued. It was because of this that the manager himself decided to come in order to establish order and regulate the flow of transactions, which had become unpredictable and chaotic. Bob, looking at the manager, said expectantly, "Please open the store. I want to purchase several items and improvements." The main character looked insistently. He did not want to continue the dialogue so as not to attract attention. The manager raised his hand and it glowed with bright light. The character prepared to open the store. His hand began to slowly lower. "Well, choose," he said, stepping aside. Bob carefully looked through the objects with his eyes, trying to find something that would help him. The main character chose a new sword. It was light and perfectly balanced. In addition to the sword, the hero chose a red robe and a shield. His hand gripped the hilt confidently, as if it had been made especially for him, the gleam of the blade reflecting determination. The manager, appreciating Bob's choice, nodded and said that now not a single person can touch you. He added that this only applies to the participants, which surprised Bob. At that same second, the manager disappeared, leaving Bob standing in the alley. The main character heard the sound of the countdown and raised his head up. Filling everything around with an ominous scarlet light, the sky turned fiery. Bob thought to himself that he had not seen such a fiery sky for a long time. When the hero left the alley, people began to run away in panic, leaving behind only traces of chaos and haste. One of the people, unable to withstand the scorching heat, fell to the ground, sweating and screaming in pain. Bob looked at the fallen man, sympathy flashing in his eyes. At that same second, a fireball fell on the man, burning him instantly and leaving only ashes on the ground. The main character dodged so that the fireball did not hit him and cast his gaze onto the street. The street was on fire. Tongues of flame opened up and mercilessly consumed everything around. A skeletal hand emerged from the ground, slowly reaching out from the ash and rubble. Following the hand, a skeleton emerged from the ground with fiery eyes that glowed brightly. Suddenly, a crowd of skeletons began to rise from the ground, their bone bodies creaking and rustling. Bob gripped the hilt of his new sword tightly and took a fighting stance. When the hero took a closer look at the horizon, he noticed that a more impressive figure was emerging behind the skeletons emerging from the ground. It was a huge fiery silhouette, shrouded in smoke and surrounded by gloomy light. A demon with huge, sparkling eyes emerged from the darkness against the backdrop of blazing lights and developing tongues of flame, Bob said, clutching the sword in his hands and looking straight at the demon. "Finally, here you are." The silhouette of the demon was huge and fiery. His ominous eyes bored into Bob, and the red-hot tongues of flame escaping from his body tore the air around him. The demon noticed that Bob had interesting monkey eyes, and his voice echoed in the air like a clap of thunder. There was a piercing roar, and the demon, pointing at Bob, ordered the skeletons to attack. The demon pulled out a huge fiery sword. It emitted bright flames and an ominous light. The skeletons, animated by the demon, walked towards Bob, their bone bodies creaking and crunching with every step. Feeling the flow of magic and energy concentrated in his body, Bob, brandishing a new sword, quickly began to fight the advancing skeletons. Skeletons fell like sand from Bob's blows, his sword, sparkling with blue light, rushing through the ranks of opponents. The demon powerfully slammed his fiery sword into the ground, creating a shockwave that broke through the ranks of skeletons and spread through the streets. The demon's fiery eyes sparkled with displeasure. He was surprised that Bob did not suffer damage from the destructive attack. The cloud of smoke slowly dissipated. The main character stood unharmed. His new cape perfectly protected him from fire. Sitting on a dais, the fiery eyes of the demon closely watched the battle, while the skeletons tirelessly continued their attacks on Bob. He wondered as he watched Bob's tireless resistance. Bob, with an unbending expression on his face, told the demon that he had come here to hunt him. The hero's eyes lit up with a bright light. He got ready. The hero jumped up as if preparing for the decisive jump, but he was immediately thrown back by the demon's shockwave. Flames filled the street, consuming everything around in fiery chaos. Bob made his way through the wall of fire, getting closer to the demon with every step. The main character covered himself with a shield that could withstand explosions and flames. When the flames cleared, Bob stood, ashes flying past him. The skeletons continued to advance, moving through the rubble and ashes despite the destruction and flames they left in their wake. Bob noticed that his shield was worn out from constant impacts and explosions. Its protective properties had significantly decreased. "Searcher, stop stalling, let's fight already!" he shouted to the demon. The demon began to descend from above. It made a fluttering sound. Bob, looking at the demon, exclaimed, "You are committing outrage, sending your servants to attack peaceful people and destroying this city." Searcher, waving his fiery sword, pointed it at Bob and said, "You are a daring mortal." The main character, scratching his ear and not showing fear, replied, "You may be powerful, but I will still kill you." The demon flew into a rage, his fiery eyes flashing brighter. Searcher swung his sword, tearing the air and causing a powerful shockwave that could destroy everything in its path. Bob covered himself with a shield to protect himself from a powerful demonic blow. The sword touched the shield, and there was a deafening sound, like a thunderclap which filled the air with vibrations. The hero's shield shattered into pieces under the powerful blow. Sparks and debris scattered in different directions. Bob quickly dodged the next blow by sliding to the side. The demon's sword struck the ground with an angry roar. The demon, seeing how Bob dodged the blow, anticipated his victory, his eyes blazing with rage and confidence in victory. Searcher, seeing how Bob dodged the blow, began to suspect that he deliberately exposed himself to the attack. The hero knelt in front of the demon. His breathing was heavy, and his face was covered with dust and blood. Surtur looked at him with contempt and curiosity. "You're doing too much damage and it has to end," Bob said. Surtur continued to look at Bob in the silence broken only by the crackling of the fire. Bob stood surrounded by a wall of flames as the demon continued to watch him. Suddenly the hero, clenching his teeth, quickly grabbed the sword. He raised it, and the bright light from the blade tore apart the darkness around him. "You think you can defeat me with this sword?" Surtur said mockingly. Bob suddenly saw through the ice crystal that he purchased from the manager. The demon looked at the ice crystal in bewilderment, realizing that its fiery power no longer mattered. The demon instantly struck, but Bob managed to activate another ice crystal. Now Bob did not take damage from the high temperature, and when their swords touched, sparks flew in different directions. The demon was surprised to see how his powerful blow was unable to penetrate Bob's defense. Bob deflected the demon's sword, and he used this moment to strike back. The hero jumped, trying to deliver the decisive blow. The demon, sensing a threat, sharply pointed his fiery sword, and flames soared around their fight. However, Bob managed to break through his defenses and left a deep wound on his fiery body. This only angered the demon, and Bob, trying not to retreat, watched his movements with tension. Surtur, with furious rage in his eyes, activated his fiery eye skill. Bob decided to dodge the stream of fire, trying to use his agility and speed. A furious stream of flame erupted, seeking to incinerate Bob. Using all his strength and technique, Bob fought off the demon's fiery stream with his sword. The hero used another ice crystal and decided to finish quickly, because his body could not withstand the low temperature for a long time. The demon swung his sword again, his fiery energy sparkling around the blade. Dodging the blow, Bob slid to the side and, using the moment, quickly headed towards the demon. Moving with incredible speed, he struck the demon's leg with a decisive blow, and his powerful blow made a dull sound. Surtur's eyes filled with rage and pain. The demon felt his strength begin to fade. From a strong blow, the demon fell to his knee with a deafening sound, as if thunder roared in the night. Bob wasted no time in taking advantage of the opportunity. He quickly jumped and found himself behind the demon, preparing for the decisive blow. Landing on the demon's back, Bob felt his body being exposed to intense heat emanating from the fiery entity beneath him. The demon boiled with rage and shouted that Bob was an impudent person who dared to attack him in this way. Such intense heat emanated from the demon that the air around it seemed to melt. Bob's body was under great strain from the unbearable heat that emanated from the demon, forcing every muscle and every cell to fight the fire. Bob swung his sword around, preparing to strike the finishing blow. The protagonist activated the mana sword, and the blade of his weapon glowed with a bright magical light, enhanced by energy. Sticking the sword into Surtur's body, the blade pierced the flesh. The demon howled in pain, and the heat around him became even more intense. After the blow, Bob's sword was barely on the verge of breaking, its blade covered in cracks and emitting a dim light. Surtur fell to the ground with a dull thud, the fiery light emanating from him fading. Bob shouted in victory, his voice echoing through the deserted street filled with signs of battle. Immediately, the hero remembered his comrades. Joy pierced his heart. Bob had a tired but satisfied smile on his face. He slowly got to his feet and passed out. After a while, he woke up, remembering the recent battle. Next to him, on the battlefield covered with debris and ash, lay the body of a defeated demon. Burns were noticeable on the hero's hands. The burned skin turned red and blistered in places. Bob's thoughts flashed through images of a fierce battle, flashes of fire, thundering blows of a sword, his own exhausted figure. Moving with difficulty due to burns and fatigue, the hero walked towards the demon's body. His movements were slow. Bob began poking around the demon's corpse, trying to find something valuable. Finally, Bob found a crystal, which turned out to be the heart of Surtur. This crystal emitted a mysterious light. The main character wanted to immediately swallow the crystal to immediately gain its power, but realized that he did not have enough stamina points. Majestically and imperiously as before, the manager suddenly appeared in front of the hero, before Bob had time to put the crystal in his inventory. He continued to stand motionless in front of him as Bob jumped off the demon's body. You bring a lot of problems and upset the balance. Your actions have led to a large number of violations of order, the manager said, holding his head. First, I will send you to the next location. Your presence here has caused many problems and I will need to deal with the consequences, he continued. The manager extended his hand and Bob, hesitating only for a moment, also extended his. They shook hands. The other steward and I spent a lot of time deciding what reward to give you, the steward added. Bob received a new skill, a significant increase in skill points and increased stats. The hero immediately began learning a new skill that was previously unknown to him. Bob asked the steward for a small pill to restore his stamina after a brutal battle. While the hero was swallowing the pill, the manager was about to leave. He felt his wounds begin to heal, and his pain and fatigue gradually disappeared. The manager said goodbye to Bob, advising him to hurry into the portal. After the manager's words, Bob passed out. His body, exhausted from battles and wounds, could not stand it and fell into sleep. After a while, Bob began to teleport, his body gradually disappearing into the light. While Bob was teleported, he thought about what was happening. His thoughts were focused on recent events. Bob found himself in a new place. He slowly came to his senses and looked around, studying his surroundings. When the teleportation was completed, Bob found himself in a new place, surrounded by people he didn't know. These people looked like they had just arrived here. Their facial expressions were a mixture of curiosity and wariness. They looked at Bob with interest, but there was no sense of hostility between them. This place turned out to be a central area for participants from different locations. The voice was loud and clear. All participants froze in anticipation. Their attention was focused on the voice. The voice continued, adding instructions that this island was in the process of being sunk, and that everyone had a limited time to prove their eligibility to continue participating in the trials. A deafening roar came from the volcano, signaling the start of the test on the sinking island. People began to perk up, actively preparing for tests and research. Bob thought for a second, realizing that he now had a new goal. 3 people stood and discussed something, slowly, amid an alarming atmosphere. One of them suggested creating a team to survive the current situation together. The character in the white cape refused the offer with a smile, citing his own plans and preferences. He said that he trusts practically no one here and prefers to act alone. Bob noticed him. The character seemed familiar to him. One of the people rushed at the stranger with a white cape, trying to attack him. The stranger's eyes glowed yellow, emitting an aura of power. People around were struck by bright yellow lightning. Sparks flew in different directions. Some bodies flew in the air struck by lightning, generated by the strange forces of the stranger. People fell, losing their balance and flying out in different directions like dolls on strings. When the stranger removed his hood, a striking appearance was revealed to those gathered. The others were amazed at the strength of the stranger, who, possessing an intimidating appearance and amazing power, showed with just one movement that he was capable of much. Bob assessed the stranger in his head, assessing him as a potential ally or enemy. The protagonist knew that the stranger was born in the tower, and this made him a particularly dangerous and potentially powerful adversary or valuable ally. The stranger looked a lot like one of the famous characters, Bob thought to himself. Bob continued to think, but I need to go somewhere else. I don't have time to deal with him. Suddenly, the stranger himself approached Bob. He didn't even understand how the stranger did it, but his dignity was felt even from a distance. The stranger introduced himself as Leo and, looking at Bob with interest, asked who you are. Leo pointed his finger at Bob's clothes and added with slight surprise, "Where you got such unusual clothes?" The main character looked at Leo coldly, not succumbing to his provocations. Bob, with the same expression on his face, replied that he bought it for points. Leo, without taking his eyes off Bob, asked what his level was. Bob, remaining cool, replied that it was impolite to ask such questions. The character thought for a moment and then said approvingly that Bob was good for learning this important truth. Seeing in him the potential and strength needed to successfully complete the upcoming challenges, Leo invited Bob to join his team. Bob replied that he was not interested, and not wanting to linger, got ready to leave. Leo stood in disbelief as he watched Bob walk away without accepting his offer. The hero rushed after Bob with lightning speed, not wanting to let him go without an explanation. But Leo was stopped by rats, who suddenly jumped out of the shadows and surrounded him, blocking his path. He dealt with the rats and stopped. Behind Leo lay the corpses of rats, which he successfully destroyed with his lightning strike. His gaze was focused, but Bob was no longer visible. Bob eluded him, and Leo thought to himself that Bob really had a unique skill. Leo reflected, analyzing what was happening, and realized that Bob, despite his aloofness, could be of great value as an ally. The character, with a smile on his face, came up with a plan to lure Bob out. Meanwhile, Bob realized that he had pulled away and stopped. Bob was finally convinced that no one was following him, and that he was truly alone. The protagonist thought about the chase, wondering if Leo was actually interested in pursuing him or if it was just a way to distract him. After some thought, Bob approached the cave, trying to explore its surroundings as carefully as possible. Suddenly, from the darkness of the cave, a creature attacked Bob. Its sharp claws and teeth sought to tear the hero's skin. Bob instantly reacted to the attack. In a few quick movements, he pulled out his sword and delivered a precise blow. The character dealt with several monsters inside the cave, leaving behind only pools of blood and destroyed bodies. In the cave, Bob sprayed a powder that muffled his smell so that no one could smell it. Bob sat down on the floor of the cave and took Surtur's heart out of his inventory. Bob's body was recovering and he decided to swallow the crystal. Fire spread through the hero's veins, filling his body with unknown energy. Bob's whole body burned to the point of madness. The flames spread through his veins, filling him with burning power and unbearable pain. Bob fell in pain, his body writhing on the ground, overcome by unbearable heat and agony. In agony, Bob saw the silhouette of a figure in a lion-skin cape who emerged from the fire like a spirit. Bob screamed in pain until the fire from the crystal engulfed every cell of his being. As the fire died down, Bob's performance began to improve and the pain gradually subsided, giving him hope for relief. Bob collapsed to the ground again, his last strength exhausted as his body continued to adapt to the new power. The hero lay on the ground. His body was covered with sweat, but with every moment his condition improved. The fiery streaks on his skin gradually subsided. The main character, having acquired a new skill, could not withstand the load and passed out, losing consciousness from fatigue and pain. 6 hours passed and Bob woke up. He slowly opened his eyes, feeling that the pain and burning that tormented him earlier had significantly decreased. A strange thought flashed through Bob's head. What if his further journey was not only a test of strength? Having fully recovered, Bob opened the leaderboard and saw that he was behind. Bob came out of the cave, and the sun's rays illuminated his face. Bob now had fiery eyes that glowed with a bright, fiery light. Ahead, Bob saw a village surrounded by greenery. Through a curtain of trees and bushes, he noticed low houses with thatched roofs. It was an orc village, different from the usual peaceful appearance. Round houses with thick walls, built from rough timber logs and stone. Bob slowly approached the orc village, his steps confident and persistent. The hero decided to test his new giant fire skill on the orcs, feeling that it could be a great way to evaluate the power of his recent improvements. All the houses and orcs in the village were on fire. The flames glowed brightly and raged in the air, consuming everything that remained intact. With each orc he killed, Bob felt his level growing, his strength and abilities improving. Leo and his companion stood on a hill, discussing possible actions. Henry was a tall man with green eyes, brown hair, and a green robe. Leo announced that the team needed another member with unique skills to increase their chances of success. But first, they needed to hunt to improve their skills and gather resources for the upcoming trials. Haley, a half-blood dark elf with white hair, created a blue sphere of energy in her hand. The heroes stood over the pit, looking into it, preparing for the upcoming test. Leo jumped into the hole, warning the others to stay away from the edges to avoid getting hit. The hero gathered his strength, concentrating the energy in his hand, and swung powerfully, preparing to strike. There was the sound of a strong impact, accompanied by a splash of yellow lightning that scattered across the pit, illuminating everything around. Henry, amazed at the scale of the destruction, asked in surprise if this was really the place they were talking about. Leo confirmed that this was the right place and invited the others to enter. Haley warily asked Leo what awaited them in this place. Leo looked carefully at the entrance to the cave, as if he was expecting something. Henry called out to Leo, warily watching his expression. Leo, angry that Bob had outscored him, rushed forward in a frenzy, destroying the caterpillars in his path. The others, observing Leo's swift and unreasonable act, watched in bewilderment as he went deeper into the cave. Thea, Haley's sister and half-blood dark elf, noticed Leo's competitive spirit and added that his desire to surpass Bob made him unpredictable. Henry stood a little embarrassed as a girl in light armor approached him. It was Meg, originally from a mercenary family who wielded magic. The heroes caught up with Leo, and a fork opened in front of them. The road divided into two paths. Leo made the decision to split the team to explore both paths and increase the chances. Meg took out her weapon and prepared to follow one of the paths. The character swung her sword and, with a determined attitude, moved forward along with the rest of the squad. Huge caterpillars covered with hard shells appeared on the squad's path. Meg's movements were precise and graceful, each swing of the sword seeming to carve a path through the thick shells of the caterpillars, demonstrating skill and confidence. The rest were already tired of clearing the cave. Fatigue began to affect their actions. Henry's mana level had decreased, and he decided to conserve it so as not to deplete his resources before the end of the battle. A huge door appeared before the heroes, leading to the depths of the cave. Henry said that behind this door is the boss. Meg warned them not to relax and prepare for the upcoming battle. Henry said with a smile that everything was fine. Meg asked what was the matter. Suddenly, behind the massive gates, an eerie sound was heard, which resembled a deep growl, blocking all other sounds. The heroes gripped their weapons tightly, their fingers tense on the handles, ready to fight. Meg was the first to decisively enter the gate, her sword ready for action. In the hall where the heroes entered, everything was covered in blood. The blood spread across the floor, forming stinking puddles. The heroes looked questioningly, their eyes full of worry and tension. Henry noticed a shadow flashing in the corner of the hall. He immediately became alert and gave a signal to the others. The shadow's eyes radiated fire, their bright yellow light reminiscent of hot coals. As the shadow in front of them took shape, the heroes saw that it was Bob, his eyes sparkling with a bright flame. Bob now looked like something completely different, gifted and scary. A vivid and intense scene flashed through Bob's thoughts. The hero noted to himself that the boss was incredibly tenacious. Every attack and every magic he used against the boss didn't seem to be as effective as expected. But despite the incredible vitality of the boss, Bob won. The battle was difficult and exhausting. The fight against such a strong opponent showed what he was truly capable of, and despite the fatigue, he felt satisfied. Bob sat on the huge carcass of the monster. His breathing was still heavy from the recent battle. He turned to the heroes who entered the hall and said ironically, "You are late." Thea, with surprise and disbelief in her voice, asked, "Did you deal with him alone?" Henry couldn't believe what he was seeing. "I didn't even suspect that someone could be stronger than Leo," he thought to himself. "As you can see, I did it alone," Bob continued. Bob carefully assessed the heroes, noticing their surprise and confusion. The main character realized that they were divided into two groups to hunt. Bob turned his attention to Meg, realizing that she was behind Leo on the leaderboard, which could mean she was at a high level. Henry approached Bob with an offer to join their team, noting that their group needed strong players like him. The main character refused Henry's offer, after which Meg asked if he was going to go to the boss alone again. When Meg asked if he was going to go to the boss alone again, Bob answered yes. Meg reminded Bob that the point of beating a boss was to work as a team, not to fight alone. Bob didn't react to Meg's remark, continuing to stare intently. "So what do you want?" Bob began to say. Thea contacted Leo and reported the situation with Bob and that they were late to defeat the boss. Leo appeared in the hall at the same second. The hero, shouting Bob's name, walked towards him with all speed. Leo almost approached Bob, but he did not flinch, remaining standing in place with a cold expression on his face. Bob simply grabbed Leo's head and held him in place, preventing him from moving. With the next movement, Bob pressed Leo against the monster's carcass, holding him in a tight grip. Leo's allies looked on in surprise. Bob continued, letting Leo go. "Do you want to survive or just beat the boss?" Meg thought for a second, realizing that Bob was questioning their priorities. At that very second, Meg flew into a rage, unable to withstand Bob's derogatory tone. Bob didn't react, remaining unperturbed by Meg's outburst. The main character, raising his finger up, said that his goal is not just to climb the tower, but to break through its ceiling. Leo finally broke free from Bob's grip and shouted, "What are you doing?" "I thought you were going to attack, so I defended myself," Bob replied. "When such a strong man rushes at you, that's all that's left," Bob continued. "If so, then I'm sorry," Leo replied, and Henry was embarrassed, noticing that this belief had an effect on him. "Breaking through the ceiling is a very ambitious plan," Leo began to say. Bob replied, "A sardine cannot swim with a whale. Don't think of me as some kind of sardine. Someday I will become a king," Leo replied. Leo's allies watched their dialogue with interest and bewilderment. Bob smiled slightly as he watched Leo and his allies react. Leo offered Bob a bet. If his team and he themselves were the first to kill the next boss, then Bob would agree to join their team. And if he and his team fail to take down the boss first, he will come to Bob's aid when he calls. Bob agreed to Leo's proposal, and they agreed to meet at the next boss to decide which of them could handle the task first. Bob jumped off the monster's carcass. "Then see you at the next boss," Leo said, banging his fists. Bob was a little embarrassed and added, "Good luck to you." Leo jumped off the monster's carcass and called his allies. "We need to hurry," he said. "Time is running out." Turning around and heading towards the exit from the hall, Bob raised his hand up and noticed that time had stopped. Leo, slightly surprised, asked what this meant. The main character answered, "We are not on an island, but on a living creature." "And these monsters were just parasites," Bob added. "So this boss was the king of parasites," Leo said after looking at the carcass. "And to get rid of the parasites, the creature had to dive underwater. And then the salt water would kill the parasites, but now that they are dead, the countdown has stopped," Bob explained and turned around. The two characters on the surface looked on in surprise as the countdown time suddenly stopped. They were fighting the orcs on the surface when the countdown suddenly froze. The sword quickly plunged into the head of the red orc, interrupting his battle cry. It was thrown by Bob's sword, hitting his target with precision. Other orcs looked at each other warily, sensing a growing threat. Bob retrieves the sword from the orc's corpse, intently assessing his next target. His eyes emitted a fiery light, preparing for the next clash. The orcs, seeing Bob's power and determination, began to run away in panic. The countdown has begun and Bob realizes that time is limited and he needs to act quickly. Lightning flashed brightly, striking the mountain and illuminating its surroundings. Heroes gathered at the top of the mountain, ready to face a new challenge. Thea and Henry watched as the heroes gathered at the top of the mountain, their eyes following every movement. Some of the heroes already looked much stronger. Their armor and weapons were more impressive. Meg approached Henry and Thea. She carefully examined those around her and said that not everyone would survive. They stood on a hill and watched what was happening below. Leo approached them, his face focused and his eyes sparkling with determination. He said that it looked like everyone was preparing for the last stage. Henry noticed Bob among the crowd and turned in his direction. Bob confidently moved towards the heroes, his cape fluttering in the wind, and his every step radiated confidence and determination. The main character activated his skill. He carefully studied potential allies, assessing their strength and abilities. He noticed that Henry and Thea's mana flow had changed and they had become stronger. Leo greeted Bob with a slight smile and noticeable interest, his voice laced with respect and latent rivalry. The character asked, "Will you still go to the boss alone?" To which Bob replied that yes, he prefers to act alone, since he has his own goals and methods that suit him best. The man in black clothes invited Bob to team up, believing that his skills and strength would be a great addition to his team. Leo was instantly enraged when he saw the black-clad character asking Bob to join his team. The hero snapped his fingers and lightning appeared out of nowhere. Frightened, people began to run away in panic in different directions, and soon there was a commotion around them, with screams and running. Saying that time is precious, Bob headed towards the crater. "Very interesting," Leo said with a smile, watching Bob approach the crater. Bob jumped into the crater, consumed by the desire to quickly deal with the boss. The main character landed, and a notification appeared that you had entered the boss room. The spirit of the upcoming battle was in the air. A horde of orcs appeared in front of Bob, led by a huge snake that slithered and hissed, demonstrating its terrifying strength. Following Bob, the rest of the heroes jumped into the crater. The two characters standing nearby were surprised by the number of orcs that surrounded them. Bob quickly took in his surroundings. Hordes of orcs and a huge snake, ready to attack. Having identified the possible weak points of his opponents and his strengths, the hero prepared for battle. Bob took out his sword and used the fire whirlwind skill on it. The sword burst into flames. The other heroes watched with interest as Bob prepared for battle. They stood waiting to see what the hero was capable of. Leo crossed his arms and watched what was happening, assessing his abilities in battle. Henry, noticing Bob's disappearance, became alert and began to carefully examine the surrounding area. Bob attacked the orcs from above, using the element of surprise to inflict maximum damage. Henry and Thea were amazed by Bob's skill and his ability to launch sudden and powerful attacks. The main character plunged his sword into the large red orc, dealing a crushing blow. Bob's eyes glowed with fire, intensifying his rage and determination. Leo began to get angry as he watched Bob storm to victory. Eager to prove his strength and show that he is not inferior in fighting abilities, Leo decided to join Bob. Leo, with fury in his eyes, deftly broke the spears flying at him. Orc blood scattered to the sides, mixing with flashes of fire and light from the battle. Bob created a fiery whirlwind with his sword, which quickly tore the orcs and their armor into pieces. Leo's allies also decided to join the battle to support his Bob and destroy the remaining enemy forces. Meg and Henry ran, fighting orcs along the way and trying to provide support. Thea and Haley used their magic, creating powerful spells to weaken the orcs and make the battle easier. Henry used the concentration of mana in his hand, delivering devastating blows to the orcs. Bob noticed their coordinated work and appreciated how the magic and energy of their allies effectively destroyed their opponents. Their skills will definitely be useful in what is about to begin, the hero thought to himself. Leo froze, as if sensing great power. A majestic gate appeared before Leo, shrouded in a mysterious aura. Its surface was covered with patterns like ancient symbols. Leo and Bob peered at the gate, their hands running over the intricate patterns. When Bob began to slowly open the gate, Leo, seeing this, shouted, "Are you going there alone too?" Bob, not paying attention to Leo's screams, decisively stepped through the opened gate. Terrible screams were heard behind the gate, piercing and unnatural, which made the other heroes freeze in horror, and fear enveloped them. Leo clenched his fist, concentrating all his inner strength into it, and his hand became unnaturally bright. As they entered, a giant chimera with flaming eyes and claws appeared before their eyes. One look from the chimera froze the blood in their veins, and the heroes felt cold fear running through their bodies. But the chimera was chained to a huge magical cage. Its giant paws were enclosed in chains. Bob, not paying attention to the horror, slowly approached the cage. Leo, without taking his eyes off the locked chimera, asked if this was the final boss. To the side of Bob and Leo, at the foot of the ancient pedestal, the chimera control stone mysteriously sparkled. At that moment, a notification appeared in front of them, which said that the owner of the chimera receives additional points for killing heroes. Meg thought, her eyes clouded with worry. Bob walked towards the stone when Leo grabbed his shoulder. His voice was full of worry. "Wait, we need to think first." With the words, "Let him go," Bob snatched the sword. His determination was unshakable. Bob destroyed the stone with a powerful blow, and its ruins scattered throughout the room. Now that the stone was destroyed, Bob commanded the chimera. Bob ordered the chimera to destroy the wall. Henry was surprised to see the wall being destroyed and Bob commanding the chimera. Bob, with a piercing gaze, turned to the group and said, "Our enemy is different." Leo, without hiding his anxious anticipation, asked who our true enemy was. The main character answered with a heavy sigh, "This is the creator of the chimera. It's your choice to go with me or not." Bob resolutely headed inside the destroyed wall. Henry, looking at Leo worriedly, asked what we would do. Looking ahead with determination, Leo replied, "Let's follow him first." The heroes followed the chimera and Bob into the destroyed passage. The room they entered resembled an ominous torture chamber. Its walls were covered with dark marks and frightening mechanisms. At the end of the room stood a mysterious silhouette in a cloak, his figure shrouded in darkness. Beneath the cloak was a disfigured figure, his body covered in scars and distortions that told a story of long suffering and madness. The chimera, sensing his presence, growled. The character was trying to sew together body parts scattered on the table. "Do not kill the chimera, but come to me with it," turning to the heroes, said the creator of the chimera. With a grim smile, he added, "It's interesting that you seem to have come in the midst of my work." The character gave Bob and Leo an appraising look, his eyes twinkling with sinister interest. Leo's face turned red with anger, and he felt his patience running out. Leo, with anger in his voice, told the character, "You can try to control us, but remember one thing, we will not become part of your terrible games." Bob, noticing Leo's outburst of anger, calmly said, "Don't get excited, Leo, we need to keep our cool." The character watched them with sinister interest. The main character, pointing to his eyes, asked, "Do you know who they are?" Bob showed his eyes more clearly, trying to attract attention. The character, seeing Bob's eyes, exploded with rage. The room was filled with the sounds of battle. The main character repelled the character's attack using a fire whirlwind. His hand flashed brightly as he created a powerful field of fire. The heroes quickly prepared for battle, taking up positions. The character, looking at Bob with burning anger, shouted, "You are related to that monkey!" Strange monsters began to emerge from the dark corners of the room. Their bodies deformed and twisted into eerie shapes. Bob, using the chimera, broke through the monsters that tried to surround him. While he was fighting the monsters, Leo's allies arrived. Leo shouted with complete determination, "Let's wipe them out," his voice full of fighting spirit and energy. The battle began. The sounds of metal and magic were heard. Every blow, spell, and maneuver was aimed at breaking through the enemy ranks and supporting Bob. Each of them, despite fatigue and danger, continued to fight with incredible determination. Bob, with determination, quickly approached the character. The chimera's creator, seeing Bob approaching, suddenly raised his hands and a massive protective coffin appeared from the shadows. The character suddenly held a staff that emitted an ominous light. Bob, gathering all his strength, smashed the coffin with a powerful blow. The hero's arm increased slightly in size, and his muscles strengthened before his eyes. This was a new skill that he acquired, strengthened by his internal energy. The creator couldn't believe his eyes when he saw it. He was shocked. Bob looked impressive. His arm radiated power, and his eyes glowed with a fiery light. Seeing Bob demonstrate his powers, he suddenly realized that the hero was somehow connected to Olympus. Bob clenched his fist and his muscles tensed. The creator of the chimera screamed loudly in despair and rage. He swung his staff. The magical runes on its surface sparkled. Bob, not paying attention to the character's furious waving of the staff, walked decisively towards him. The character again summoned a reinforced coffin, which appeared in the air, surrounded by powerful protective magic. The main character, without slowing down, again struck a powerful blow at the reinforced coffin. The creator, in desperation, summoned a poisonous cloud that quickly filled the room, green smoke swirling ominously. Bob briefly remembered the words of his comrade, who had once warned him about the importance of protection. The fist rushed towards the enemy with a powerful roar. The blow was so strong that it shook the air. After a powerful blow, the hand began to emit a green glow, filling with magical energy. The creator was thrown back with incredible force. Bob's eyes, breaking through the shadows, emitted a red light. The creator of the chimera, gathering the last remnants of his magical energy, summoned a black wall of thorns. The character thought to himself with grim satisfaction, "This is my strongest skill." He felt the magical energy concentrating in the black spikes and knew that he was now using all his power. But Bob could not be stopped. Despite the spikes and deadly traps, he continued to approach the character. With the magical light emanating from the staff, he hoped to stop the hero's relentless onslaught. The creator, feeling that his last defense was beginning to crack, tensed to the limit, his face distorted with tension. The creator's defenses cracked under Bob's pressure. Bob, having overcome the last obstacles and approached the creator, grabbed him by the throat with incredible force. The main character pinned the character to the floor, squeezing his throat with unrelenting force. The creator was terrified, his eyes widened in fear. The main character hit him powerfully in the face. The hero, feeling that victory was close, began to violently beat the character. His eyes burned with fire, reflecting rage and determination, searching for the vulnerability of his creator. In the midst of the furious attack, Bob suddenly remembered the monkey's words. "Use the power of your eyes in a moment of rage. You can see everything with them," he told Bob. "Concentrate on finding weak points and attack with purpose," he continued. Bob continued to hit harder to cause maximum damage and drain his opponent's strength. The creator, breathing heavily through groans and pain, said with difficulty, "I still won't die." Bob's eyes emitted a bright light, which became even more intense with anger. The main character, focusing his gaze on the character, noticed the vulnerabilities in his body. The hero quickly and decisively grabbed the creator's hand and pulled it out. The creator, sensing that his defeat was inevitable, began to beg Bob to stop. But Bob's determination and fury were so powerful that they left no room for compassion or doubt. Bob grabbed the creator's leg, pressing with incredible force. The words of his friends flashed through Bob's thoughts again, giving him additional strength. The joy of victory reigned in Bob's thoughts. He felt deep satisfaction that he had finally achieved his goal and defeated the enemy. Bob stood in front of the creator's body. The character was defeated. His body lay motionless on the floor. The monsters summoned by the creator fell to the floor, their bodies immobilized. The rest of the heroes, watching how the monsters summoned by the creator fell and lost their power, were surprised. "Calm down, they won't be a threat anymore," Bob said. Thea, looking around the surroundings and noticing the tension on the faces of her allies, asked if no one was injured. Noticing that Meg looked especially bad, Thea hurried to her to help. "That's all," Leo asked, turning to Bob with a tired tone. "Let's move away," Leo suggested, taking a step back. Leo looked intensely at Bob, his gaze focused and penetrating. "Someone got hurt because of your choices," Leo began, his voice serious. Leo asked if it was necessary to kill the creator. Bob, meeting Leo's gaze, answered with confidence, "Yes, it was necessary." Leo continued with a slight anger on his face. "You could have broken the record anyway without setting anyone up." The main character thought for a moment and remembered a battle from the past. He remembered how at that time his choice also required sacrifices and difficult decisions. Bob, deeply aware of his answer, said with a heavy sigh, "It was impossible to do otherwise." Leo, after hearing Bob's explanation, still couldn't understand what he was talking about. Leo was about to leave, absorbed in thoughts, when suddenly the manager appeared. The character turned around and saw some beggar next to Bob. Bob, noticing the appearance of the manager, said, "The manager is here." Leo, immediately realizing the significance of the moment, bowed with respect. The manager, looking at Leo with genuine anger, said, "You started from Olympus. I'm ready to tear out Zeus's beard right now." The manager grabbed his head, expressing despair and shock. "Because of you, Bob, I will have a lot of work again," he continued. The character, with a deep sigh, tried to change his tone and added, "But I am here to reward you," and handed Bob the blue crystal sparkling in his hand. The crystal emitted a dark and mysterious light. Bob, taking the black godstone, thought to himself, "We need 2 more. Collecting the remaining stones will be easier than I expected," the hero thought to himself in surprise. "All rewards have been received. Now I am sending you to the tower." The manager made a gesture with his hand, and the space in front of the heroes began to flicker. The manager added with a clear hint of severity, "Do not create disorder there." The character remained where he was, watching their progress with an expression of serious satisfaction and anticipation. In an instant, the heroes found themselves in the vicinity of the tower. 2 strangers, noticing the appearance of the heroes, immediately drew attention to them. Bob thought to himself, "Everyone here is a player now." Leo, examining the surroundings, noticed several figures. These people wore clothes and symbols characteristic of the Olympians. He asked Bob, "Are you not going to join the guild?" Bob replied, "No, I'm not going to join the guild." Then he added, "By the way, about meeting the manager." Leo asked with interest, "What you want to say?" His voice was full of curiosity and expectation. The main character continued, with a serious expression on his face, "You need to find out all the ins and outs of Olympus yourself." "That's all," Bob said, and having finished the conversation, got ready to leave. Bob, waving his hand goodbye, added, "Be careful with jackals." One of the Olympians approached Leo and bowed, his presence immediately attracting attention. The Olympian who approached Leo turned out to be Greg, Ares' chief of guard. Leo asked what you wanted. Greg replied with a cold and domineering tone, "I wanted to know how ready you are for the test." His words, full of contempt and arrogance, made Leo angry. Leo, angry, felt anger boiling in his chest. He tensed and prepared to strike. Greg, noticing Leo's intention and reading his anger on his face, said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. My words were misunderstood." Leo, still not hiding his displeasure, snapped, "Go." Before leaving, Greg asked who it was with you, to which Leo replied that he was a friend. Ahead, beyond the horizon, the city loomed, its silhouette clearly outlined against the sky. Jackals are robbing new players who have not joined the guild, Bob thought to himself. He knew that if the jackals posed a real threat, then action had to be taken. The hero, continuing to think, suddenly felt that he was being watched. His instincts became wary. "Great, I'll check something on them," Bob continued to think. The observers wore wolf masks that hid their faces. These people were clearly planning an attack and were already preparing for action. Suddenly, as if disappearing into thin air, Bob disappeared. The observers froze in place, surprised and confused. Severed heads fell to the ground at different speeds. The jackals realized that they were faced with something much more dangerous than they expected. One by one, Bob methodically and mercilessly eliminated the jackals. Bob grabbed one of the jackals, his hands gripping his opponent tightly. The main character took off the mask from one of the jackals, and underneath it a frightened red-haired man was revealed. "I have a question," the hero said in a firm and decisive tone. Bob raised his hand, preparing to strike. The main character hit. Under the pressure of pain and threats, the character, gripped by fear, shouted, "Okay, okay, I will answer all the questions." Bob, keeping his voice tense, asked where to find Cloudless. The city at night was truly magnificent. The reflection of the lights danced on the water of the canals, creating mesmerizing patterns. The main character was sitting in a cozy restaurant located on one of the crowded streets. Bob stretched his neck, feeling the tension and fatigue from previous events gradually recede. The nearby bazaar was bustling with people, and street vendors were attracting the attention of shoppers with their colorful wares. The hero remembered how he used to spend time here with his comrades. These memories were full of warmth and nostalgia. Bob abruptly returned to reality. Realizing that this was not the time to be nostalgic, he took out the stone that the manager gave him. The main character knew who to go to with this stone. Bob knew a blacksmith who could help him process the stone. The hero went outside where the air was fresh. A man stood in front with a boy. He held the boy as if protecting him. Without stopping, Bob walked past the man and the boy. Suddenly, the hero felt a knife pressing into his back. Bob, with a deft throw, knocked over the stranger who was trying to attack. Other gang members ran up, ready to support their comrade. Bob quickly dealt with the rest of the gang using his skills and strength. He told them not to rob anymore and left, leaving behind tired and battered bandits. There was a blacksmith sign on the house, decorated with an image of a hammer and shield. It swayed in the wind, creating a light metallic sound. Bob walked inside and the warmth of the forge enveloped him. The blacksmith was muscular, with gray hair that caught his eye. Despite his age, he looked strong and full of vitality. He asked Bob, "Are you lost?" Bob, examining the sword, replied that he had come specifically to him. The hero took the sword, examined it, and said that it was of poor quality. At this, the blacksmith frowned, his face becoming tense with dissatisfaction. The blacksmith took the hammer and his eyes lit up with fire. He asked Bob where he came from. Bob took out a sphere with the number 1 on it. The main character took out a crystal. The blacksmith, seeing this, looked closely and became interested. The blacksmith peered into the crystal with deep interest, his eyes filled with curiosity, following the play of light. Bob asked if the blacksmith could cut the crystal. "Even after you saw the lousy goods of this forge, are you ready to entrust it to me?" the blacksmith asked in surprise. The main character answered yes, to which the blacksmith, with dissatisfaction and disgust, said, "Crazy," and turned around. Bob picked up the sword again and examined it carefully checking every detail. He said that the sword may be bad, but the blacksmith's handwriting can still be traced. The character looked at the hero with unexpected interest. "What are you doing?" he asked, looking at Bob with obvious surprise. The blacksmith, after a pause, nevertheless agreed to take on the order, his face gradually filling with determination. Patrick, that was the name of the blacksmith, put forward the condition that no one should know about the order. Bob agreed, promising to keep the secret. Bob sat and dined in the tavern, enjoying the comfort and taste of the food. Smiling, Leo sat down next to him. "I've been looking for you for a long time," he said, sitting down at the table and pouring himself a drink. "Give me your number already," Leo demanded comically. "I didn't think the man would shoot at my number," Bob replied. The waiter approached them, holding a tray in his hands. Bob turned to Leo. "Can you help me with one thing?" Leo, chewing, asked what. "Kill the leader of the jackals," Bob answered. Leo choked and put his fork in his mouth to clear his throat. "Okay, tomorrow night," Leo said, then got up and left, leaving Bob alone at the table. Bob noticed that someone was watching him, feeling a gaze that would not leave him alone. The stranger approached, took off his hood and introduced himself as Gregor. He sat down at Bob's table without waiting for an invitation and sat opposite him, looking at him carefully. "You took first place, Leo second. There are rumors that you are a monster," he began. "Oh, I'll take that as a compliment," Bob replied without losing confidence. Gregor took a sip of tea, his face unreadable. "Come to my master Ares," he continued, pausing to give Bob time to think. Bob said that's enough and drank his tea, not paying attention to the offer. "So you refuse Olympus's offer," Gregor said after Bob. Bob replied that he would not work with unworthy people. Gregor sat angry, his face was gloomy and tense. He thought about it and began to formulate a plan, carefully planning how to use the jackals to accomplish his goal. A servant approached him, approaching cautiously. "We will kill Bob with the help of the jackals," Gregor said, his voice full of cold calculation. "Prepare 100 men," he told his servants, confidently and decisively. "First, follow me," Bob said to Leo, leading him along. Leo looked at Bob silently, his gaze full of anticipation. The creator's words flashed through Leo's head. Bob walked forward along the street, confidently leading the way. Leo was deep in thought, lost in thought. While Bob confidently moved forward, Bob called out to him, "Hey Leo, it's okay," with slight concern in his voice. They entered the store where there was only one person who carefully watched their entrance. Bob asked if you were cloudless, and the man, noticing the alarm, immediately tried to run away. The main character instantly caught up with him, grabbing him by the shoulder and stopping the fugitive. The stranger tried to pull out the knife. Not allowing the attack to be made, Bob neutralized it with a deft throw. He pinned him to the floor and said, "Sit," with steely determination in his voice. Bob, holding the stranger on the floor, said, "I need the king of the jackals." He tied Cloudless, carefully wrapping the ropes and ensuring that he could not escape. "He looks frail. It's unlikely that it's him," Leo said, examining the bound man with doubt. "Look at this knife," Bob said, showing Leo the weapon he had taken from Cloudless. "There is a high level of poison on him." "It's definitely him," Bob continued. The man was sitting tied up. Cloudless's face and voice changed, and he said how the information was leaked. "There you go," Bob said to Leo, confirming that this man was Cloudless. "Do you even know who is behind me?" Cloudless spoke threateningly. Leo remembered Bob's words before they entered. a warning that they might encounter someone dangerous. Lightning filled the room. Bright light and crackling filled the space. Bob asked, "Do you take orders from Gregor?" Cloudless's face distorted and he answered yes. "We have a favor to ask you," Leo said. Bob continued, "Gather all the jackals and come to the indicated place by midnight, and then Olympus will reward you." The main character asked if you could handle it. His voice was full of confidence. Bob slipped the note to Cloudless, not letting him go. "Let's go," Bob said to Leo, pulling him towards the exit. "Maybe you can explain everything?" Leo began when they went outside. "You want me to believe that the jackals and Olympus are working together?" Leo continued. "Believe it or not, it's up to you," answered Bob. "But you heard everything yourself." The next day, Bob was waiting for Leo near the city gates. "If you had stayed a little longer, I would have gone alone," Bob said when Leo finally approached. "I thought about your words. Even though Olympus was my home, I must find out everything," Leo said, deciding to go with Bob. The figure of his mother flashed through Leo's head. Her image was full of love and wisdom, reminding him of the importance of the decision he had made. After talking a little more, they decided to hit the road. "There shouldn't be any jackals," Leo said, taking on his battle form. Meanwhile, not far from the city, jackals gathered in a cave, preparing for their plan and discussing the details of the upcoming conspiracy. The most important of the jackals asked if everything was in place. His voice was stern and demanding. One of the jackals coughed, attracting the attention of the main one. Everyone gathered and raised their heads, listening carefully to the main one, Cloudless, who stood in front of them. He raised his sword and, greeting everyone, said, "Today, we will change the course of events." Everyone raised their hands in the air, rejoicing and welcoming the upcoming changes. Two more people appeared in masks. "These are our patrons from Olympus," the chief said. He bowed to them and greeted them. The chief handed them a wad of Asgardian money, saying, "This is payment for your help. Let it become the beginning of a great alliance between us." One of the strangers took the money and remained silent, his face remaining hidden under a mask. "Great," the stranger said, putting the money in his inventory. "All that remains is to say goodbye." Snapping his fingers, the stranger said, and everything around burst into flames. A blinding light filled the cave, leaving only shadows and smoke. The jackals began to burn and scream, their terrible screams mingling with the crackling fire and howling flames as they tried to escape the deadly firestorm. Leo was the first to emerge from behind the mask, his eyes blazing with determination as he tore the fabric and stepped into the fiery chaos. Bob then revealed his identity by removing his mask and drawing his sword. Leo did not spare anyone who tried to escape, each blow preventing any escape for the jackals. The main jackal, in a panic, tried to contact someone through his ball, but his efforts were interrupted by Bob, who destroyed the amulet with his sword, leaving no chance for help. The character, surrounded by flames, looked at the heroes with an expression of extreme horror and despair. He took off his mask, revealing his distorted face, and full of rage and despair, rushed into battle with Bob. Cloudless screamed in pain as Bob landed another blow, breaking through his defenses. The main character dealt the final blow to Cloudless. After the heroes had completed their cleanup and were confident that the threat had been eliminated, they exited the cave and found themselves in the fresh air. Leo looked at Bob and sighed. Leo was silent, looking at Bob, and internally realized that he was not used to the cruelty of war and murder. "How can you be so calm?" Leo asked. Bob looked at Leo and replied that sometimes, to survive, you have to accept reality as it is and not let your emotions get in the way of action. "You didn't seem kind before," Leo said. Bob shrugged and replied that sometimes being cruel is a necessity, not a choice. The main character took out a wad of money and said that they did not just get into this business and invited Leo to split the money. Leo was surprised and asked, "Seriously, do you really feel that way about this money?" "You can refuse," Bob began, but Leo interrupted him. "Okay, let's split it." "You never told me what the manager gave you as a reward," Bob said. Nervously pounding his fist on the table, Gregor exclaimed why he couldn't contact Cloudless. At the same time, a man ran into the tavern and, out of breath, said, "I found the jackals, they are all dead." After some time, they stood in a cave in front of a mountain of corpses, indicating the complete elimination of the jackals. Gregor became enraged, looking at the mountain of corpses, and began to scream. Bob was about to lie down on the bed. The hero, examining the contents of his inventory, decided to examine the egg that he received as a reward. Bob took the egg in his hands, studying it. It was an unusual color and had mysterious symbols that he could not decipher. If Leo had received the Hand of Thunder, then the egg might be equal in value and potential power, Bob thought. Suddenly, for a second, the space around Bob changed. The egg greeted him. Bob recognized the patterns on the egg as symbolism of the outer gods. and realized that it was connected to ancient and powerful forces. What the hell are you, Bob thought. The main character approached the door of the forge. Patrick was working on something, intently forging metal, when Bob entered the forge. I processed your stone, he began. What kind of armor do you prefer? He continued, pointing to a strange bottle. It just turned out to be a byproduct. And it can be used to make armor, Patrick added. I don't have the materials, Bob said. Patrick stood up abruptly and said, That's enough mithril. The blacksmith showed a piece of mithril, shiny and durable. Patrick said that the cost would be high, since the mithril and work required significant expenses, but emphasized that the quality of the product would justify the price. Bob thought about it. The hero suggested that Bob take the product on credit, promising flexible payment terms. Bob agreed to the offer and took out his sword so Patrick could evaluate it. Okay, Patrick said. So it's a blade. A week passed. Gregor stood and thought about how to get his lost money back. A soldier approached him and told him that all the players in support had gathered. Then go ahead, said Gregor. Meanwhile, Bob continued to kill monsters to level up. But the level rose very slowly, and Bob felt that much more effort would be required to achieve the desired progress. At the same time, in the forge, Patrick examined the stone. He studied each of its patterns and features. Suddenly a noise was heard, and Patrick became alert, listening to the sounds coming from behind the door of the forge. Taking his hammer, the hero headed towards the door, warily preparing for a possible threat. Going out into the street, Patrick saw a detachment of soldiers led by Gregor. I didn't expect to see you in such a hole. That's why they couldn't find you, Gregor began. We have come for you, Hephaestus, pointing his sword continued. Hephaestus struck a powerful blow with his hammer, and the sound echoed throughout the area. The soldiers, seeing the power of the blow and the rage of Hephaestus, recoiled in fear, trying to maintain their distance. A mysterious player with flaming hair and clothes that sparkled in shades of red and white appeared. He pulled out a shining spear, and Hephaestus stood in a fighting stance, ready for battle. Hephaestus decisively rushed forward, delivering the first crushing blow. Ricky, that was the character's name, instantly blocked the crushing blow. He deftly grabbed Hephaestus's hammer, seizing the initiative in the battle. Hephaestus forcefully threw the hero away. Hephaestus's eyes sparkled with rage. He dealt a powerful blow, capable of breaking everything in its path. Hephaestus slightly injured Ricky, leaving a painful mark on his body. Ricky prepared to counterattack, intending to turn the pain into his strength. Sparks and lightning flew through the air as Ricky quickly approached Hephaestus. A strong roar was heard throughout the city. Hephaestus, struck by the blow, began to turn into stone. Ricky used the Medusa shield created by Hephaestus against the hero. Hephaestus, completely petrified, fell to the ground. Quickly immerse the criminal, Gregor ordered the soldiers. Words won't do that, Bob suddenly appeared. Lousy people in this wonderful place, he continued. Ricky looked at Bob with curiosity and interest, his eyes clearly assessing the strength and determination of his opponent. Gregor stared at Bob tensely, his voice full of anger and surprise. Bob looked confidently at Gregor and said, I'm his client. The main character used a fire whirlwind and turned the soldiers into living flames, dancing in chaos. Bob activated his fiery eyes and began to look for a trajectory to attack. With powerful jerks, Bob scattered the soldiers like puppets. He looked around, like a hunter carefully studying the field. And without wasting any time, he released spheres of mana that flared up in bright streams, tearing apart the space in front of him. There was a deafening explosion. Do you think you can cope only with numbers? The hero said with confidence. The soldiers rushed towards him like a wave, unaware of the formidable power they would face. The hero activated a giant fire, and his eyes sparkled with rage, reflecting the power that could consume everything around him. Bob looked around to see if Hephaestus had awakened. Ricky broke through the blazing fire and stabbed Bob. Rubbing his face, Bob gathered his strength. Ricky, slowly brushing away the fire, asked why Bob needed Hephaestus. Bob, taking the sword out of his inventory, replied that he needed Hephaestus to create a unique item. The main character activated the giant's skill, and his hand was filled with power, as if the power of the whole world was concentrated in it. Like a flash of lightning, Ricky threw his fire spear at Bob. Bob, swinging, deflected Ricky's fiery spear, his hand meeting the flying spear with incredible strength. The hero, concentrating his energy, created spheres of mana that flared up around him. They began to slowly rotate. With a shout, Bob released mana spheres at Ricky. Ricky stood, his hand trembling, holding tightly to his shoulder from which blood flowed, drops of which fell to the ground. Bob activated the giant's power again, and a powerful aura wrapped around his arm. But before Bob had time to fully compose himself, Ricky, with strength and swiftness, struck him with a powerful blow, his fist cutting through the air and crashing into Bob. Bob coughed up blood and red droplets came out of his mouth. Ricky put all his strength into this blow. The hero was thrown back by a powerful blow and, like a projectile, flew through the air, breaking through the wall of the forge with a deafening roar. I greatly underestimated him, Bob thought to himself as he felt pain coursing through his body. He will be hard to deal with, Bob muttered, looking around the ruined walls of the forge and clenching his jaw. Great job, Gregor said as he approached Ricky. A strange sound came from a hole in the wall, like the mysterious whisper of ancient shadows. Suddenly, a blue light erupted from the hole, tearing through the darkness like a flash of mysterious energy. Bob came out of the forge, and in his hand, the stone that Hephaestus was working on sparkled. The stone shimmered with a mysterious light, as if it contained a mysterious power. "Don't interfere," Ricky said, his voice stern and commanding. Bob stood, his eyes glowing with a fiery light. In one hand he held a dark stone, shrouded in a mysterious glow. In the other, a sword. "Where are they going?" Bob asked, launching spheres of mana at the soldiers. Bob grabbed the petrified Hephaestus. "Kill him," Gregor ordered the soldiers. At his command, the soldiers, like an uncontrollable avalanche, rushed towards Bob. Bob used the dark stone, and a whirlwind of dark energy flared up around him. The soldiers were destroyed. Their bodies collapsed, and their eyes, filled with the light of dark energy, flickered with an unnatural light. Ricky, gathering all his will, decided to kill Bob at any cost. Bob fought with the soldiers, each blow of the sword scattering the enemies. Ricky prepared to attack, his body tense like a spring, ready for a sudden jump, and his eyes focused on Bob. Bob was ready to defend himself. His body took a strong stance, and his sword and dark stone were in constant readiness. Ricky spread his arms wide, and his gesture was like the opening of huge wings, and magical energy began to flow from his roar. Bob clutched the stone in his hand, and his fingers wrapped around it like a powerful vice. They clashed, and a massive explosion exploded at the center of the collision, a huge wave of energy and sparks shooting out from the epicenter, throwing Bob and Ricky back. Bob was unconscious, his body lying lifeless among the rubble. Gregor, noticing this, decided to take advantage of the moment. But Hephaestus intervened, and the spell was finally lifted from the petrified body. "Come on, get away, little sucker," Hephaestus said with rage. His voice was like thunder. "I will finish you off," Hephaestus shouted. Gregor was scared. Hephaestus swung his hammer, and his muscles tensed like steel springs. But the floor manager intervened and stopped Hephaestus's hammer. The manager threw away Hephaestus's hand, as if deflecting the blowing stream of wind. The manager looked at the Olympians with a menacing look. Gregor was trembling with fear. His body was shaking, his face was pale, and his eyes were full of horror. The manager knocked the helmet off Gregor's head with a click, and it flew to the side like a projectile. The character touched his finger to Gregor's forehead. This gesture was a reminder of greatness and power, and Gregor, feeling the touch, understood that every word he had to convey to Zeus would be carefully checked and weighed. Hephaestus smiled, and his smile was full of shadow and irony, like the glow of the night. The last fight scene was the last thing Bob remembered. Bob began to come to his senses as he lay on his bed, his body surrounded by soft light filtering through the curtains. Hephaestus hovered above him, his face seeming to float in the air. "Are you okay?" Hephaestus asked, his voice deep and concerned. "How did it all end?" Bob asked, his voice worried. "Everything is fine," Hephaestus answered. His voice was calm and confident. "Thank you, but go to the hospital," he continued. Hephaestus took the pickaxe, and his hands tightly grasped the handle. He said that his name was not Patrick, but Hephaestus. Bob was not surprised. He knew who he was. "In gratitude, I will make you the best blade," Hephaestus continued. Bob was delighted. His face lit up with a slight smile. The main character got out of bed and, with a slight smile on his lips, said, "I'll wait." Time passed. Bob fought with the gorillas. The stone is strong, Bob thought to himself, feeling his hand filling with power and heaviness. But it was difficult to constantly control it. The stone, despite its strength, exerted continuous pressure and resistance, requiring more and more concentration and effort from Bob. "I need to become stronger," he thought, realizing that the current efforts and control of the stone required much more skill and power. Bob entered the forge, judging by the silence. "You finished," the hero began. "Yes, everything is ready," Hephaestus answered. His voice was confident and satisfied. He handed Bob the box. Bob shook the box, trying to understand what was in it. The sound of the contents was soft and mysterious. "We agreed on the blade," Bob said. "This is a surprise box," Bob asked, when Hephaestus urged him to open it. Bob opened the box and there was a glove inside. He carefully tried it on. Her material hugged his arm perfectly. There was a groove in the glove into which a stone could be inserted, Hephaestus said. Bob was delighted. His eyes sparkled. "And here is a blade for you," Hephaestus continued, handing Bob an elegant sword. The hero took it. The handle was decorated with intricate engravings and the blade sparkled like frozen light. Bob called it the Sword of the Dark Knight. He has such good taste in names, Hephaestus thought to himself. The main character was pleased. His face glowed with satisfaction as he hung the sword on his belt. "Do you plan to climb further?" Hephaestus asked with curiosity. "Yes, I want to overthrow Olympus," Bob answered. Hephaestus raised his eyebrows in surprise and said, "Really? Okay, go. I won't see you off," Hephaestus said after Bob, the hero, went out into the street. A dry farewell then and now, Bob thought to himself. Fragments from the past flashed through Bob's mind. Bob bowed to the forge door as a sign of respect and farewell. The Colosseum's test supervisor, Shuri, sat at the table. Shuri took a bite of the chocolate, each piece melting on her tongue. Shuri studied Bob's file, her gaze moving like that of a scientist working on an important discovery. Came alone for the test, Shuri thought to herself, her gaze lingering on Bob. "Well, let him try as much as he likes," she said to herself. Bob was in the center of the Colosseum arena, his figure clearly visible in a huge circle surrounded by high walls. "This test is simple. You just need to defeat the enemy," Bob thought to himself, looking around the arena. "In the past, my entry was in 12th place," Bob noted to himself, looking at the leaderboard. Bob drew his sword, and its blade illuminated in the light of the arena like a sparkling line. The test began. The sound of the shaking crowd and the sounds of magic filling the arena. A huge orc appeared. His muscular body was covered with dark skin, and every step he took shook the ground, making a dull rumble. The orc's eyes glowed with an ominous red light. The orc rushed at Bob, his heavy steps shaking the arena like blows of a hammer on an anvil. Bob, gathering all his strength, cut the orc in half with one blow, the sword cutting through the air with lightning speed. Shuri was surprised, her eyes widening in surprise. Bob's eyes glowed with a fiery light, emitting a bright glow like hot coals. Bob fought without a break, passing test after test. His movements were like lightning bursts in a storm. His every action was precise and decisive. His body moved in the dance of battle, not allowing itself the slightest weakening. Each new challenge only fueled his determination to reach the end. The fighter was kneeling in front of him, head down. "This is my second defeat," he began, his voice weakening. "If your sword had not been worn out, it would have been more difficult for me," Bob said, touching his head. Bob defeated him. He stood over his defeated opponent, his breathing was even and calm. Finally reached the 20th round, Bob thought to himself, his thoughts filled with pride. "They don't even let me rest," Bob thought. The air around the hero began to spin, forming a vortex of magical energy. The gates opened and their heavy doors creaked like ancient steel monsters. Bob brought all his skills to bear, and his actions were synchronized in one swift flow. The appearance of the enemy was terrifying and mysterious. His figure was surrounded by darkness. It headed towards Bob, and its every movement was like a dark storm moving towards its goal. "Overwhelm me even with the strength of giants," Bob thought to himself. Bob was thrown back a little. He felt the ground shaking beneath him. Bob discovered the true appearance of the snake. His body began to distort and change, turning into a writhing, scaly mass covered in shades of black and pink. An excellent opponent, Bob thought to himself with a slight smile. The snake was as huge as the sea. Its huge fangs looked like sharp blades, ready to tear apart any barrier, and its eyes emitted fiery light, like two luminous torches in the night. This light created a feeling of heat and power, ready to defeat any enemy. He attacked Bob, and his fangs flashed in the air with terrifying speed. Bob dodged with lightning speed. His body slid to the side. "I can't make mistakes," Bob thought to himself. Bob began to run like lightning, leaving only a flickering trail behind him. The wind ripped through the air around him, creating a feeling of relentless force and speed. The serpent moved to crush him, and its massive body unfolded like a giant wave. The hero jumped above him and flew over the massive body of the snake as it tried to grab him. Bob concentrated the power into his blade, and his sword glowed with a bright, blinding blue light. He struck, and the blade cut through the air with a bright flash. The snake dodged. He twisted, using his flexibility and speed. Bob's eyes began to calculate the trajectory. Their light became more intense. Shuri watched the spectacle, her eyes glued to the arena. She studied every movement of Bob and the kite. Her face remained calm. But internally, she was absorbed in what was happening in front of her. The arena was in chaos. The air was filled with sparks and explosions of energy, every blow and maneuver creating a storm of light and shadow. Shuri couldn't believe it when she saw it, her eyes widening in surprise. Bob's burning eyes left a trail behind them, like two bright torches. He quickly walked towards the snake. His movements were like a fast arrow. He jumped onto the snake, his body sliding along the scales. The main character concentrated the power of the giants in his hand, and its muscles tensed to the limit. Shuri tensed, her body frozen in anticipation. Bob aimed for the only place on the serpent's body where there were no scales, a thin, vulnerable area hidden among its armor. The power accumulated, creating a magical field around his hand, filled with seething energy. The blade, surrounded by bright light, pierced a vulnerable spot on the snake's body. The serpent fell, its massive body falling to the ground. Bob removed the blade from the serpent's body, like a master who had completed a complex work. He pulled the sword back, and a light cloud of energy came out of the wound, like a stream of steam. The scales, which had recently sparkled, now froze motionless, and the fiery light in his eyes went out. Bob passed the last test. The arena fell into silence. Shuri approached him, her steps quiet. "Did you know about the snake's weak spot?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. "No," Bob replied, pointing his finger at his eyes. "I used my abilities." "Well, that's interesting," Shuri said, her face showing respect and interest. "I have to give you something as an additional reward," Shuri said, her voice serious. She reached her hand towards one of her blades. "The manager said to give it to someone who would kill the snake," Shuri continued as Bob took the sword in his hands. Bob examined the blade, and his face changed when he noticed that it was broken. "What's going on?" he asked in surprise, his voice full of bewilderment. "Well, okay," Bob thought. "The main reward is the heart of the serpent." Shuri congratulated Bob, her voice full of sincere approval and joy. "Thank you," Bob said, his voice full of gratitude as he looked at Shuri with respect. Suddenly, the egg in Bob's inventory began to complain of hunger, making melodious and insistent sounds. A strange energy enveloped everything around, as if an invisible curtain of light and darkness had enveloped the arena. Shuri tensed and pulled out her sword, her movements quick and decisive. This energy began to eat the snake's body. Shuri watched this, her gaze full of surprise and anxiety. She stood motionless. The snake began to lose its shape. Its body began to blur and dissolve in a whirlwind of luminous particles. "He's eating a corpse," Bob said, his words sounding like an admission that what was happening was beyond the ordinary. The scales, once sparkling, now disintegrated into pieces that were absorbed by strange energy. The egg, having eaten, began to fall asleep again. "What does this mean?" Bob thought to himself, his mind swirling with questions and doubts. Shuri asked, "Do you know what's in the egg?" Bob, a little embarrassed and still concerned, replied that he didn't know. "Okay, I won't divulge anything that happened here," Shuri said. "It was nice to meet you," Shuri said, and extended her hand in a friendly gesture. Bob, accepting her hand, saw her silhouette in the past. They shook hands and said goodbye. A week later, Bob was already tested in the maze. The main character simply broke through the walls and left the maze. "It's time to go to Hephaestus," he muttered, decisively stepping forward. Hephaestus watched, dripping with sweat, his body covered in beads of sweat, and his eyes following every movement. Bob entered the forge. A slight thrill from the hot air and the sounds of the forge surrounded him. "I've come to pick up my order, Uncle," Bob began. "I asked you not to call me Uncle," Hephaestus said. "Wait there. I'll finish soon," he added. "Answer quickly," Hephaestus said. His voice was full of liveliness and interest. "Are you not hot?" he asked, glancing at Bob. Bob smiled back. His expression was calm and confident. Hephaestus, noticing this, asked him how Bob was going to proceed further. "Your blade is ready," Hephaestus said, proudly showing the completed product. Bob picked up the blade to inspect it, and his eyes lit up with admiration as he ran his fingers along the smooth surface of the blade, testing its balance and edge. "I like it," Bob said, and carefully put it in his inventory. Bob paid for the work, giving Hephaestus the amount they had discussed. Hephaestus accepted the money with gratitude. His face lit up with a satisfied smile. "I'll be back, Uncle," Bob said, his voice full of confidence and friendly warmth. After a while, Bob headed towards the portal, its glowing opening beckoning and attracting him to new adventures. "Finally, I'm going to Murim," Bob thought to himself, his thoughts filled with excitement and anticipation. Various people offered new players to join their guild. They enthusiastically talked about their achievements, opportunities, and advantages. There was a lot of activity around, people discussing their plans, noisy groups preparing for the next test. No different from a bazaar, Bob noted to himself, watching the bustling activity around him. A character in beautiful clothes approached the hero. His outfit sparkled and shimmered. The character had a sword on his back, exquisitely decorated and clearly of high quality, and greeted the protagonist with a slight smile. He invited Bob to join his clan, but Bob, without hesitation, responded with a sharp refusal. The character drew his sword, its blade glinting in the sunlight. If you touch a newly promoted player, it will reflect badly on the clan's reputation, Bob said, his voice firm and confident. It's too late to ask for forgiveness, he told Bob, his voice full of confidence and challenge. Bob stepped forward. I didn't intend to, he answered. His voice was calm. And since you're behaving like this, the hero continued, nothing can be done. Despite the tension of the moment, Bob looked calm, his face expressing inner calm and determination. The character was scared and thought to himself that this was a look full of determination and confidence. A second later, he fell to his knees, his confidence gone, leaving him in a depressed position in front of Bob, the sword slipping from his hand. He began to run through the crowd, his movements abrupt and panicky. He thought to himself, what a shame, feeling the shame of his defeat and flight. 10 days later, Bob ran through the forest, his movements fast and concentrated, the silence of the forest interrupted only by the sounds of his steps and the cracking of branches under his feet. Finally, he reached the heavenly mountain. Tall, majestic peaks towered before him, their peaks lost in the clouds. The mountainsides were covered with green forests and rock formations, giving the impression of inaccessibility and ancient strength. We need to hurry, Bob thought to himself. His gaze was determined. He felt that time was against him, and every second counted. It was already dark when Bob continued on his way, shrouded in the silence of the night and the soft light of the moon. Bob felt that someone was watching him. With every minute, his instincts became sharper, and in the darkness of the forest, he distinguished subtle movements and sounds. You don't need to follow me, Bob shouted. I'm not your enemy, he continued, trying to convey that his intentions were peaceful. Here, after all, there is a base of the heavenly demon cult nearby, Bob continued, his voice sounding convincing. It didn't look like he was lost, they whispered in the bushes. Their voices were barely audible, but full of anxiety. He knew where he was going. A group of people in blue kimonos came out of the forest. Their movements were coordinated. Their robes shimmered in the moonlight, creating an impression of mystery and discipline. The one who stood out was Right, a pureblood from the divine cult. His kimono was decorated with red embroideries, creating a contrast with the simple clothes of the rest of the group. If you want to join us, Right said, his voice deep and commanding. Tell me what floor you're from and show off your skills. My name is Bob, the hero began. His voice was firm and decisive, and I came to pass the test of the heavenly demon cult. You should probably know why the players are avoiding our challenge, Right said, and began to move along the forest path, gesturing for Bob to follow him. Because his probability of passing is extremely low, Bob answered. Right stopped and turned to him, incorrectly. Because it simply isn't there, Right continued, his voice calm but sharp. No one has passed the test yet. Right pointed with his hand towards a narrow path, almost hidden among the dense thickets. Bob entered the domain of the heavenly demon cult, and immediately felt a change in the atmosphere. The surrounding nature seemed to change, as if the forest itself had become part of this mysterious and powerful cult. There were 6 paths ahead of Bob. Be careful, Right warned. His voice was serious. If you choose the wrong path, no one will find you. Right and his men began to pack up and leave. Bob activated his flaming eyes skill and his eyes flashed with a bright fiery light. I've been at a crossroads more than 10 times, Bob thought to himself. How long this road is? A fork in the road opened up for Bob again. Bob's eyes showed that both paths in front of him were real. There must definitely be a right path here, Bob thought. He felt a light breeze and, following its direction, turned onto this path, hoping that it would lead him to his goal. The further Bob walked, the more his surroundings changed. Finally, Bob reached the hut, buried in fog, its gloomy outlines barely visible among the ghostly light and thick shadows of the forest. He went inside and saw a figure in tattered robes sitting on his knees in the corner of the hut. It was Shriek, immersed in deep meditation, a living legend of the world of Marima, Bob thought to himself, examining the hero. He came, the old man began, without opening his eyes, as if anticipating Bob's appearance. You have passed the first test, the old man continued. It's strange, there's such a wind in the room, Bob thought to himself. Most likely, I'm not really in this room. Now answer. When did you realize that this is also part of the test? The old man continued, without changing his facial expression. "From the very beginning," answered Bob. "Where has it been seen?" "The test consisted simply of walking." "A boy who can find his own way," said Srick. Bob was immediately enveloped by a strange energy, its exciting glow filling the space around him. Bob found himself again in the middle of the forest, where the air was saturated with damp coolness. Bob then found himself in an ordinary village, where peaceful, lively locals went about their daily business. "How did you end up here?" Wright said through gritted teeth, looking at Bob incredulously. "Got there first," Bob answered, looking calmly at Wright. "And how I went doesn't matter," he continued. "The divine cult provides accommodation for the night to the test subject. Let's go quickly. I'm tired from the road," Bob said. Bob washed his face with water to refresh himself after a long and tiring journey. He sat in the bathtub, submerged in hot water, enjoying the relaxing warmth. If the test were easy, there would be a sea of people willing, Bob thought, lost in thought as the warm water relaxed his muscles. The egg in the inventory began to shake, and its surface became covered with small cracks. Bob remembered how, 3 months ago, the egg had increased in size, slowly and mysteriously, as if life was growing inside it. He also remembered how the egg later absorbed the body of the great serpent, its surface glowing and distorting as it absorbed the energy. And these strange patterns seemed more and more mysterious to Bob, as if it was filled with more than just power. Bob thought that the egg might be connected to something much more important than he had imagined. When the hero took the sword out of his inventory and thought about destroying the egg, Bob threatened the egg with his sword, as if deciding to impose strict rules. Then the egg began to move in fear, making shrill sounds, as if expressing fear of the possible threat posed by Bob's sword. Feeling its helplessness and recognizing Bob as its master, it froze, as if obeying his will. Bob carefully lowered the egg into the bath, allowing the warm water to envelop it. The egg swayed slightly in the water, as if calming down. Bob asked with a smile if he liked it. The egg in the water swayed slightly and nodded smoothly, as if answering his question. "Tell me something," Bob said, but the egg shuddered a little and fell asleep again. The Divine Sky Demon cult seems to be interested in making the trials difficult and unique, Bob thought. 4 lords sat in a meeting, their eyes focused on discussing one important matter that could change the course of events in their world. The Spear Lord began. "For the first time since the Blade Lord, there was someone who dared to challenge the trials." The Fist Lord continued. "It was 34 years ago when the Blade Lord last showed such determination." Lord Dow continued. "Who exactly is this Bob? What goals led him to our cult trial? And what kind of powers he hides under his simple appearance?" The Lord of the Blade interrupted the discussion. "Enough useless chatter. Tell me about Bob, who he is, where he came from, what skills he has, and what we know about him. It's time to get to the point and understand what we are dealing with." The lords began to discuss Bob's records and his achievements. One of them suggested testing him personally in order to get a full picture of his abilities. The lords decided that the first person to test Bob's abilities would be the Lord of the Spear, and his task would be to test Bob's heroic skills and evaluate his strength. A crowd of spectators had gathered, waiting for the test to begin. The figure of Bob appeared at the temple gates. His appearance was impressive and confident. The Lord of the Spear and the Lord of the Fist glared at Bob. The lords exchanged glances, and their eyes reflected interest and strength of spirit, they noted. Bob glanced at the 4 lords, their imposing figures and powerful auras filling his field of vision. They will conduct the second test, Bob thought to himself. Pierce was ready to immediately jump into battle, his determination palpable in every movement. Pierce volunteered to test Bob's strength by asking permission from the lords. "We agree," the lords replied, and Pierce headed towards Bob. "This doesn't feel like an official test," Bob countered, clearly unhappy that Pierce had arbitrarily appointed himself as his opponent. "That's right," noted the Lord of the Blade. "And as a reward, we will give you one of the medicines of the heavenly cult. Is that okay with you?" the Blade Lord asked, looking at Bob. "That's fine with me," Bob replied, drawing his sword. Pierce readied himself for battle. His muscles tensed, and he took a fighting stance, preparing to fight. "Your reward will be a scarlet pill," said the Lord of the Blade. The lords watched every move closely as they watched the test begin. Bob thought to himself, "This is a welcome party. I didn't expect this." Pierce, preparing to start the fight, asked Bob, "Have you passed the first test of the Sky Demon?" "So, stop talking," answered Bob, preparing for the fight. A small smile appeared on Bob's face. Pierce rushed at Bob, his movements precise and powerful. Bob deftly dodged Pierce's blow, his movements smooth and quick. Their blows and parries created dull sounds in the air. The heroes moved around the arena, each time exchanging blows and blocks, their movements becoming more rapid and accurate. Bob dodged Pierce's lightning strike again. His reaction almost superhuman as he easily slid to the side to avoid the collision. Pierce stopped and asked, looking at Bob, "Why you, a stranger, are worthy of the test and honor that we provide? What makes you different from me? You're not a child anymore," Bob continued, dodging Pierce's next blow. The blades collided, and tension froze in the air as the forces of both opponents combined. Bob dodged Pierce's blow. Immediately after dodging, Bob concentrated all his strength and prepared a powerful counterstrike. Pierce, after the blow, found himself open to attack. Bob didn't miss the chance and quickly pointed his fist towards him. The main character activated the power of the giants. His hand was enveloped in a powerful glow. He delivered a crushing blow, his fist, as if tearing the air, heading towards Pierce with incredible power. Pierce, faced with incredible power, was defeated. The shadow of his body lay across the arena, and the audience froze in delight and surprise. The lords watched the battle closely, their gazes reflecting a mixture of respect and surprise. The Lord of the Blade stood in silence, his face remaining motionless and sternly expressing deep concentration. Finally, breaking the silence, the Blade Lord said, "For the first time in a long time, I saw something interesting." Lord Dao and Lord Fist, watching what was happening, exchanged satisfied glances and smiles. The Blade Lord, with a look of satisfaction on his face, turned to his servant. "Give him the scarlet blood pill." A servant standing nearby quickly walked towards Bob, carrying a small red pill in his hands. "I wasn't even trying," Bob said as he took the pill. "Thank you." During the test with Pierce, he acted as if it was a child's game, Lord Dao said, whether it was bluff or impudence. "I was just teasing," Bob answered the Blade Lord's question. "Well, then, let's move on to the essence of the test," said the Lord of the Blade. "I will conduct the second test," the Lord of the Fist said loudly. "It will be enough for you to withstand 3 of my techniques," continued the Fist. "You will be provided with a place to train, herbal pills, clothing and lodging for the night," the Fist Lord added. "Let's start now," said Bob. Having learned that he was given 3 months to prepare, "There is no need to rush," the Lord of the Spear objected. "That's enough," said the Lords. Lord Fist was also ready to begin the test immediately. "Only the Heavenly Demon can change the test," the Blade Lord said firmly. "We will give you 3 months, prepare yourself," continued the Lord of the Blade. "I understand everything," answered Bob. A little later, the Lord of the Blade accompanied Bob through the corridors of the ancient temple. People were whispering in the temple. Some admired Bob's abilities, some doubted his success. They were whispering too actively, Bob thought to himself. "This is also an order from the head of the cult," Bob asked. "I haven't met people from outside for a long time," the Blade Lord noted with excitement. "Personal meetings are always exciting, and I'm glad that I can meet you," Bob thought to himself, talking as if he wanted me to pass the test. They continued to walk, penetrating deeper into the temple. Approaching the doors, the Lord of the Blade said, "We have arrived." "Why do you need a hospital?" asked the Lord of the Blade. "You'll find out soon," Bob answered. "I can definitely take everything," he asked as he entered. The street was busy, filled with people and merchants. Bob was going to take everything that could be useful for his preparation, including rare ingredients. People wondered how he was going to use it all on his own, marveling at the extent of his preparation and determination. Bob continued to put all the medicines into his inventory, ignoring the surprised looks of those around him. When the baskets were empty, Bob said, "I have to go. See you in 3 months." The sun illuminated the valley, giving it a warm golden hue. The sun's rays made their way through the foliage of the trees, creating a play of shadows on the ground and adding brightness to the surrounding landscape. Bob stood with a torch in the training cave, its light illuminating the darkness. "Perfect," Bob thought to himself as he assessed the space. Bob began to lay out all the herbs and medicines from his inventory. A whole palette of potions unfolded on the ground in front of him, from pollen of rare flowers to complex compounds in glass ampules. He began to take each remedy one by one, carefully monitoring his body's reaction. Over time, Bob noticed that his condition began to worsen. At first, he felt slight nausea, which soon developed into severe malaise. Finally, despite feeling unwell, Bob felt that he had achieved the desired effect, and he took the heart of the great serpent from his inventory. The egg tried to get ahead of Bob and swallow the heart, but Bob threatened it, and it hid back. Bob continued to carefully study the heart of the great serpent, which was now in his possession. The hero carefully swallowed the heart of the great serpent, feeling how its energy penetrated every cell of his body. A storm of strength and possibilities began inside him. Bob felt hellish pain penetrate every part of his body. To strengthen his resistance and ease the fight against pain, Bob continued to chew medicinal herbs. The hero took a deep breath, realizing that this process would require considerable time and patience. A whole month passed. Two guards dressed in the traditional robes of the Heavenly Demon Clan stood at the entrance to the cave. "A whole month has already passed and I haven't heard from him," one of the guards began, looking at the cave with a worried expression on his face. "I agree," the other answered. The guards became wary. Suddenly, the entrance to the cave began to slowly open. Everything around was shrouded in dust, causing visibility to deteriorate significantly. "You came to meet me," Bob said, leaving the cave and looking at the two characters guarding the entrance. After a while, Bob was sitting at the table enjoying a fried chicken leg. The characters watched in silence as Bob greedily devoured the food on the table. Wright asked in surprise, "You've been starving for a whole month." Bob, still chewing, replied, "Since I was only going out once, I didn't want to eat something tasteless." He got up from the table and said, "It was very tasty, but I have to go." The main character headed to the martial arts archive. Two impressive guards stood at the entrance. The martial arts archive is the most important place, Bob thought. A monk approached Bob and said that he would accompany him. They went inside, and the monk began to tell Bob where everything was in the archive. "Can I read all these books?" Bob asked. "Yes," the monk answered. "You can read all these books, but you are forbidden to enter one section. Take your time, look around." Bob began to carefully explore the archive. He looked through books and scrolls full of ancient techniques and secrets of martial arts. The hero focused on finding materials that could help him deal with the Lord of the Fist. He searched for scrolls and books containing techniques that could enhance his defense and resilience. The servant of the Blade Lord reported that he spent a whole month in the training cave, and now he has been sitting in the archives for a whole month, studying martial arts. The servant continued. "I watched him, and it seemed that he had decided to read all the books." The Blade Lord noticed that his actions were very specific. The monk asked in surprise, "Are you leaving so early?" Bob replied that he had finally finished his business. A month has passed, and the Lord of the Fist is preparing for the test. He put on his favorite clothes, a masterfully decorated combat caftan. People began to flock to the arena. The noise and bustle grew, creating an atmosphere of tense anticipation. The Lord of the Fist walked down the stairs, his footsteps echoing throughout the arena, preparing for the challenge ahead. "Show respect," the Fist Lord shouted. "The coming fight is not just a sparring, it is a test of the heavenly demon himself." Bob appeared in the arena. His confident posture and focused gaze attracted the attention of everyone present. Bob drew his blade, and its metallic shine illuminated the arena in the rays of the sun. Lord Fist looked at Bob eagerly. His gaze was full of expectation. "Okay, let's get straight to the point," he said. "I'm wondering how much stronger you have become in 3 months." "You'll regret giving me 3 months," Bob replied, confidently preparing for the fight. Lord Fist was the first to strike as he approached Bob, his hand emitting a bright blue light and energy sparkling in the air as he sent a powerful punch towards Bob. Lord Fist used his first technique, the destructive heavenly lightning. And this was only the first technique, Bob thought to himself. Getting hit would be dangerous. "Well, you dodged. A wise decision," the Lord said, preparing the next blow. He clenched his fist tightly, and his hand was filled with a bright blue light. His fists began to accelerate, creating a whirlwind of air around him. Each movement was swift and powerful, resembling a deadly whirlwind. Lord Fist used the following technique, and as if his fists had become lightning, they began to emit hundreds of strikes, the air filled with crackling noises and flashes of light. Bob activated his flaming eyes skill, and his vision expanded, allowing him to see every strike with precision as he quickly dodged the lightning-fast attacks. The hero deftly dodged many blows. Every movement was carefully calculated. His fiery eyes allowed him to predict the Lord's actions. Lord Fist thought to himself in surprise, as if he had read my movements. It seemed to be due to the skill of his eyes, Lord Fist mused, realizing that Bob was using his special abilities. The Lord of the Fist laughed, filling the arena with the sounds of his angry laughter. He flared with rage. "As long as you are under the same sky with me, you cannot dodge," the Lord of the Fist said menacingly. "He would definitely hit more than just the arena," the Blade Lord noted, his voice carrying a hint of worry. "It is necessary to create a protective barrier," he addressed the other lords. The Sky Lords clapped, and Bob thought to himself, this technique must be special. Bob decisively activated the power of the giants, preparing to block Lord Fist's menacing blow. The Fist Lord concentrated all his energy, creating a vortex of force currents. He released a blow that was like a storm opening up. The storm of origin aimed to crush everything in its path and overcome any defense. There was a powerful explosion that shook the arena, the energy of technology and destructive force filling the space. stunning the spectators and creating a cloud of dust and debris. Deep cracks appeared on the ground of the arena, from which clouds of dust and debris erupted. Many of those watching began to retreat, trying to stay away from the area where the explosion occurred. A dense cloud of dust and debris obscured the details of what was happening from them, leaving only a wave of fear and anticipation in the air. Bob stood in a fighting stance, feeling no harm. His defenses withstood the blow, his gaze confident despite the power and destructiveness of the attack he had just experienced. "So you blocked the attack?" Lord Fist asked in surprise. He was amazed that a player of his caliber was able to block his attack. Bob passed the test, but the Lord of the Fist invited him to continue the fight. "This is exactly what I wanted," Bob replied. He was surrounded by the energy of the Heavenly Demon beginning technique. "Where did you get this technique from?" Lord Fist asked, gritting his teeth. "It's nothing more than an unfinished shield," Bob replied. "So this is what he found in the archive," the Blade Lord thought to himself. "I'll start first since you're in no hurry," Bob continued. Bob's face expressed determination. His gaze was focused, as if he was ready for any test. His eyes sparkled with a cold scarlet light. They clashed in battle. Bob was the first to strike. His sword shot up in the air like lightning aimed straight at the target. The Fist Lord reacted instantly, blocking the blow. Their movements were swift and precise, every blow and block. Bob stood firm through technique after technique. Each energy burst and each deadly attack, Bob remained on his feet, demonstrating incredible skill and durability. The spectators watched in complete delight, their attention riveted to this epic confrontation. Bob was a little out of breath, but that didn't stop him from staying focused. His breathing deepened and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. 59 techniques, I should be ashamed of myself," Lord Fist said with slight admiration. "But it doesn't look like it will last long," the Fist Lord continued. The Lord of the Fist gathered all his remaining strength into one powerful blow, his fist surrounded by whirlwinds of energy, quickly heading towards Bob. The explosion shook the arena, tearing up the ground and creating a cloud of dust, and a huge wave of shock force ran through the entire space. Lord of the Fist, he thought to himself. He really is not normal. His hand, surrounded by a sparkling light, aimed for the next attack. This time he put all his power and concentration. Lord Fist exclaimed, "Attack me already," his voice filled with impatience and anger. The character, gritting his teeth, took a decisive step forward and swung at Bob with incredible force, raising a powerful wave of energy. Bob, concentrating all his strength and stamina, withstood Lord Fist's 89th attack. The Lord of the Fist, unable to withstand the tension, punched the air past Bob's face, his fist missing the target by a centimeter. Bob dodged the blow again. He continued to maintain his resilience, waiting for the moment to counterattack. The main character, feeling that the moment was close, concentrated on the next movement. At the critical moment when Lord Fist swung his last powerful blow, Bob, concentrating and using all his strength, intercepted Lord Fist's fist with his hand. Bob, holding the Lord Fist's fist with one hand, quickly and accurately used his other hand to slash the sword into the Lord's chest. Lord Fist couldn't believe what just happened, his eyes wide open in surprise and pain. Bob, out of breath from the intense battle, stood, his breathing heavy. He continued to keep his eyes on the Lord of the Fist, ready for any new movement. The Lord, weakened by the blow and shocked that he was considered unsurpassed, stood in complete confusion. The Lord of the Fist exhaled and lowered his head, admitting defeat. The Lord of the Blade, watching the outcome of the battle, thought to himself, perhaps this young man was truly worthy. Although our task is to observe, we see that this young man is capable of more than we imagined. The Lord of the Blade began to speak. The Blade Lord continued. So he passed the second test perfectly. The Blade Lord was immersed in studying a book of techniques, his gaze focused and attentive. The Blade Lord looked at the Fist Lord with respect. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Fist. Your techniques were impressive and you tested him to the limit." Lord Fist sat proudly and calmly. Despite his defeat, he regarded Bob with respect. "I'm not ashamed," he said with a smile. He burst out laughing, lounging on the sofa. He had proven his strength and skill, and that deserved respect. "You are too noisy," the Blade Lord remarked, looking at him. Bob lay on the bed resting, his arm bandaged from the intense battle. The main character, looking at his bandaged hand, noted to himself that the wound should heal within 2 days. Bob dug deep into his skills to better understand their features and capabilities. That same day, the hero and his accompanying servant climbed the stairs to the temple. They soon found themselves in front of the doors, behind which, as the servant said, the heavenly demon was waiting. Bob walked inside, and the darkness of the room immediately enveloped him. The main character felt that there was a strange silence in the room, and because of this his tension increased. Suddenly he noticed how the egg in his inventory began to grin. In the darkness of the room, a figure suddenly appeared, shrouded in radiance and dressed in luxurious clothes. It was the heavenly demon. The head sat motionless, radiating an aura of greatness and wisdom. His eyes, deep and penetrating, fixed on Bob, as if trying to look into the most hidden corners of his soul. Bob bowed and said, "I was told that you called me." "Yes, I called you," confirmed the head of the cult, "like your hand." "It will heal soon," Bob answered. "Okay, it's time for the third test," said the cult leader. He stood up and asked Bob to follow him. "Even regardless of the condition of my hand," Bob tried to object. "It doesn't matter. You won't need a hand anyway," the head answered, hiding in the fog. The head of the cult disappeared, and Bob was left standing in complete confusion, not understanding where to move next. Bob activated his fiery eyes skill to try and discover where the cult leader had disappeared to. However, Bob could not see any signs or traces. Everything around remained shrouded in fog, and even his fiery eyes could not penetrate the veil. The hero felt a hand pulling him into the thick fog that surrounded him on all sides. Bob covered himself with his hands, trying to protect himself from the piercing fog, which seemed almost tangible. Bob found himself in a cave where the fog was gradually clearing. The cult leader walked forward, his figure barely visible in the dim light. The main character followed him carefully, remaining alert and carefully observing his surroundings. "I enjoyed your recent fight," the cult leader said to Bob. A sphere appeared in front of the head, emitting dark energy that hovered in the air and created a feeling of ominous power. Bob was a little scared, feeling the dark energy of the sphere filling the space with an ominous force. "The sacred flame, that's what we call it," said the leader, his voice sounding with arrogant confidence. "I and my predecessors, we are all looking for his owner," he continued. "Do you really believe in the prophecy?" Bob asked, doubt creeping into his voice. "Yes, you must do it," he replied. Bob approached the sphere of sacred flame that hovered in the air. Its dark rays shimmered in different shades, as if they were contained in an invisible storm. The flame hissed and sparkled, emitting mysterious energy. He felt the flames seemed to be drawing him in, giving him a strange feeling as if his own strength and energy were in a constant struggle with this light. The cult leader, standing in the shadows, watched this process with cold interest. His voice sounded like an echo from afar. "Hold out until the flames accept you." The head of the cult closely watched Bob. His eyes did not leave the young tester. The flames fluctuating in the air cast bizarre shadows on the face of the head, giving him an even more mysterious and impressive appearance. He assessed how Bob handled the test, how he held up under pressure. Bob entered the flame and suddenly realized that this sacred flame was fueled by fear. An understanding arose in his mind that the flame not only lives its own life, it reacts to emotions and sensations. He noticed that when fear gripped him, the flames began to react aggressively, intensifying and causing him more pain. Bob began to tell himself that he was not hot. He focused on his inner state and began to use mental exercises. "I haven't had this feeling in a long time," Bob thought, feeling his body and mind fighting the flames. His internal dialogue was full of confidence and determination. He told himself that the flame had no power over him, that he could not be affected by it. "I will pass this test," the hero shouted. The flames consumed Bob, and he found himself in the center of a burning aura, as if his body had become part of this raging fire. He continued to convince himself that he did not feel the heat, that his body was becoming invulnerable to this flame. Bright sparks of light from the stone penetrated the fire, as if trying to fight its fury. Bob's inner flame and sacred flame merged into a single entity. He could direct and shape the fire as he wanted, creating protective barriers, heat sources, or even simple fiery figures from it. Bob successfully passed the third test and received the title of deputy head of the Heavenly Demon Cult, which opened up new opportunities and responsibilities for him. When the fire began to subside quickly, the chief thought that Bob was dead. But after a while, he saw Bob's figure. Bob, concentrating, was able to subjugate the sacred flame, the dark fire, which had previously been bursting with rage and strength, now obeyed his will. The head did not expect the test to lead to such a result. His eyes showed a mixture of surprise and respect for Bob's achievement. "This young man is definitely not so simple," he thought to himself. Several days passed. The cult leader sat immersed in deep thoughts. Bob appeared at the door. The cult leader, noticing him, looked up from his thoughts and looked at the young man with interest. After a while, they sat in the gazebo and drank tea. "Now you can go wherever you want because now I have the flame," Bob said, looking with satisfaction at the head of the cult. "The thought of going anywhere scares me," the head admitted, looking at Bob. You understand that I still won't join the clan, Bob said. It's not necessary, the head replied. Okay, then I will proudly accept the title of deputy head, Bob said as he was about to leave. Are you leaving so soon? The head asked. Yes, we need to make it before the start of the Murama War, Bob answered with a slight smile. And what should I do now? The head of the cult thought to himself. Woody expected to be assigned to a strong team, hoping for a greater opportunity to prove himself. He flipped through the team lists, trying to find his name. Woody was scared when he finally saw his name on the list. The hero continued to study the lists, trying to understand what exactly awaited him in the new team. Woody saw Bob's name on his team and became wary. Why is it so expensive? Shouted the character at the bar. Bob stood and watched this scene. The character walked away, upset, and Bob continued to watch, realizing that the high cost could be part of a strategy or just an accidental misunderstanding. Bob asked the owner if there were any rooms available. There was only the best room left. For 100 points, the owner said. Bob replied that he would take it. Bob reached for the money, taking out the required amount from his inventory. He paid, and as soon as he handed over the money, the sunshine illuminated him. The owner was blinded by a sudden ray of sunshine as Bob paid. The six greeted Bob as he entered the room. Bob was sitting on the bed and said that he wanted to use the store. Tell me what you want. We will find anything, answered the six. Bob said, let's just take a look first. The six opened a store, providing access to a variety of goods and resources. Bob found adamantium and asked the six how much it was worth. Six answered, why do you need just the material? Buy a ready-made item. The hero replied that it would be cheaper to buy the material and make the item yourself. Six asked, do you know Hephaestus? Bob, looking sternly, asked what it mattered. Six continued, usually people face the problem of finding a blacksmith, but this is not the case with you, she added. And that's why the price of adamantium should be higher for you, you know? I don't have that much money, Bob answered. Don't worry, said the six. You can take out a loan at 11.5%. Well, I'll buy it somewhere else, Bob replied. Wait, we can give you a discount, said the six. We will try to make the price more reasonable so that you can purchase the material from us, she continued. It's a shame, of course, but let's just forget about it, Bob replied. The six began to bargain with Bob, gradually lowering the price of adamantium. 850,000 is the extreme price, Bob said firmly. Maybe we can agree on 900,000, the six begged with tears. Bob made a brick face and firmly said, 850,000 is my last figure. Okay, I agree to 850,000. We will process your order and prepare the material for you, said the six. Six, leaving the hero, turned to him. Please call if you need anything else. Bob was already imagining how Hephaestus would work with adamantium, anticipating the creation of something unique and powerful. The hero thought to himself that he had a week to do one important thing. Bob decided to go for a walk to unwind a little and collect his thoughts. Sam, nicknamed the Genius Gambler, had his back turned. The monsters fell one after another, leaving behind only destruction and chaos. The three heroes stood in front of the corpses of the monsters, wiping sweat and blood from their faces. Somehow it was easy, one of the heroes noted, examining the defeated monsters. Let's hurry up, Sam said, looking calmly at his companions. Don't relax, he continued and went forward. Bob. I hear about him all the time, Sam thought to himself, looking at the tracks of the monsters and listening to the sounds. Suddenly, Sam noticed something unusual. Sam signaled to his companions, signaling a stop. His team froze, listening and peering at their surroundings. A huge monster, engulfed in a strange flame, burst out of the ground. Its ominous shadow covered the surroundings. The flames around it grew. Sparks and tongues of fire burst out in different directions, creating an eerie atmosphere. A group of heroes cautiously approached the monster's carcass. Sam quickly jumped onto the monster's carcass to take a closer look. This is the dungeon boss, one of the team members shouted. Sam carefully examined the carcass of the dungeon boss, looking closely at every detail. The hero noticed an unusual mark from the blade on the monster's body. It was different from the usual sharp cuts. The mark was deep and distorted, as if something invisible had accompanied the blow of the blade. Questions about who could have done such a thing remained unanswered. But one thing was clear. There was something more behind this trail than just a chance encounter with a monster. At this time, Bob, with skillful movements, carefully placed the ball of web into his inventory. I'll use it later, Bob thought to himself. Bob concentrated the heavenly flame in his palm, marveling at how it exceeded his expectations. The hero realized that the heavenly flame grows due to the emotions of the enemy. It feeds on their fear and uncertainty, becoming stronger with each of their negative emotions. Bob understood that as the mana level increased and the skill became more complete, its power would increase. Bob walked up the stairs thoughtfully, deep in thought about how to make the most of his new skills and abilities. On the second floor, Bob was met by Woody. He was a little worried and wary when he saw Bob. Bob, noticing Woody, wondered who the guy with the dyed hair was. Woody greeted Bob and said that they were now on the same team. Half the players dropped out of the challenge before the start, Woody said. Bob didn't answer. We didn't leave because we believed in you, Woody continued. No, because you don't have enough points, Bob answered. And you want to try to stick with someone reliable? I'm right, Bob continued. Woody was scared. If you don't want to die, just give up, Bob said, closing the door. The characters sank, realizing that their situation was hopeless. Woody, terrified, clamped his bottom lip between his teeth, feeling fear squeezing him. Hypnos, the test supervisor, checked the lists of participants. By order of Olympus, I must eliminate Bob, Hypnos thought to himself. And if I carry out the order, I will be generously rewarded, he continued. Okay, it's time to move forward, he said, sitting on the golden bowl. Suddenly, he received a message from Hera. Time passed, and Bob's team had 51 members, while they were up against a team of 200 people. These players were low-level, Bob thought. Hypnos appeared in front of the participants. His mysterious aura filled the air, and with a serious expression on his face, he addressed the audience. Hypnos continued, Let's not delay, the test will begin after a brief explanation. He explained that the essence of the Capture the Flags test is that your team must get the flags. Hero continued, Flags are scattered throughout the forest, which is full of monsters and various traps. Remember that success in this challenge depends not only on strength and skill, but also on strategy and teamwork. All you have to do is collect as many flags as possible. Hypnos continued, A king will be randomly selected from each team. The number of flags collected by the king is doubled. Bob paused, pondering how best to use the information. Well, let's begin the test, said Hypnos. The test began, and the space around began to change. Woody found himself enveloped in golden energy, which began to emanate from him and give him a special shine. The energy indicated that he had been chosen as the king of the team. As he looked into the water, Bob thought to himself, how did he even get to this level? Woody ran after Bob, shouting that he needed to be protected. Bob, knowing that this could be a strategic move, did not become distracted and continued to move forward. Don't worry, no one will come for your head now, Bob answered and activated his fiery eyes. Sam looked thoughtfully, analyzing the situation. Rael, the angel, began to say, I am honored that you remembered my name. Don't worry too much, Rayleigh added with a slight smile. Don't you think it's strange that the difference is too huge? Sam asked. It's just a coincidence, she answered. By the way, who is our king? Rael asked. Do you think anyone would care under these circumstances? Sam replied. However, Sam noticed someone shining gold, but did not remember him. Woody sat on a rock and studied the table with flags, carefully checking the results. We knocked out most of the flags from the monsters, one of the team members said. Now it is enough to defeat the king of the opponents for the situation to change, he continued. Everyone thought about Bob because on their team, he collected most of the flags. Woody remembered Bob's words. The team members noticed a rustling in the bushes. A detachment of the enemy team emerged from the bushes, ready for battle. The battle began. The teams met on the battlefield. The battle became fierce, blades sparkled in the air, and heads flew off. Woody was scared. He looked in horror at the carnage. The players from Woody's team were destroyed one by one. Screams, explosions, and splashes of blood filled the air. As their chances of victory dwindled with each passing moment, Woody watched, trembling with fear, as his comrades fell. The opponents, seeing that the battle was going in their favor, began to have fun. Their screams and laughter echoed through the forest. Suddenly, someone jumped out from behind a tree and covered Woody. The stranger was hit from several sides, and soon he fell, protecting Woody until his last breath. One of the opponents, noticing Woody, swung his blade, aiming at him with complete determination. Bob quickly entered the center of the battle like a deadly whirlwind, instantly changing the course of the battle. His voice was firm and stern, despite the chaos around him, because he said to sit still and not go anywhere. Woody, seeing Bob, could not hold back his tears. His face was flooded with tears of happiness and relief. Woody looked at Bob with admiration and gratitude, as if a god was standing before him. Bob walked towards his opponents with determination in his eyes. His steps were confident and fast. He had already planned his actions. Each of his blows was deadly. His opponents did not have time to react. He killed one after another. One of the opponents, deciding to take a chance, tried to jump on Bob, hoping to catch him by surprise. But Bob noticed the movement at the very last moment. quickly turning around. He met the attacker with a powerful blow. Opponents were horrified by Bob's actions, his lightning-fast attacks and ruthless efficiency making them feel like they had no chance of winning. Bob's eyes glowed scarlet, emitting a terrifying glow. "Have mercy!" one of the opponents shouted, trembling with fear. He handed Bob 2 flags, hoping for mercy and salvation. Bob looked at the flags, slowly considering the situation. The main character took the flags without saying a word. Bob looked at the remaining opponents and asked, "What are you going to do?" They, trembling with fear, looked at each other. Some were silent, others barely whispered. As a result, all opponents decided to surrender and gave up their flags. Woody approached Bob, embarrassed and looking guilty, and said, "I'm sorry for everything. Thank you for coming to the rescue and saving me." Bob looked around and noticed that the team members had dispersed. Woody, having come to his senses a little, said that the rest of the team had dispersed into the forest. Woody asked how many flags you managed to collect. Bob replied, "I have 27 flags, we can still win." "Listen carefully," Bob continued. "Everyone is already thinking that it is more effective to hunt other players. From now on, don't go more than 20 meters from me," Bob Woody said. "You gave up your flags and ran away," Sam asked his allies. "There's a good chance Bob will protect the king," Rayleigh said as she approached Sam. "Contact everyone immediately," Rayle continued. "Do you want to move to this strategy?" Sam asked. "Exactly," Rayle answered. "Or do you have other good suggestions?" "Well, let's catch 2 birds with 1 stone," Rayle continued. Bob and Woody chased their fleeing rivals as they tried to hide in the forest. This is no longer a competition. This is 200 people trying to catch a monster named Bob, Woody thought to himself. Bob stood holding 100 flags in his hand, his gaze full of determination and concentration. "As long as this guy is under my supervision, everything is fine," Bob thought. "They have already exchanged information and know that I am with the king," Bob Woody said. Bob continued, pointing out that there were some players hiding behind them. The next second, Bob intercepted the arrow aimed at Woody, saving him from imminent danger. The arrowhead came within inches of Woody's eye, causing his heart to race. Woody fell to the ground in fear, as if he had lost all his courage the moment before the threat touched his eyes. Bob noticed that there was a web stretching over them, like an invisible net. He took out the blade and said, "I will draw a circle. Stay inside and you will be safe." The main character drew a protective circle around Woody, creating a barrier that was supposed to protect him from danger. Woody was terrified, trembling with fear, as if Bob's circle was the only salvation from the impending threat. "Should I just stand here?" Woody asked, his voice trembling with anxiety. "Yes," Bob replied, assuring Woody that this was how he would stay safe. Woody tried to leave the circle, but Bob, in a threatening mood, ordered, "Don't leave when they tell you to." One of the opponents, hiding in the bushes, ordered his ally to step aside. The others asked him what he was up to, their curiosity betraying their anxiety. He threw his spear towards Bob and Woody, aiming to kill them. The spear flew swiftly straight at Bob, threatening to break through his defenses. Suddenly, the head of the player standing next to him fell off his shoulders like an accident. The remaining players began to fall one by one, as if a chain reaction had shaken their ranks. Bob suddenly appeared in front of him, as if out of nowhere. Bob's eyes lit up with a scarlet light, and he asked with determination where your boss was. And Bob disappeared again, leaving only a burning trail and a feeling of impending threat. He was already behind the other player, like a ghost, ready for the next step. The opponents did not expect such lightning speed. Their excitement grew with every second. Suddenly, Sam and Rayle appeared, as if from the shadows, ready to intervene in the situation. Sam, looking warily at Bob, asked why you left alone, leaving the king. Bob, with a challenge in his voice, answered what you were getting at. The main character, drawing his blade, noticed that you are quite talkative. "Everyone step back, I'll fight him," Sam ordered, preparing to engage in battle. They entered the fray, waging a fierce battle under the gaze of those around them. Sam wondered to himself where he got so much power. The hero was preparing to strike a powerful blow, his strength and determination concentrated in this moment. Sparks flew out like a storm of light, illuminating their battle. Sam didn't understand why there was such a difference in strength. Rayle gave Sam a boost, giving his punches incredible power and speed. Sparks continued to fly from the blows in their intense fight. Rayle continued to build up Sam's powers, increasing his power with each passing moment. Rayle told Sam it looks like Bob is determined to end this. "In what sense?" Sam asked, squinting warily. Bob activated the Sky Demon Flame and was engulfed in purple flames. Sam recognized this flame. He saw it in the cave with the boss. The hero thought to himself, so it was Bob who killed that boss alone. Sam was amazed at Bob's power, realizing how great his strength was. He thought to himself, maybe I'm overestimating the situation. Violet flames hovered around Bob, creating an atmosphere of mystical and destructive energy. Rail heard an order via telepathic communication. We retreat. Sam was the first to admit defeat, succumbing to Bob's might. Chief, are you serious? His allies asked, not believing what just happened. I don't want to risk people, he replied. And you turned out to be a coward, despite what they say about you, Rail said, challenging his courage. You can say whatever you want, Sam replied, leading his comrades away. Rail stood there in disbelief, not believing what had just happened. Rail walked towards Bob, who stood with a blade in his hand, ready for the next step. I was hoping that you would all leave voluntarily, but now it's hard to predict how it will end, Bob said, looking at Rail. Rail used her divine defense skill, surrounding herself with a force shield. Bob used his sky flame with a smile, filling the area with a bright and deadly light. Rail's allies froze, fascinated and frightened by the power of the heavenly flame. The silhouette of a demon appeared in the flames, terrifying and ominous. Bob heard screams, "Demon! Demon!" The opponents fell one after another, as if struck by an unknown force. Their resistance was destroyed. Raella activated her angel wings, her figure illuminated with light, symbolizing protection and hope. She thought to herself what was going on. She pointed the punishing sword at Bob, ready to use his power at the decisive moment. "You're finished!" she screamed, raising her sword for the finishing blow. Bob destroyed the sword with one blow, as if destroying it with a powerful force. Silence reigned on the field, as if the entire battle had frozen, awaiting the next movement. Rael thought to herself, "You were right, Sam." She ordered everyone to retreat, and Bob silently watched them leave, remaining calm. "If you plan to retreat, hand over your flags," Bob said. "Just quietly bring them here," Bob said, demanding that the flags be handed over without further ado. Rael approached Bob, her face expressing mixed emotions after the last fight. "Join my guild," she suggested, hoping for alliance and cooperation. "I refuse," Bob replied, remaining true to his principles. "Then at least give me your number," she continued, hoping to maintain contact. "Why are you trying to go this far alone?" she asked, genuinely interested in his decision. Bob, looking at her, thought to himself, "You will all just be a nuisance. It's time for me to go," Bob said, preparing to leave the place. Woody stood in the circle, tensely waiting as events unfolded around him. "I'm scared to death. It's always been so dark here," he thought to himself, trying to cope with his fear. A fireball flew towards Woody, threatening destruction. He dodged the fireball, wondering how he managed it. A group of players ran towards him. Their intentions were clearly hostile. Woody continued to stand in the circle, trying to remain calm under the pressure of the approaching players. Woody remembered Bob's words about not going outside the circle and tried to stay within a safe barrier. Woody took his sword out of his inventory, preparing to defend himself. "Attack all at once, you bastards," he shouted, relying on his determination and anger. Woody parried the first attack, his sword meeting the blow. One of the opponents was rapidly flying towards Woody, trying to break through his defenses. Woody fell to the ground, losing his balance under the pressure. The enemy grabbed Woody by the chest, his face distorted in a grimace of anger and determination. He pulled out a dagger and was about to deal the killing blow to Woody, preparing to end his fight. Something knocked the enemy back, knocking him off balance and saving Woody from certain death. Woody coughed, trying to recover from being saved by an unexpected intervention. It was the phantom of the beginning of the heavenly demon. Bob left him to look after Woody. Bob walked through the forest, lost in thought and ready for the next stage of his journey. As a result, I lost a lot of time because the conversation lasted longer than I planned, the hero thought to himself. Suddenly, a stranger in a hood and mask appeared, his figure shrouded in mystery and darkness. "What did the warden leave here like this?" asked Bob. "Do you see my face?" the stranger asked. "Very clearly," Bob replied, remaining calm and attentive. The warden thought it was because of the skill of his eyes, realizing that Bob was able to see through his mask. Hypnos removed his mask, revealing his face and revealing his true self to Bob. "Truly amazed, I decided to become king as soon as the test began," he said, revealing his ambitions and intentions. "Let's get started," Bob said, ready to get started without any further delay. Hypnos thought to himself, but he is persistent. The hero activated the Dark Night, plunging the surrounding space into darkness and mystery. Bob began to fall asleep, under the influence of the dark magic of Hypnos, and his consciousness became a blurred line between reality and sleep. Hypnos approached Bob, his steps careful and confident as the darkness deepened around him. He pointed the dagger at Bob, his intent clear and dangerously clear. Bob was sleeping and Hypnos ran the dagger across his neck, creating a dangerous tension in the air. The main character took out his blade with lightning speed and struck Hypnos, interrupting his plans. Hypnos jumped back, surprised, his face showing shock and confusion. "Son of a bitch, you were faking it!" Hypnos shouted, realizing that Bob had not fallen for his trick. "It's not for you to tell," Bob answered with a smile, remaining calm despite the tension. "Such incitement will not change the outcome," Hypnos said, a little scared, but trying to remain confident. "I don't care," Bob said, showing no sympathy and focusing on his goal. Bob activated his eye skill and blade ability, filling them with power and preparing for the final blow. Bob also activated the power of the giants in his hand, giving his punch incredible power. "Self-confident asshole," Hypnos replied to Bob, expressing his contempt and irritation. They clashed in a furious battle, their strengths and skills colliding in an intense battle. Bob's blade emitted dark energy, illuminating his path with a dark light and amplifying his blows. Bob deftly dodged the attacks. His movements were precise and fast, repelling every attempt by Hypnos to reach his goal. Hypnos also dodged, his movements quick and calculated, trying to find a weak spot in Bob's defense. Bob noticed that Hypnos was using phantoms, creating illusions to confuse him. The hero quickly headed towards one of the phantoms, hoping to discover the true Hypnos among the illusions. Bob activated the heavenly flame, ready to dispel the illusions and deal the finishing blow. Hypnos tensed, aware of the danger. He noticed that Bob had disappeared for a moment. Hypnos swung his sword furiously, creating a whirlwind around him. Hypnos comprehended the secret of fire. With one powerful exhalation, he dispelled the flames as if they were just specks of dust on his clothes. Bob accurately calculated the trajectory of the attack, his eyes accurately scanning every movement of the enemy. Their blades clashed again in a fierce battle, sparks flying like lightning against the night sky. Their battle continued endlessly, each strike and parry becoming a frantic dance of strength and endurance. Hypnos skillfully defended himself. His every block was precise and impenetrable, like a stone wall. But in an instant, Bob discovered a loophole in Hypnos' protection. Lightning emanated from Hypnos, as if the storm itself had gathered around him. At this moment, Bob asked mockingly, "Are you not afraid of the manager at all?" "I serve only Olympus," Hypnos replied, with unshakable determination in his voice. Blood flew from Hypnos, cutting the air with scarlet drops. Bob quickly plunged his sword into Hypnos' back, piercing his armor and leaving a trail of misty fear in his wake. The dark blade absorbed his power, and Hypnos grabbed the blade as if trying to hold on to his life. "Son of a bitch," said Hypnos, his voice trembling with pain and surprise. Hypnos screamed, his scream like the sound of tearing fabric, mixing with the dull echo of fear and rage. He was bleeding, and every step he took left a bloody trail behind him, as if his life was flowing out of him along with every drop. "What kind of eyes are these?" he asked the hero. "This is the end," Bob said calmly. His voice was like a sentence, cutting off the last thread of hope. Hypnos was swinging to strike when a dark figure suddenly appeared behind him. The manager appeared, his every step sounding like a harbinger of inevitability. "Straight to the point, please explain," the manager said. His voice was cold and authoritative, like the blade of a knife. Bob watched with pleasure as Hypnos tried to justify himself to the manager. "This is entirely my initiative," Hypnos said on his knees, his voice trembling with humiliation and fear. "Do you take the blame upon yourself?" the manager asked, his voice laced with irony and imperious demands. "I am revoking your rights as a warden," the manager announced. Hypnos tried to argue that this was too much. "How dare you bark, mongrel?" the manager said with contempt. His words were like the blow of a whip, cutting off any attempt at resistance. "You will spend 1,000 years between life and death as punishment," the manager continued. His words were like a sentence. Hypnos pleaded, his voice trembling with despair, like the last spark of hope in the endless darkness. He screamed in horror, his screams breaking the silence, sounding like the last cry of the soul. "You son of a bitch!" Hypnos finally roared to Bob. His words were full of hatred and impotent anger. Bob waved at him, his gesture mocking and contemptuous like a farewell gesture. The manager turned to Bob, his gaze full of hidden threat and stern approval. "I deserve a reward, I'm entitled to it," Bob said. "A cocky guy," the manager said with a grin, his words reflecting respect for Bob's impudence. "Ha, you will receive a reward upon completion of the test," the manager replied. "You won't renegotiate this promise later?" Bob asked. "I'm a manager, don't you dare compare me with any rabble," he answered proudly, emphasizing his unquestioned power and status. Sam, hiding in the bushes, carefully watched their dialogue. He approached Bob when the manager disappeared and asked if it was all a setup. If the public finds out about this, everything will plunge into chaos, he continued, expressing concern for the consequences. No, not at all, answered Bob with a confident and imperturbable look. What are you planning to do now? Sam asked, his voice full of anticipation and interest. I will fight until I defeat Zeus, Bob answered with determination, his voice sounding ready for an endless struggle to achieve his goal. Sam was stunned. His eyes widened in surprise, and his thoughts immediately began to move in chaos. I just helped the blacksmith, and now I have problems with the Olympians, said Bob. I see, Sam answered, his voice filled with doubt and weariness, as if he was just beginning to realize the complexity of the situation. Please take care of yourself, Sam said goodbye. Let's return to the clan, Sam told his soldiers, his voice full of determination and the need to return. Woody cried with happiness. His tears were full of deep joy and relief. Bob returned to him, his gaze full of determination and satisfaction. Have I done something wrong again? Woody asked worriedly. You didn't break down and persevered, good job, Bob answered with recognition. Bob produced 600 flags, unfurling them in front of Woody as a symbol of victory and achievement. He handed them to Woody. The number of flags doubled, creating an impressive sight in front of Woody. They won the challenge, each flag fluttering proudly in the wind like a trophy. Bob was relaxing in his room, immersed in looking at the table. As a reward from the warden, he received 20,000 points. Bob was thinking about how Leo was doing. His mind was full of worries and worries. I'm very interested in what he's like now, Bob thought. The head of the clan sat at a table littered with papers, immersed in their study. Yes, even the manager was personally involved in this, Sam told him. I decided to tell you this personally, Sam added. Very interesting, the clan leader replied, his voice full of thoughtfulness. I think you said that our team had a sponsor from Asgard, asked the head of the clan. And it's only a matter of time before they find out about it. Meanwhile, Bob was preparing to throw the javelin, his face focused. He threw the spear with all his might. His throw was swift and powerful, like lightning piercing the air and heading towards its target. The rest of the participants were amazed by Bob's strength. His throw left them in amazement. Bob hit every target, each spear hitting its mark, demonstrating his impeccable skill. The main character set a new record. His achievements became a new standard for all participants. A modest reward, Bob thought to himself, his thoughts full of self-satisfaction. Bob was returning to his place, leaving the arena. His steps were confident and calm. Everyone applauded him, creating a storm of admiration and recognition for his outstanding skill and achievement. There was a day left before the start of the Murim War, and the entire atmosphere was filled with tension and anticipation. There was a lot of food on the table. The abundance of dishes was a luxurious banquet. The streets were busy. Noise and bustle reigned everywhere. We will pass the test, one character at the table shouted, his words full of determination. The character stood up from the table, ready to take charge and lead others to victory. I refuse, go away, Bob answered the girl with pink hair. I'm not interested, go away, Bob told the black guy, his voice full of detachment and determination. No, go away, he answered the elf with strange eyes. Go away, he told the blue dragon. Sariel appeared in front of Bob, his majestic figure and mysterious presence filling the space with special tension and anticipation. I won't contact you even if you give me your business card, Bob replied. Leo appeared and took the business card with a smile, as if he saw it as a chance to make a new contact. And he burned it, winking at Bob. What a pretentious exit, you too leave, said Bob. Just kidding, come in, Bob said to Leo, his voice becoming warmer and more relaxed. The door slammed shut in front of everyone else. You're rich, Leo said, his voice full of surprise and admiration at the luxurious decoration he saw. If we're going to rest, then rest comfortably, Bob said, his voice sounding satisfied. And a lot of them come to you, Leo asked. His interest was obvious. Yes, today is generally hard, Bob answered. Okay, I wanted to ask. It was you who prevented the arrest of Hephaestus? Leo asked. What problem do you have with Olympus? He continued, his voice full of curiosity. This incident affected Hera very much, Leo added. Does Zeus know about this too? Asked Bob. He is busy now, but Olympus is all ears. Be careful, Bob, Leo warned. I need to go somewhere. Will you come with me? Bob suggested. Let's go to Hephaestus, Bob continued. Meanwhile, Hephaestus was looking at the stone. His gaze was focused and penetrating, as if he was looking for a hidden meaning or secret meaning in it. Hephaestus was working on a new object. Each blow of the hammer was precise and purposeful. He slammed the hammer on the anvil, each blow breaking the silence and creating sparks. 3 days have already passed. I'm not going overboard, Hephaestus thought to himself. He wiped his face with a towel. His movements were tired. Suddenly, he noticed the door starting to open. His attention instantly focused on the unexpected visitor who could disrupt his work. Bob appeared in the doorway, his figure standing out against the light, and Leo came in after him. "Who's that guy behind you?" Hephaestus asked, his gaze wary as he assessed Leo with curiosity and a hint of suspicion. "My name is Leo," he replied, trying to sound friendly and confident to allay Hephaestus's wariness. "You also came for my soul?" asked Hephaestus. No way, I just came to see you, and besides, my friend saved you," Leo answered, trying to sound sincere. "I was taught from birth that you were a criminal," Leo added. "Bob opened my eyes to a lot of things, so I wanted to meet you in person to form my own opinion," Leo said, his voice full of sincerity and determination. "So what's the verdict?" Hephaestus asked, his voice full of curiosity and a hint of irony. "It's hard to say, I only saw your face," Leo answered. "What prompted you to stop making weapons for Olympus?" Leo asked. "The beginning of the war with the giants," Hephaestus answered heavily, his voice full of bitterness and memories of the past. Bob stepped aside a little while Hephaestus was about to tell his story, allowing him to focus and not be distracted. "The giants used to hold leading positions in the tower because of their natural strength," Hephaestus began to say, his voice thick with memories of past greatness and loss. "And the Olympians, who owed their existence to the giants, followed them," Hephaestus continued. "The giants, however, viewed the Olympians as allies," he added. "But one day the giants were stabbed in the back by a weapon forged by me," Hephaestus continued, his voice full of regret and internal conflict. "Thus began the war of the Olympians, led by Zeus and the giants," he continued. "And the reasons were greedy and political," Hephaestus added. "Everyone turned against each other, and so the war grew," Hephaestus continued, his voice full of bitterness and weariness from the endless conflict. "Since then I have ceased to work for the good of Olympus," said Hephaestus. "That's what prompted me to stop working with Olympus," concluded Hephaestus. Bob noticed how Hephaestus was holding himself back, gritting his teeth to keep from crying, his face contorted with suppressed emotion and bitterness. Leo couldn't believe it, his eyes wide in shock and confusion. "End of story," Hephaestus added. His voice was tired. "And who to believe is up to you. But I will still continue to oppose Olympus, turning away from Leo," said Hephaestus. "Hey, come on, your stuff is in stock," Hephaestus said to Bob, his voice friendly and businesslike. Bob followed Hephaestus silently, occasionally glancing at Leo. He'd be better off alone, Bob thought to himself. Leo clenched his fist, trying to cope with the emotional burden and figure out what to do next. "He seems like a nice guy. I can see why you brought him," Hephaestus said to Bob. "Are you planning to take him as an ally?" Hephaestus asked. "Just don't you dare drag me into this," Hephaestus added, his voice full of warning. "You don't trust him yet anyway," Bob said. "He's in an unstable period now," Hephaestus replied, and began to open the warehouse. "Here is your order. But he has a difficult character," said Hephaestus. "I gave the name of the glove myself, Caney," added Hephaestus, pointing to it. "Curious," Bob thought to himself as he approached her, his gaze focused on the detail. "Can I put it on?" Bob asked, his voice full of curiosity and anticipation. "Of course, that's why I created it," Hephaestus answered. "Will he be able to cope with her?" Hephaestus thought to himself. His thoughts were full of excitement and anticipation. Suddenly, Bob felt a strange energy begin to emanate from the glove, filling the air with a sense of power. A glow began to appear in front of Bob, softly shimmering and creating complex patterns that seemed alive and moving. An eye of a strange color appeared, its iris shimmering with an unusual light, and it watched Bob carefully, as if trying to assess his intentions and strength. The eye was huge. The light coming from it illuminated everything around, creating a mystical aura. The eye asked, "Who are you?" his voice deep and penetrating, filled with a strange power that made Bob feel the weight of every word. Well, I should be asking that, Bob thought to himself, feeling that the situation required his understanding and control. "I see. This is Caney's test," he thought to himself, and, gathering his courage, gave his name. The energy began to consume Bob, wrapping him in light. The egg tried to intervene, but Bob stopped him, his determination and will being strong enough to keep the situation under control. The egg's hatching rate increased and it began to flutter as if its inner world was awakening. Bob turned to the eye again, his voice full of confidence and determination. He asked, "Do you know what kind of egg this is?" The eye answered, "Yes." His voice was deep and confident. The eye began to disappear and Bob screamed in panic, "Wait!" his voice full of worry. Bob felt a hammer hit his head, and the world in front of him froze. It was Hephaestus who hit him to bring him to his senses. "Are you okay?" Hephaestus asked, his voice full of concern. "I was suddenly enveloped in dark energy," Hephaestus continued, his voice filled with anxiety and bewilderment. Hephaestus laughed, and despite the seriousness of the situation, he said, "You're okay." His laughter was a relief. "Well, fits like a glove," asked Hephaestus. "I was focused on what I saw," Bob said. "We need to get 2 more parts," he continued. The whole workshop was in a state of turmoil. "What happened there?" Leo asked, his voice full of surprise and concern. "Ask Bob. I just tapped a little with the hammer," Hephaestus answered with a grin, trying to relieve the tension. Bob stood with the new glove, feeling its strength and readiness for the test, his gaze focused and determined. "Are you okay? What was Hephaestus talking about?" Leo asked, his voice full of concern and curiosity. "I don't know," Bob replied, slightly confused. "You weren't fighting there," Leo continued, his voice full of bewilderment. "There's nothing to worry about. I really don't understand what happened," Bob replied, trying to calm Leo down. "Okay," Leo said. Bob asked, "Have you collected your thoughts?" "Not really. I need to meet Apollo and Artemis," Leo answered. The fact that he wanted to meet them meant that he wanted to look into the matter thoroughly, Bob thought to himself. "But, whatever the case, I will focus on the Miram War," Leo said, his voice full of determination. "First of all, I want to get more Olympians to know about me, to build my influence," Leo continued, his voice full of ambition and strategy. "I didn't expect you to care about things like that," Bob said. "Do you even realize that more than half of the high-ranking players will come to see you?" Leo said. "And there are also rumors that a very important person will take part in this war," Leo continued. Bob asked who. "Vice leader of the Heavenly Demon Cult," Leo replied, his voice full of seriousness and warning. "So, does that bring out the competitive spirit in you?" Leo asked. "But it's me," Bob said, his voice full of confidence. Leo was a little confused, his confidence wavering for a moment. What? Leo exclaimed, his voice full of confusion and surprise. "He's so noisy," Hephaestus thought to himself. "The post of deputy head was given to me as a reward," Bob said, his voice full of pride and satisfaction. "You do realize that your value would skyrocket if this became public knowledge," Leo said. "I wasn't planning on joining anyway," Bob replied. "Tomorrow will be fun," Leo said. The people in the stands were jubilant, their shouts and applause echoing throughout the arena, creating an atmosphere of wild excitement and support. "Who will get the expensive item?" the voice shouted. "The qualifying round is beginning," the voice announced, its voice full of solemnity and excitement. Baxter stood and smiled, his face glowing with satisfaction and joy. "A lot of people will recognize me," he thought to himself, realizing the significance of the moment and anticipating the attention. Suddenly, among the crowd, he noticed Bob, his eyes shining with surprise and interest. "That son of a bitch is here too," he thought to himself. "You're an asshole," he shouted at Bob. "You're in a red cloak," he continued to shout at Bob, pointing at his clothes and emphasizing his displeasure. Baxter tried to attack Bob. His movements were sharp and full of fury. Bob tipped it over and asked who you were, his voice full of confidence and calm. "Black hair, red cape? It must be Bob," Archie thought as he watched the scene. "If you don't attack, I will attack with my sword drawn," said Bob. Archie attacked Bob, his movements determined, as if he was ready for anything. Bob scattered everyone, including Archie. His blows were powerful and accurate, demonstrating his superiority in combat. "Damn, I can't move," Archie thought to himself. "Bob is through to the finals," the announcer shouted, his voice full of delight and triumph. "Leo is going to the finals," the voice shouted. Leo stood in the middle of the arena, his figure standing out among his fallen opponents. "He really is strong," Bob thought, watching Leo fight. "Judging by his skills, he was no worse than players of much higher levels," he continued, assessing Leo's abilities. "It's him," someone shouted to Bob. "Hey you, stay still," Baxter shouted to Bob. "Please excuse me, it seems that a disciple of our clan treated you rather rudely, coming out of the shadows," the stranger said. "My name is Beck. I am the leader of the Blue Blade clan." He introduced himself. His tone was official and confident. "I have come to offer you the opportunity to inherit our school," he continued. "Not interested," Bob replied, his voice firm and direct. "Well, I heard you refused everyone," said Beck. "Why ask if you already knew the answer?" Bob interrupted him. "We're much closer to a cult," Beck continued. "Well, good luck to you, goodbye," said Bob. Beck, putting his hand on Bob's shoulder, added with a hint of insistence, "Don't rush into decisions. Joining our cult is not an offer, got it?" said Beck, his voice becoming more insistent and threatening. "I thought I'd have a conflict about guilds one day," Bob thought to himself. "I refuse," Bob replied, removing his hand from his shoulder. Beck was about to attack Bob, his face contorted with anger and determination. I rely only on myself, Bob said. Beck drew his sword, his movements quick and confident. I always tried to use force when I refused. But this wouldn't be easy, Beck thought to himself. Although if you think about it, I have someone to rely on, Bob continued. What are you doing here? Asked the Lord of the Fist, his eyes boring into Beck's back. Bob, good to see you, greeted the Lord of the Fist. It seems that this man has started a fight with you. What do you order to do? Asked the Lord of the Fist, turning to Bob. Kill him here and now, the Lord of the Fist continued. No, even victory would only bring problems, Beck thought. If I had known you were already a member of the clan, I would not have approached you, said Beck. Excuse me, I'll go, he continued. Bob, holding back his emotions, watched silently as Buck, fulfilling his promise, quickly left without saying another word. It was you who started the rumor that the deputy chief would be participating in the Miram War, Bob asked Lord Fist. Yes, we spread rumors here and there. Forgive us, Lord Fist replied. We'll have to deal with the Blue Blade clan. They seem to be doing some strange things, Bob said. Bob entered the room where the head of the Heavenly Demon cult was already located. The chief carefully poured tea into the cup. Bob looked at him and asked why you were here. Bob thought to himself, this must be some kind of test. It can't be as simple as it seems. The protagonist noticed that despite the simplicity of the tea party, the cult leader uses the mana of the Heavenly Demon. Bob felt as if he was under a waterfall, where every drop of water was saturated with energy and power. I need to endure this and not break down, Bob thought to himself. Now I'm sure, said the cult leader, watching Bob struggle with the energy pressure. I need the Great Pill. That's why I'm participating in this tournament, Bob continued, explaining his participation. Pill? Excellent medicine, said the cult leader. It's time for our cult to descend from the heavenly mountain and strengthen its position. We recruit new people and conduct tests, he continued. This will help us identify the most promising and strengthen our cult. Are you sure? Bob asked. I, as I said earlier, am not fit to be deputy head. I can't act as deputy chief, but I can exercise my powers, Bob continued. But others might not like that. I am the leader, and as long as I recognize you, no one will touch you, answered the head of the cult. Do you want to prevent a second giant war? The chief asked. Yes, but what if the cult suddenly falls because of me? Bob asked. From now on, you are a member of the Heavenly Demon cult. Nothing else matters, remember that, the chief replied. Why are you so gloomy, Beck? Asked one of the group. You knew who the deputy head of the Heavenly Demon cult was, Beck said to the others. This is that talented and daring young man, and we must not let him win. We need a plan, he continued. The streets were busy with people walking and enjoying the day. It's amazing that the final was postponed, and the competition mode was suddenly changed to a brawl, Leo said. What do you think? He asked Bob. Who knows, Bob replied. The sooner we finish, the better. Why did you leave your guys again and come here? Bob asked. They went to have fun and go for a walk because today is the last free day, Leo answered. Let's hurry, it's time already, Leo said, fully prepared. Okay, let's go, said Bob. Apparently he was looking forward to this day, Bob thought to himself. Everyone around recognized Leo and Bob, never ceasing to be surprised by their presence. Bob noticed that the crowd was watching him even more closely today. The protagonist was surprised by Leo's silence, who seemed to have not said a word since they arrived. Sam stepped out of the crowd, attracting the hero's attention with his sudden appearance. Leo asked if you knew each other. Sam replied, yes, we were opponents in the same challenge. Sam and Leo exchanged a friendly handshake and welcoming smiles. Bob narrowed his eyes and asked Sam, did you want to say something? Be careful at the end just in case, Sam said, and nodding goodbye, continued on his way. Leo turned to Bob and asked him what he meant. The head of the cult moved slowly and imperiously down the corridor. The Blue Blade clan members sat immersed in conversation over cups of tea. One of the clan members stated with confidence that Bob would definitely die in the tournament. Suddenly, the head of the cult announced that it seemed our deputy was doing better than expected. Bob stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by many defeated opponents. The head of the cult, with an expression of confidence, said, I came by invitation. One of the guild leaders looked at the cult leader and said, You have come such a long way, Heavenly Demon. The head of the cult said with a stern look, I warn you, if you draw the blade, you will die by my hand. The character removed his hands from the sword, and the head of the cult, nodding approvingly, said, Well done, a wise decision. The head of the cult glanced at them and asked curiously what was wrong with your faces. I look angry, he continued. Bob continued to fight relentlessly in the arena, showing tenacity and skill in every move. He was surrounded by opponents who were trying to suppress him, but Bob remained cool and determined. Now the serious attack begins, he thought to himself. Bob engaged in a fierce battle with the enemy, their forces clashing in a fast-paced fight. The protagonist repelled the enemy's attack with agility and determination, not giving him the slightest advantage. "Is it just me, or is everyone aiming at me now?" Bob asked, casting a suspicious glance. The long-haired character coming out of the crowd said, "Do not be offended by injustice." Albert, looking at Bob, thought to himself, the conditions of the finale were changed for this. The rest continued to fight, oblivious to what was happening around them, focused on their own battles. "There's nothing to be offended about," Bob replied, focusing. Bob pulled out his sword and activated his magic skill, his weapon glowing with powerful energy, preparing to strike. Albert, he thought to himself, he really does live up to his reputation. "Attention, it's time!" Albert shouted, drawing everyone's attention to the beginning of the important moment. Leo destroyed everyone who got in his way. He stood next to Bob, ready to support him. "Hey, small fry, this isn't too much," Leo said, looking at his opponents with a determined expression. Albert, closely monitoring the situation, asked Leo if we could consider you to be on Bob's side. "And what if yes?" Leo answered, not hiding his determination. Leo instantly closed in on Albert, aiming to strike with deadly precision. Albert was thrown back with force and barely managed to stay on his feet from Leo's blow. He shouted to the others, "Deal with Bob. Leo is on me." Before he could finish speaking, Leo struck him again, not giving him a chance to recover. Albert was thrown back with force again and struggled to get back into his fighting stance. Leo glared at Albert, his gaze radiating confidence and menace. The rest of the characters were about to attack Bob, preparing for the final assault. Leo continued to fight Albert fiercely, each blow full of determination and strength. Albert deftly dodged Leo's blows, trying to find a moment to counterattack. Leo landed a powerful punch to Albert's chin, causing him to stagger from the force of the blow. "If you hadn't intervened, we would have easily destroyed Bob," Albert said, trying to regain his balance after the blow. Bob continued to fight the rest of the opponents, repelling their attacks and not allowing himself to relax. He swung his sword with power and precision, each blow piercing his opponent's defenses. "It's sad to see such useless bastards using such dirty tricks," Leo said, expressing his disdain. Leo delivered a powerful kick to Albert. Albert flew through the air, out of control, before landing on the ground with a thud. All the other opponents scattered in panic and fear. "Looks like we're the only ones left," Leo said, looking at Bob. "Ready?" Bob asked. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time," Leo answered with confidence. "I know you've been waiting, but first I want to ask you something," Bob said. "What the hell? Come on, hurry up!" Leo replied impatiently, not hiding his irritation. "You remember how I knocked you out with one punch?" Bob said. "No, I remember. How could I forget?" Leo answered. "Let me ask you a counter question. Do I look the same as I did that day?" he asked, watching the reaction carefully. They clashed in a furious fight. There was a powerful blow, stunning those around and interrupting the battle for a moment. Bob blocked Leo's strikes with his sword, each clash of metal creating sparks and shaking the air. Leo was in high spirits, his punches becoming faster and more accurate, filled with energy and determination. From the stands, nothing could be seen except clouds of dust and flashes of lightning illuminating the battle. "Please restrain your strength," Albert cried. Sam was blinded by the dust. His vision was clouded, and he could not see what was happening around him. Sam thought to himself, "Leo is the son of Zeus. I have heard of his strength, but I did not expect such power." Bob and Leo continued to fight, their strength and skill clashing in an intense and spectacular battle. Bob continued to fend off attacks with his sword. Bob was thrown back a little by the powerful blow, but he quickly regained his balance. Leo was extremely agile. His movements were fast and unpredictable. Bob blocked the blow again, his sword meeting Leo's attack with precision and stability. Suddenly, Leo noticed Bob's hand approaching his head. Bob grabbed Leo by the head, controlling his movement. "Again," Leo said, adding with anger, "Son of a bitch." There was a loud explosion, shaking the arena and interrupting the fight with a deafening sound. "Your sword is about to break and you're still willing to continue," Leo said, looking at Bob defiantly. Suddenly, Leo noticed a wound on his hand that began to bleed. "I didn't just take the punches," Bob said. They clashed again, their fight continuing with the same fury and tension. Leo focused on breaking Bob's sword, directing all his strength and strikes at the weapon's weak points. Bob's sword cracked under the pressure of Leo's attacks, making a cracking noise that foreshadowed his imminent end. Bob's sword broke from Leo's intense blows. "Not bad," Bob said, acknowledging Leo's skill. Bob activated the heavenly flame, and the entire arena was filled with its bright and powerful energy, absorbing Leo's lightning. Bob concentrated the power of the giants into his hand, and his power increased. He hit Leo in the face with amazing force, causing him to stagger back and feel the full force of the blow. Leo fell to the ground, losing his balance under the weight of the impact. Bob stood, steadfast and confident. The rest of the opponents lay unconscious, defeated in battle and unable to continue the fight. Bob looked at the broken sword, realizing that his weapon had played an important role in the battle. Leo lay prostrate, exhausted and defeated, his energy drained from the intense fight. Bob was declared the winner of the tournament, and his name was called out in triumph, recognizing his merits and achievements. "How did it feel to win?" he was asked. "It was fun," Bob answered, smiling, noting his satisfaction with the tournament. "Okay, we heard you," came the answer. "Here is your reward. Great Scarlet Pill," they announced, presenting Bob with his well-deserved reward. Bob accepted it with gratitude, realizing its significance and value. The cult leader watched with a smile, pleased with how events were unfolding and how Bob was receiving his reward. One of the guild members was unhappy with Bob's victory, his face expressing displeasure and irritation. The victory was truly a strong fighter, the rest of the guild said, acknowledging Bob's merits and his outstanding strength. The head of the cult thought to himself, and they were throwing mud at him just a minute ago. "Joe, why did you bring the occultists here?" asked the guild boat, puzzled by the presence of the head of the heavenly demon cult. "I didn't drag him in, but I formally proposed an alliance," Joe replied, explaining his action. "Or should he allow himself to be swallowed up by Olympus?" he asked, ironically hinting at the larger implications. "Muram's affairs must be decided by Muram," he continued. "Shame on you, Ben," said Joe reproachfully, expressing his displeasure. Ben turned to leave, deciding to leave the place. There was a slight smile on the face of the head of the cult, reflecting satisfaction with what was happening. "That this was my end," Ben muttered to himself, feeling bitter and disappointed at his situation. "I'll ask you one question before I leave," said the cult leader, attracting the attention of everyone present. "Who among those present is Beck?" asked the cult leader, waiting for an answer. "I'm done for," Beck thought to himself. Sweat broke out on his face, reflecting his anxiety and tension. Bob stood in the cave, his figure silhouetted against the darkness. He sat down and took out a pill from his inventory, preparing to use it. "It certainly won't be easy. I remember that from a past life," Bob thought to himself. Holding the pill in his hand, events from his past life flashed through Bob's mind, bringing back memories and anticipation of what was to come. Bob swallowed the pill, feeling its energy begin to work inside him. He felt pure mana spreading throughout his body, filling him with strength and energy. His whole face was covered in sweat, reflecting the intensity of the internal process and the enormous efforts he was making. "Please, somebody save me!" Screams were heard in the forest, filled with panic and despair. The two young giants were shaking with fear, their faces expressing horror. "You shouldn't have messed with demons," one of the mercenaries said with a smile. "Tell me where the sea stone is," said Horang. "But that's just nonsense," replied the young giants. "They say that these giants hid the stone somewhere," the character said, taking out his blade and preparing for action. Horang pointed his blade at the young man and said that no one would care if a few giants died. A figure appeared on the path in the distance, approaching the scene and attracting the attention of everyone present. "What kind of son of a bitch is this?" said Horang, watching the approaching figure with distrust and irritation. That figure was Bob, walking confidently and purposefully towards the group, despite the threats and tension around him. He felt his senses heighten. Every sound and movement seemed more distinct and intense. The hero activated a new skill, Sensory Field, and his perception expanded, allowing him to sense the surrounding space with incredible accuracy. The mercenaries looked at him warily, their gazes full of anxiety. The young giants also froze in anticipation, warily watching Bob's actions. "Get lost," said Bob, drawing his blade and showing his readiness for action. Bob charged, his blade glinting in the light, his movements full of determination and strength. The hero approached one of the mercenaries, his presence inspiring fear. "You can't get involved," the mercenary shouted, realizing that a confrontation with Bob was inevitable and dangerous. "Wait, I've already seen your face, you're Bob," Horang said, recognizing him and realizing who was standing in front of him. "This is Bob," Boar said questioningly to his sister, surprised and wary at the appearance of the famous hero. The mercenaries argued among themselves, discussing how best to deal with Bob. The mercenaries decided to retreat, realizing that continuing the conflict with Bob was too risky. "Fucking giants, you're lucky today," Horang said, expressing his irritation and resentment before leaving. "Thank you for saving us," the giants said to Bob. "Why didn't you try to fight?" Bob asked, surprised that the giants showed no resistance. "Who are you, from Olympus or Asgard?" Buar asked incredulously. Noir tried to calm her brother down. "Do you think he would help us just like that?" Buar answered her, trying to explain the situation. "You're a smart one," Bob replied, appreciating Buar's insight. "You see, he is also looking for the Stone of the Seas," said Sister Buar, explaining why Bob ended up here. "Calm down, I know you don't have the stone. I want to meet a giant," Bob said. "Urfa, I want to meet him," Bob continued, clearly expressing his desire to find and talk to this giant. "The elder does not receive anyone," answered Buar, clenching his fists in excitement and irritation. "Let's go, Noir," tried to take Sister Buar away, insistently pushing her to leave. "Wait, brother. I contacted the elder. He wants to see Bob," she replied, confirming the importance of the meeting. "Then let's go," said Bob, preparing to go to the meeting place with the elder. They raced through the forest on wolves, quickly covering the distance. "I don't understand why the elder decided to meet with him," Buar said. Bob followed them on the back of his wolf, sitting confidently in the saddle. "He has some kind of illusion skill since he subdued the wolf so quickly," Buar continued. "Anyway, I don't think he can be called an ordinary person," Noir replied. "Don't you dare fight him, brother," Noir said, warning her brother. They arrived at the place and Bob got off the wolf, preparing for the upcoming meeting. Drop the poo," Buar said to the wolf who licked Bob. They stood in front of a large tree, majestic and ancient, which served as a gate. "Well, what do you think? This tree can neither be cut down nor burned," said Buar. "Yes. The great tree burned in the Second Giant War," Bob thought to himself, remembering the events of the past and their consequences. "I'm coming," Bob answered the young giants, showing his readiness to move on. "From now on, watch your behavior carefully," Buar told Bob, reminding him of the importance of following rules and manners. They entered the village, which was glowing with blue light, creating a mesmerizing atmosphere. "What the hell is this, man?" the villagers whispered, surprised and worried by Bob's appearance in their village. "He is with Buar and Noir." Probably a guest, they thought, trying to understand what brought Bob to their village. "Don't pay attention, you are the elder's guest, you have nothing to fear," Noir told Bob. They approached a huge hut that looked impressive, as if it were the center of power and respect in the village. "Elder, are you there?" asked Buar, approaching the door of the hut. The door swung open and a voice came from inside. "Come in." Bob seemed dwarfed by the majestic silhouette in the hut, which looked imposing and commanding. "Pleased to meet you, human child," Urfa said, greeting Bob with respect and interest. "What's your name again?" Urfa asked. "I'm getting old, so my memory is starting to fail me," he continued, apologizing for his forgetfulness. "Bob said his name, right? Little Hephaestus was talking about you," Urfa noticed. "If you value your life, stop going against Olympus," Urfa said, warning Bob of the possible consequences of his actions. "I heard you're a pacifist," Bob replied. "But really, you're just afraid," Bob continued. "You dare to mock me," Urfa began to get angry. "Olympus is preparing for war. Are you going to sit and wait to be exterminated?" Bob asked, expressing dissatisfaction and concern over the passivity of Urfa and his people. His eyes, a very firm look, Urfa thought to himself, assessing Bob's determination and confidence. "You really are as fearless as I have heard," Urfa began, surprised by Bob's fortitude and courage. "You are right. If I just hide, holding my breath, then our extermination is a matter of time," Urfa continued. "I know that you are looking for the Stone of the Seas, and I know where it is," said Urfa. "And why did you decide to tell me?" Bob asked, surprised that Urfa had shared such important information. "I have 2 reasons for this," answered Urfa, preparing to explain his motives. "The first is the recommendation of little Hephaestus. The second is that you," Urfa fell silent, leaving the intrigue. Bob walked down the stone path. He was just looking at the stone, Bob thought to himself. Urfa's words about the second reason flashed through my mind when he called Bob the strongest player of this era. Well, I'll soon find out the location of the sea stone, Bob thought. The tree is huge, he continued talking to himself, thinking about the upcoming search. Bob looked at the huge branches of the tree, amazed by their scale and grandeur. He imagined himself jumping on them, maneuvering between the branches with dexterity. The hero decided to train to prepare for the upcoming test. He began to test how many sacred flames he could control at once, focusing all his strength into controlling this powerful skill. Lights fell from the sky, illuminating the area around Bob and creating a mesmerizing display of flame and light. He dodged the fires using his fiery eyes, which allowed him to predict the trajectory of attacks and react instantly. Using multiple strong skills at once made him feel dizzy and lightheaded from the intense concentration. He fell to the ground, unable to stay on his feet due to dizziness and the strain of the powerful skills. As he expected, the effect was stunning. "What the hell, so you were here?" A voice suddenly broke the silence. "Little ant," said the giant Quantum, assessing Bob with mild disdain. So you're a cool thing, but I only hear rumors, she continued with a hint of disdain. Aunt, Bob said to himself. She tried to punch Bob, but he stopped her fist with his hand, demonstrating his strength and agility. Puppy, you're laughing now, she said, clearly unhappy that her attack had been stopped. Bob twisted her arm, making her feel how serious he was. The two giants stood silently, watching as Bob effortlessly knocked her over, demonstrating his superiority. Call all your friends, I'll play with you as much as you want, said Bob, preparing for the upcoming clash. What, he defeated Vulcan and Turkin? Asked Buar, amazed by what he heard. Bob knocked over another giant, confidently demonstrating his superiority in battle, and the next one too, one after another, slamming them into the ground with his powerful attack. He used the giant's skill, increasing his strength and attack range. Attack all at once, not one at a time, Bob said, causing the giants to unite to attack. Bob stood, surrounded by giants, preparing for the next wave of attack. If he himself asks for it, we should respect the guest, Buar said to his sister. Wow, even those two came, Bob noted to himself. They look impressive, Bob continued to think, assessing the approaching giants. My fists were itching from the first second. Let's see what you can do, famous Bob, shouted Buar. Don't be shy, Bob replied, and Buar and Bob's eyes blazed with determination. Buar jumped and attacked Bob. His strength and speed were impressive, but Bob easily dodged it using his eye skill. Buar attacked Bob again, but he continued to dodge, using his skills and experience. Bob easily intercepted Buar's attack and used his strength to knock him to the ground. As Noir approached and swung to stab Bob in the back, he noticed her approaching. Bob stuck his tongue out at Noir, showing off his fighting spirit. Noir's blow caught Bob off guard and he was thrown back. Taking advantage of the moment, Buar attacked again, intending to use the force of his blow to finally break Bob. Bob actively dodged Buar and Noir's attacks using his skills and reactions. Their fists moved inexorably towards Bob. Bob flew into the air, using Hermes' sandals to avoid the blows. In the air, Bob used his skill to maintain control of the situation and prepare for the next move. Bob bought the Hermes sandals from the store on the 11th floor. Bob landed on the ground with a powerful slam, creating a shockwave that pushed the giants back and caused them to stagger back. Noir, caught in the middle of the strike, was slightly injured by the shockwave. Bob launched himself into the air again using his sandals. Buar, looking at the state of his sister and at Bob, who had just performed an impressive maneuver, was shocked and could not hide his anger. Bob was simply playing with them, moving with incredible ease and dexterity, having fun in battle. Noir and Buar were already tired and looked exhausted, their attacks becoming less coordinated and energetic. Buar gathered his remaining forces and prepared to deliver a final powerful blow, deciding to put an end to this battle. Bob activated his fire eyes, his gaze filled with bright light, and he focused on Buar. Buar was filled with energy. His attack became furious and destructive. He sought to use all his power to finally defeat Bob. Bob decided not to dodge this blow, but to go straight ahead. Buar's fist flew past Bob's eyes. He felt a powerful flow of mana spreading around, creating a hurricane effect. When Buar missed, his attack went wide and he was left in a vulnerable position. Bob did not miss the opportunity and took advantage of this chance. I have won, he said with confidence, watching as his opponents remained defeated and exhausted. The giants whispered among themselves, surprised by what had just happened. Noir watched Bob. Amazed by his abilities, she knew that her brother had put all his strength into that blow. You are truly worth something, Bob said, extending his hand to Buar. We're standing there for some reason. Buar looked at his hand. Tomorrow I'll take revenge, said Buar, shaking Bob's hand. Bob sat and ate with the giants, enjoying the relaxed atmosphere. Why so much meat? Bob thought, surprised at the abundance of food on the table. You need to eat a lot, Buar shouted, tucking into the meat. I'm going to the 20th floor test tomorrow. There won't be any fighting, Bob said. What's wrong with you, Noir? Bob asked. I remembered our fight, she answered. You have become stronger in these 10 days, she continued. Will you have time to find the stone? Asked Buar. Could the stone have something to do with the floor test? Buar continued. Yes, Urfa told me, Bob replied. Why did the elder tell you about him? Asked Buar. I don't know, answered Bob. He said I was the strongest player, Bob continued. I don't understand why the elder did this. It's all because of that damned legend, Quantum said angrily. Calm down, Noir said, trying to calm her down. Quantum remained angry, but tried to remain calm. Bob wiped his mouth with a napkin. Noir continued to worry. I have to go, Bob said, getting up from the table and preparing to leave. Quantum tried to hit Bob, but he easily dodged it. confidently remaining on his feet. Bob grabbed Quantum and held her down, stopping her attempts to break free. Bob pinned Quantum face down on the table, her arms pinned tightly to her back. "The Elder was trying to protect you," Bob said. Bob released Quantum and walked away, leaving the giants confused. Quantum shouted after Bob, "You still won't be able to win the test." "Oh, calm down," Buar told her. Buar was lost in thought for a second, wondering how his future meeting with Bob would go. Bob fell onto the huge bed, tired after a hard day. Bob thought he needed to get a good night's sleep before the test to be in better shape the next day. Bob felt his glove begin to emanate mana. It seems that the sea stone is indeed connected to this. Perhaps it influences the energy balance. Perhaps the stone really is close, which could explain why its influence is felt so strongly. If the stone has the same energy as the glove, it can be the source of a similar effect. "The stone will be the key to the solution," Bob said out loud. "I feel Kanane's hunger to find the missing part of himself," Bob said. "Come to me, said Bob. The space in front of Bob began to change, and soon, mysterious visions and images appeared before him. The island stood in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by stormy waves and thick fog, as if the ocean itself was trying to hide it from prying eyes. There were many wild animals in the forest, moving cautiously between the trees, making alarming sounds. "Just like a training island," Buar said, looking around with interest. "Remember how you almost got eaten by a chimera?" Noir said, smiling and remembering the past. "Well, that's it, we saw you off," as the Elder said. "Even we coped with this test," said Buar. "I think the test will be bigger than usual," Noir said, looking at Bob a little warily. "These are new times for the giants. Take care of yourselves," Bob said as he left. Mercenaries were approaching them, and the giants stayed behind to hold them off and let Bob escape. "Grab him, we can't let him get to the test," the mercenaries shouted, rushing forward. Buar landed a knee strike on one of the attackers, knocking him out. Noir didn't lag behind either, knocking out one of the mercenaries with a quick and precise blow. Why did they suddenly change so much, the mercenaries thought. "Now we will fight with one of the mercenaries by the throat," Buar declared, his voice resolute. "You were unlucky to fall into our hands," Buar said with a smile to the one-eyed mercenary. "So Bob has sided with the giants," said Theseus, the 20th floor examiner. "The giants even accompanied him," the servant continued to say. "It's still strange that they help him," Theseus said. Theseus remembered Poseidon's words. If Theseus finds the stone, he will call it his son. Could Bob possibly be connected to the stone in some way? Theseus wondered. "I see no other reason for their union," said Theseus. "We failed to stop Bob," the mercenary said. Bob stood on the edge of the cliff, ready to jump into the abyss, thinking about the test ahead. "I made it in time," he thought to himself, looking into the abyss. Bob jumped off the edge of the cliff, feeling the wind whistling in his ears. Bob sank into the water, feeling the coolness envelop his body. Turning on his flaming sight, Bob instantly noticed glowing figures moving in the depths and streams of energy pulsating through the dark depths. The bottom was literally strewn with monsters of various shapes and sizes, viciously moving and looking for prey. The Yellow Eye watched the other players closely, analyzing their every move. "Find Bob and stop him from winning," said Yellow Eye. "Okay, let's move out. We need to split into 2 groups," said the leader, his voice sounding decisive and confident. The 2 characters standing on the rock froze in surprise as they saw a huge wave rise from the water. They immediately prepared for battle, grabbing their weapons and taking up fighting stances. Bob suddenly appeared behind them. "Wait, it's Bob!" one of the characters exclaimed, seeing the hero behind them. "I take it you guys are from Olympus," Bob said. "How did he know?" the head thought. "Someone let it slip." "Judging by your faces, I hit the nail on the head," Bob continued. "Wait, don't run away," he continued. "I'm not going to fight you. You'd better think about the monsters," Bob added. Huge snakes began to approach them across the sea. "Damn, how many of them are there?" the chief shouted. "Sorry, I changed the test a little," Bob said, drawing his blade. Bob headed towards the crowd of monsters that were approaching by land. The fanged monkeys jumped on Bob, ready to tear him to pieces. Bob wasted no time in meeting them in battle. He quickly used his skills and glove, repelling the monkeys' attacks and delivering powerful blows in return. The hero understood that his actions could attract the attention of Olympus, and that they would probably begin to suspect that he was planning something more. Bob noticed a new wave of monsters approaching from the horizon, their massive bodies and ominous forms gradually filling the space. The protagonist noticed how the huge turtle, which had been motionless until now, began to move. Bob walked towards the huge sea turtle, which was slowly awakening. The earth continued to shake and the monsters seemed maddened, their rage growing. Theseus, watching what was happening, understood that the situation was becoming more and more critical. He, looking at the raging chaos around him, couldn't help but wonder what Bob was up to. The hero, noticing a major change in the test, said out loud that the rules had been changed. How was that possible? Theseus stood with his servant near the rocks, carefully watching what was happening. Theseus, shocked by what was happening, exclaimed, "What the hell? Once the test is over, I'll tear Bob to shreds," he continued. The people from the Blood Wolves clan lay on the ground. Theseus noticed Suktar, the giant titan, standing in the distance, his mighty fiery figure standing out against the chaos. The situation is heating up, and Theseus, noticing Suktar approaching, said, "Are you trying to ruin my test?" The Blood Wolves pounced on the two young giants, and Suktar intervened, saying, "I had to intervene. You don't like something. Are you trying to provoke me?" "Know that I can answer," Theseus said. "Ha ha ha, who gives a shit?" answered Suktar. "We are fulfilling the will of the Elder and will not allow anyone to touch Bob," Suktar continued. Meanwhile, Bob continued to break through the endless number of monsters, his determination growing stronger with each step. This is Suktar standing there. Finally, the big guys have joined in, Bob thought to himself as he continued to fight the monsters. We can't let him down. Olympus must be left with nothing, Bob continued to think. The main character quickly jumped into the turtle's mouth. Bob flew through the air, feeling his body rushing towards the target. The black mouth of a turtle opened in front of him. He plunged into her insides, where a new challenge awaited him. Inside the turtle's mouth, Bob discovered even more monsters swarming in the darkness. "Great, everything is according to plan," said Bob, confidently moving forward. "Just a little more and the stone will be mine," Bob said, continuing to fight his way through the hordes of monsters. The monsters didn't diminish. Their numbers only grew, as if the turtle itself was trying to stop Bob. Finally, Bob defeated the monsters, who had run out of strength and were breaking through their ranks. Bob noticed a huge wave approaching him, spreading across the water and turning into a deadly water whirlwind. He knew he had to act quickly to avoid danger and prepared for his next move. The hero fought his way through the monsters again, facing their powerful attacks and breaking their ranks. Every move was precise and calculated. His blows carried destructive force, and his determination knew no bounds. He understood that in this chaos, he needed to survive and move forward in order to achieve his goal. Bob looked around for the stone, his attention focused on every detail of the environment. He knew the stone could be anywhere. He felt the energy pulsating around him, pointing to the source. Bob knew he had to act strategically to conserve his strength for the challenges ahead. Activating the heavenly flame, Bob gathered himself, broke through the monsters and approached the heart of the mana. Bob attacked the monsters with incredible fury, cutting through them with the help of heavenly flame. The protagonist thought to himself that it was as if he had fallen into a snake pit. He thought, "Where are you all coming from?" Bob fought with the monsters that were climbing from all sides, surrounding him. The hero realized that he was burning up his mana faster than it was being restored, and this created additional difficulties in battle. He adjusted the glove on his hand, preparing for further battle with the monsters. "I've been fighting them for over an hour now," Bob continued to think, feeling tired and under the pressure of the ongoing battle. Finally, Bob reached the place where he calculated that the stone should be. "Are you having a party here?" he asked, looking at the monsters swarming the place. The main character quickly rushed into attack. Bob activated the glove's power. Its glow flared up, filling the space around with blinding light. "The stone of all the seas will be mine," Bob said confidently. The monsters were looking forward to destroying Bob, preparing for the final offensive. The monsters pounced on Bob, unfurling their massive jaws and claws. Bob focused all his power into the glove, feeling the energy build up and bubble up inside. The hero struck the monsters with great force, releasing concentrated energy from his glove. A flash of light and a blast of energy scattered the enemies, creating a path to the stone. Bob, overcoming the swirls of energy and debris, continued his journey towards the stone. The monsters seemed to be endlessly emerging from the darkness, and with each passing moment their numbers only increased. It felt as if the mana itself was flowing in the form of these creatures, supporting their endless number. "Just a little more," he repeated to himself, concentrating all his strength on achieving his goal. The eye suddenly shone with a bright light, sensing the proximity of the stone. Bob fought to the limit of his abilities, using all his strength and mana to fight his way through the endless waves of monsters. He gathered all his anger and determination into one powerful blow. Finally, he destroyed the power source, and the stone hidden inside became accessible. The monsters froze in stupor as soon as the mana heart was destroyed. They began to disperse, returning to their hiding places and disappearing into the darkness. Bob stood in a pool of blood, his armor and gloves covered in bloody marks. The smell of decay and darkness still lingered around him. Bob wiped his face, freeing it from drops of blood and sweat. He noticed that some of the monsters were still standing in place, as if waiting for his command or order. He was willing to do whatever it took to get the stone and complete his trials. When Bob grabbed the stone, its energy instantly permeated his body, filling him with power. Suktar and Theseus continued to argue, their voices intertwined in a tense dialogue. Their differences were reflected in every word they spoke, but both understood that further action had to be carefully thought out. The turtle burped loudly, and the vibrations from the sound reverberated across the surface of the water. A huge wave was approaching Theseus, threatening to wash him away from his place. The loud noise of the water became louder and louder, and the wave itself was visible. What the hell, he thought. Could Bob have gotten hold of the stone? Theseus continued to wonder, realizing that his opponent could have achieved his goal despite all the obstacles. Are you leaving already? Suktar asked, looking at Theseus, who was clearly preparing to leave the place. Yes, I called the chariot, Theseus answered. I'll go, and the red wolves will take care of you, Theseus added. He raised his trident up and said, Everything is fiery for now. Keep up the good work, he added. What a bastard you are, Theseus, replied Suktar. Theseus jumped into the fiery chariot, and it roared toward the horizon, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. The red wolves launched a furious attack on the giants, fighting them in a brutal battle, tearing and destroying everything in their path. The carnage was immense. The battles raged with incredible fury, and bloodshed overwhelmed the battlefield. Suktar was slightly horrified by the scale of the carnage as he watched the forces clash in a merciless fight. Theseus, noticing the monsters despite the chaos that reigned around, Theseus, noticing Bob among the monsters, realized that this was the moment to act decisively. Bob, walking confidently through the water, felt the stone in his hand fill him with strength and confidence. You're a pimple on Olympus's ass, Theseus shouted, trying to get Bob's attention to his threat. If you want a stone, take it, Bob answered. He demonstratively held the stone in his hand while ignoring Theseus's threats. I'm a little tired. Come on, move your butt, Bob said confidently, continuing to hold the stone. Theseus, unable to bear the rage, quickly attacked Bob, relying on his strength and desire to return the stone. Theseus, in midair, swung his trident, creating powerful and destructive blows, trying to break through Bob's defense and return the stone. Bob, confident in his abilities, grinned and said, Weakling? Theseus shouted in rage. How dare you say such a thing, you scum? Bob replied, So you're wasting your time? Maybe we should fight already. Theseus missed again, his trident piercing the air but not touching Bob. The heroes' faces met very close. Bob, looking at Theseus, said mockingly, Masila. It is not clear why, but Theseus, in a rage, began to wave his trident furiously. Theseus tried to look graceful and elegant, but his movements became increasingly clumsy from rage. Bob deftly parried Theseus's attack. Will you fight or not? Bob asked, while Theseus, furious, clenched his teeth. Theseus suddenly thrust his trident into the ground. He shouted with fury in his voice, I am the illegitimate son of Poseidon, and launched a powerful stream of water at Bob. Theseus, tired of the intense struggle, felt his strength begin to leave him. Bob, using the sandals of Hermes, quickly dodged the stream of water that passed him. But Bob was still exhausted from fighting monsters, and fatigue began to accumulate. You even missed with the jet, Bob said, continuing to mock Theseus. Fucking asshole, Theseus thought to himself. Bob decided to play his trump card. The main character smiled and suggested, Let's play poker. Theseus answered firmly, No, and attacked Bob again. They clashed in battle, each trying to find a weak spot in the enemy's defense. Theseus, surrounded by a whirlwind of his own failed attacks, rushes past Bob with a desperate look, who only just manages to dodge. Bob used the sandals of Hermes to explode the space beneath him in an instant dash. Bob, as if knowing Theseus's every move in advance, dodged. Theseus, clenching his teeth in anger, thought, This trickster almost brought me to the boil with his damn tricks. Bob's fiery eyes, like two bright beacons, picked out every tiny detail of the path to predict Theseus's next step. Bob clenched his fist and resolutely shouted in his mind, I've had enough of these games, it's time to end. Why are you smiling like that? Theseus asked warily. Now you'll find out everything, Bob answered with a mysterious smile. We must retreat, Theseus's servant cried in panic. Suktar killed almost all the red wolves, the servant added. He is incredibly angry, added the servant, clearly trembling with terror, as if the very fire of Suktar's wrath might at any moment consume them all. And the damned snakes are crawling out of every crack, the servant continued. I'll have to get out of here, Theseus thought to himself. And here's the last straw, Bob muttered to himself. Run, run, weakling, Bob said mockingly. Retreat, Theseus shouted, calling for the chariot as his last hope for salvation. They jumped into the chariot as if escaping from the last spurt of fate. Cowardly, stinking Olympians, roared Suktar, his voice sounding like furious thunder. Suktar swung, his hand flying through the air like a storm. But Theseus was already racing through the air in his chariot like lightning. Seriously, Suktar and Bob thought to themselves, realizing that their opponent had gotten away. We stopped hiding. That's also an achievement, Suktar said, holding back a smile. I have the stone, Bob said, his voice confident. 2 mugs clinked at a feast. The giants celebrated their long-awaited victory, their loud cries and joyful shouts filling the air like echoes of a great triumph. They feasted and laughed merrily, as if every laugh were an expression of liberation. Bob was resting, relaxing in his chair, as if his attention and energy were being renewed after a stressful day. Maybe I should go to them, he thought. What is my next step, he thought, weighing his options and planning. He decided to write to Hephaestus, hoping that the wisdom and help of this god of forging would help him determine his further path. Hephaestus sneezed and a fiery spark escaped from his nostrils. It's strange why I feel cold, he thought. A second later, Bob was in front of him, holding the stone of all the seas in his hands. Why are you scaring me like that? Hephaestus asked, looking at Bob in surprise. Bob only smiled in response. It's all my new sandals, Bob replied. Hephaestus, muttering slightly, continued something unintelligible. Well, you've got the stone, said Hephaestus, his gaze full of surprise and approval. Bob yawned, indicating that his interest in the current discussion was beginning to wane. Go to sleep, and I'll take care of the stone, Hephaestus said, with a slight nod, suggesting that Bob rest. I think if you combine them, you get something supernatural, said Hephaestus. Can you do it? Bob asked, waiting with interest. Hephaestus. Of course I can. And you go to sleep, Hephaestus answered with a confident smile. Or else I'll knock you out with a hammer, Hephaestus continued with a humorous subtext. Okay. I'll go now, Bob replied, waving his hand in a relaxed manner. How long will it take you? Bob asked. 10 days, and then we'll still need adamantium, Hephaestus answered. Now go before I knock you out, Hephaestus shouted loudly after Bob, adding a touch of humor and threat to his farewell. It's fun with him, Bob thought as he walked down the street. Okay, what about the egg? Bob thought. The hero wondered what to feed him. Why? Poseidon shouted at his son Orion, his voice thundering, full of anger and disappointment, like a storm at sea. I told you Theseus was useless, father, Orion replied. Besides, Zeus forbids direct confrontation with the giants, Orion continued. What do giants have to do with it? It's all about Bob, shouted Poseidon. Poseidon threw furniture around, his rage turning everything around into chaos. Fuck Zeus, Poseidon shouted, his voice full of hatred and contempt. I'll break the globe, thought Poseidon, grabbing it. Some brat found the stone of all the seas, said the man on the throne. A simple player and so strong, thought another character in the forest. I wonder if I'll ever get a chance to fight him, Asura thought, dreaming of the opportunity to test his strength in combat with such a powerful opponent. Bob. So that's who got the crystal of all the seas, somewhere in the caves of the Marble Mountains, said another character, his voice full of awareness and surprise. I can't wait to see what happens next, he continued. Bob stepped out of the chariot onto the edge of the forest, looking around carefully, ready to face any surprises that this place might throw at him. I wonder how many more of these chariots there are, Bob thought. Okay, time to get down to business, he said, determined to get down to business and not waste time thinking. Bob headed into the forest, his steps confident and purposeful. Ahead, a portal was visible, sparkling with a mystical light. Bob approached the portal, his eyes focused on the flickering light. The protagonist took out the broken sword that was given to him as a reward. He thrust the broken sword into the portal and it immediately began to sparkle. He watched the changes closely, hoping that the right action would lead to the desired result. The tower loomed majestically before Bob, its dark walls seeming endless. Bob realized that this was not just a test, but a chance to uncover secrets that could change his path. Bob became alert when he felt something approaching. The fire hyenas emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing with an ominous light. He swung his blade, preparing to attack, while focusing on using his skills. Bob slashed at the fire hyenas, his blade flying like lightning, cutting them into pieces. Leaving behind the burnt remains of the hyenas, Bob headed towards the entrance to the tower. The tower doors responded to Bob's touch with a soft, rattling sound. Opening the gate, Bob saw a gloomy corridor in front of him, illuminated by a dim light. The walls were made of dark stone, and the air was thick with ancient dust. Bob felt that something important and decisive was waiting for him inside the tower. The sound was unclear, but it clearly indicated an approaching threat. Bob froze in place, listening. He braced himself to face the new enemy, ready for action.